Chapter 261. The Law of the Jungle. Meanwhile, Duan Lingtian came to an understanding. Perhaps competition existed between the peaks of the seven-star sword sect. The facts proved that Duan Lingtian's guess was correct. Lu Chu slowly said, within the seven-star sword sect, the outer court disciples of the six sword peaks have a martial competition every year. The outer court martial competition is divided into two phases. The first phase is each peak deciding on the strongest 10 people. These 10 people will participate in the second phase of the outer court martial competition. The second phase of the outer court martial competition will be a competition between the 6 peaks, and the 60 most outstanding outer court disciples will compete against each other. As he spoke up to this point, the corners of Lu Chu's mouth curled into a bitter smile. It had been very long since a Megrez Peak outer court disciple had taken the first place. Outer court martial competition. Many people's gazes shone, but some shook their heads. We've only just entered the seven-star sword sect. Once we participate in the outer court martial competition, we'll only be asking for a beating. We perhaps might be able to show off ourselves in the outer court martial competition in a few years. The people that shook their heads whispered amongst each other. HMPH. Lu Chu snorted coldly when he heard the words of these people. All of you, listen well, not every outer court disciple has the qualifications to participate in the seven-star sword sect outer court martial competition. Only outer court disciples who have been in the seven-star sword sect for less than 3 years have the qualifications to participate in it. In the sect for less than 3 years. Some of the outer court disciples who had just entered the seven-star sword sect showed neither approval nor disapproval when they heard what Lu Chu said. Even then, there's no lack of existences at the 5th or 6th level of the origin core stage amongst those outer court disciples. Exactly, to us, encountering an existence at the 5th or 6th level of the origin core stage is no different from encountering an existence at the 7th level of the origin core stage. However, in this way, so long as another 2 years passes, we ought to be able to show off our skills. You're right, Of course, there were also some outer court disciples who looked forward to the future and imagined themselves being in high spirits in the outer court martial competition. Elder Lu, when is the next outer court martial competition? Duan Lingtian looked at Lu Chu and asked curiously. He was interested in the outer court martial competition. As a top sect in the Azure Forest Imperial Kingdom, the seven-star sword sect ought to not be stingy with rewards. Lu Chu's face was slightly gloomy, but when he heard Duan Lingtian, his expression eased up slightly, then he turned around to look at Duan Lingtian. The next outer court martial competition will be held 6 months from now. Duan Lingtian nodded. Lu Chu withdrew his gaze and shook his head. He originally thought that the person who asked him this question was a person that was confident enough to participate in the outer court martial competition 6 months from now. When he saw Duan Lingtian's age, he dispelled this thought. As far as he was concerned, even if his natural talent was any higher, a young man that wasn't even 20 ought to only be a first-level origin core martial artist, and the young man might not even be able to break through to the second level of the origin core stage 6 months from now. It was utterly impossible for a person like this to obtain any good results in the outer court martial competition, even to the extent that it would be impossible for him to obtain one of the top 10 places in the Megrez Peak. It's good to be confident, but being overconfident, that's arrogance. Huo Xin couldn't help but be stunned when he heard Duan Lingtian ask this question to Lu Chu, and now that he'd recovered from his shock, he couldn't refrain from ridiculing. Duan Lingtian had a carefree expression. It was as if he had not heard what Huo Xin said at all. In half a year, at that time, he ought to be able to break through to the 5th level of the origin core stage. Eventually, Duan Lingtian followed behind Lu Chu and arrived at a stone platform on the way up Dubi Peak. This stone platform was much narrower and smaller, and it seemed crowded when 20+ people stood together. Behind the stone platform was a chain bridge that was made of chains that were buckled together. It led to a sword peak in the south. That's Megrez Peak. Duan Lingtian looked at a precipitous mountain that was coiled by mist and clouds in the distance, and his gaze abruptly shone. This mountain stood there as if it had transformed into a sharp sword that pierced through the sky, giving one a peerlessly fierce and swift feeling, captivating one's mind. Lu Chu took the lead and brought along the group of outer court disciples to walk up the chain bridge. The chain bridge started swaying once the group of people stood atop it. So high, oh my god, if we were to fall from here, then not a shred of us would remain. What a pile of nonsense. That would happen without a doubt. Instantly, besides Duan Lingtian, The remaining outer court disciples that had only just entered the seven-star sword sect exclaimed in shock, and a small amount of people had ghastly pale expressions. There are people who have a fear of heights in this world. Duan Lingtian shook his head, and his gaze descended onto the other end of the chain bridge. This chain bridge was at least 300 or 400 meters long, connecting Megrez Peak to Dubi Peak, and was undoubtedly an extremely large amount of work. This chain bridge ought to have been connected by experts at the void-prying stage or above. Duan Lingtian thought in his heart, and the vision before his eyes swayed. It was as if he could see the time the seven-star sword sect was established and figures flew past in the sky carrying iron chains in their hands. Sure enough, the predecessors planted a tree, and their descendants enjoyed the shade. Duan Lingtian couldn't help but sigh emotionally. Lu Chu stood at the side and his gaze quickly descended onto the violet-clothed young man, and it completely froze there. Among the 20 new outer court disciples that he'd brought over, this violet-clothed young man was the youngest, but now when on the chain bridge, the most composed was undoubtedly this young man. If the violet-clothed young man was originally a disciple of the seven-star sword sect and was able to be composed when walking on the chain bridge, he wouldn't find it strange. But this violet-clothed young man had only come here for the first time and had stepped onto the chain bridge like stepping on flat ground. After all, below this chain bridge was a bottomless chasm. Even when he'd just entered the seven-star sword sect all those years ago to become a seven-star sword sect outer court disciple, his heart couldn't help but tremble when he walked on this chain bridge. Finally, Lu Chu couldn't refrain from looking at Duan Lingtian and asking, "What's your name?" This young man caused him to feel slightly unable to see through him. He'd been in the seven-star sword sect for many years, but it was still the first time that he had such a feeling towards a person who'd just entered the sect. "Elder Lu, are you asking me?" Duan Lingtian was stunned, and seeing Lu Chu nodding to him, Duan Lingtian lightly smiled. "I'm Duan Lingtian." "Duan Lingtian, Lingtian, your name is truly domineering." Lu Chu's face emitted a trace of a rare smile. "Elder Lu, you're too kind." Duan Lingtian lightly smiled in a neither humble nor arrogant manner. HMPH. When Huo-Shin noticed Lu Chu taking the initiative to talk with Duan Lingtian, a trace of hate out of jealousy flashed within his eyes. Even he, who was an outer court disciple who'd entered the seven-star sword sect 2 years ago, Lu Chu had never once talked to him in such a friendly manner. "I noticed you were daydreaming as you looked at the chain bridge. What were you thinking of?" Lu Chu looked at Duan Lingtian and touched his goatee as he asked curiously. Duan Lingtian's gaze once again descended onto the chain bridge when he heard Lu Chu's question, then he lightly smiled. "Actually, it wasn't anything. I was just thinking that this bridge is at least 300 or 400 meters long and must have been personally built by a group of void-prying stage experts. Otherwise, it would be utterly impossible to complete such a large task." PFF'd. Lu Chu hadn't even said anything when Huo-Shin couldn't refrain from ridiculing. Our seven-star sword sect's 6 chain bridges are famous within the Azure Forest Imperial Kingdom. Who doesn't know that the 6 chain bridges of our seven-star sword sect were completed by void-prying stage experts? The other people looked at Duan Lingtian as well with gazes that were slightly off. Duan Lingtian paid no attention to this and only shook his head and smiled. Only Lu Chu glanced deeply at Duan Lingtian and then asked, "You didn't know of our seven-star sword sect's chain bridges in the past?" Duan Lingtian shook his head. "Elder Lu, I'm not from the Azure Forest Imperial Kingdom, I'm only someone who's from a kingdom under the rule of the Azure Forest Imperial Kingdom. Before today, I'd never heard of this marvelous chain bridge of the seven-star sword sect. If it's really like this, then your power of observation is rather strong." Lu Chu nodded, but in his heart he was shocked to the extent that waves crashed within his heart. This violet-clothed young man that wasn't even 20 was actually from a kingdom under the rule of the Azure Forest Imperial Kingdom. Since when was a mere small kingdom able to possess such a genius martial artist? HMPH. So you're just a bumpkin from a small place. The corners of Huo-Shin's mouth curled into a slight sneer, and he was even more disdainful of Duan Lingtian in his heart. As far as he was concerned, what ability could someone from a small kingdom possess? Duan Lingtian naturally noticed Huo-Shin's gaze of disdain, but he still maintained his carefree expression as if he didn't notice it. Huo-Shin was even more unrestrained when he noticed this, as he thought that Duan Lingtian was like this due to being afraid of him. Meanwhile, the group of people had walked over the chain bridge to arrive at Megrez Peak. After walking off the chain bridge, what entered their eyes was a spacious, stone platform, and a building stood atop the stone platform. After hearing Lu Chu's explanation, Duan Lingtian came to a sudden understanding. So it turned out that this was the location where the disciples of Megrez Peak ordinarily bought and exchanged both medicinal pills and spirit weapons. Here, one was able to spend gold and silver to buy medicinal pills and spirit weapons, or they could use materials to exchange for medicinal pills and spirit weapons. On the northern part of the Seven-Star Sword sect, there was a primeval forest that was vast without boundary, and within it were various medicinal materials and ore deposits that were inexhaustible. Unless a Seven-Star Sword sect disciple was born from a rich family, they would all enter the primeval forest to search for materials to exchange for medicinal materials and spirit weapons for cultivation and to increase their strengths. Of course, within this primeval forest was an exceedingly large amount of savage fierce beasts. Allegedly, there were even quite a few demon beasts deep within this forest. So this primeval forest had also become the ordinary location where many Seven-Star Sword sect disciples gained experience and trained. All of you can use the Megrez Peak Disciples command token to receive your outer court disciple attire. After you receive your attire, each of you can find your own places of cultivation around the entire Megrez Peak. All of you can seize a location that was already taken by another, but you must not kill another. As he finished speaking, Lu Chu's gaze became fierce. We can still seize the place of cultivation of another. Many new outer court disciples were stupefied. Looks like the Seven-Star Sword sect tacitly consents to the competition between sect disciples. Duan Lingtian couldn't help but sigh emotionally in his heart. The environment within the Seven-Star Sword sect was similar to the law of survival within nature, the law of the jungle. 1 TL note. I've mentioned this reference in chapter 100 if anyone has forgotten. 261 Chapter 262, Secret at the Cliff. After warning the group of outer court disciples that had just entered the Seven-Star Sword sect, Lu Chu turned around and left. Duan Lingtian followed behind the group of outer court disciples as they went together to receive their sets of outer court disciple attires. After getting his attire, Duan Lingtian looked around his surroundings and was slightly surprised. That Huo Xin is gone. He originally thought that now that Lu Chu had left, based on the hostility that Huo Xin had towards him, he would probably make a move against him. But now Huo Xin had vanished. Could it be that he noticed something? Duan Lingtian was slightly curious in his heart, and his first thought was that Huo Xin had noticed that he wasn't so simple. However, would that Huo Xin have such sight? Duan Lingtian was extremely doubtful in his heart. Perhaps he suddenly encountered an urgent matter, Duan Lingtian thought secretly in his heart. However, since Huo Xin wasn't present, Duan Lingtian didn't think over it any longer. He prepared to look for his place of residence and cultivation on Megrez Peak in the future. He could imagine how some of the good places on Megrez Peak would have surely been already occupied by another. So if he wanted to find a place with a good environment, then he must use martial prowess to seize it from the grasps of another. This was something that Duan Lingtian didn't feel averse to. The Cloud Continent was a world where the strong were respected, and it ran on the basis of survival of the fittest. My top priority right now is to find a good place. Duan Lingtian was clear in his heart that there was no point in thinking too much now, and he must first find a target before taking action. Hiss hiss, right at this moment, a burst of noise sounded out from beneath Duan Lingtian's sleeve. It was the two little pythons who had awakened from their slumber. Duan Lingtian walked into a remote area of Megrez Peak, then he let the two little fellows out. In the next moment, his pupils couldn't help but constrict at first glance of the two little fellows. Hiss hiss, the two little pythons shook their heads and flicked their tails at Duan Lingtian, and their pairs of gold and silver eyes flickered with a sheen of complacency. You two little fellows actually broke through. Duan Lingtian was slightly speechless. He remembered clearly that this morning when he left Black Bamboo City, these two little fellows were only at the 6th level of the nascent soul stage. But just now, his sharp spiritual force perceived that these two little pythons had broken through. Broken through to the 7th level of the nascent soul stage. A trace of complacency flashed within the eyes of the two little pythons when they saw Duan Lingtian being surprised. They flicked their tails then opened their mouths to reveal sharp teeth that flickered with an icy cold luster, as if trying to tell something to Duan Lingtian. Duan Lingtian vaguely guessed what the two little fellows meant, and he asked uncertainly, "You two want to get even with little gold?" The two little fellows nodded like humans, their movements identical as if they had virtually rehearsed it. Duan Lingtian chuckled to himself, as he never expected that he would really understand what the two little fellows wanted to express. Little Black, Little White. You two temporarily might not be able to get even with Little Gold. The two little fellows became restless when they heard this, and they transformed into two bolts of lightning that flashed out as if they were searching all around for something. In the end, they returned back to Duan Lingtian's hand in disappointment, and their eyes stared at Duan Lingtian as if they were asking him something. Little Gold is with Kaur, and Kaur isn't by my side. Duan Lingtian shrugged, then he shook his head as he consoled in a light voice, all right, I'll bring the two of you to look for it when I'm free. As he spoke, Duan Lingtian put the two little pythons that had faces full of reluctance back into his sleeve. He was slightly helpless towards the grudges the two little fellows bore towards Little Gold, and at the same time, he silently mourned for the Little Gold Mouse. Unless the Little Gold Mouse broke through as well, it is impossible for it to be a match for Little Black and Little White. Megre's Peak is so big, I wonder where a good place for cultivating is. Duan Lingtian walked up the peak for some time, and all the way he saw many sunken gorges on the mountain, but he wasn't really interested in these gorges. There was practically no light within these gorges, and they could be said to be in complete darkness within. Unknowingly, Duan Lingtian noticed that he'd already arrived at the peak of Megre's Peak. There was no railing to hold on to at the peak, and with a single mistake, one might fall down the bottomless chasm and be shattered until nothing remains of one's self. Standing on the peak, what entered his eyes was boundless clouds and mist, and his line of sight was completely obstructed. Looks like it isn't an easy matter to find a suitable place of cultivation. So cold, Duan Lingtian could feel the cold wind that came at him from the front. It blew on him to the point that his body felt slightly cold, and he couldn't help but tighten his clothes. I'll go down and take a look. The place that chain bridge connects to is already near the peak of the mountain. There should be more choices below. On his way up here, Duan Lingtian had noticed some gorges that although were habitable, there were no people within. Obviously, those gorges were places that were rejected by everyone. Right when Duan Lingtian was about to walk down. Whoosh, whoosh, his sleeve expanded and black and white bolts of lightning flashed out. Little Black, Little White, what are you two doing? Duan Lingtian noticed that the two little pythons actually stood at the side of the peak, and with a slight bit of carelessness they would very likely directly fall down. For a time, Duan Lingtian's expression completely went pale. Hiss hiss, unexpectedly, the two little pythons seemed to be completely unaware of their dangerous situation and instead turned around to flick their tongues at Duan Lingtian. Two mischievous little fellows. Duan Lingtian was slightly helpless as he walked over, then he slapped out with his palm to directly grab the two little pythons in his hand. Little Black, Little White, knock it off. Let's hurry up and go down. Aren't you too afraid of falling and being shattered into pieces? As he finished speaking, Duan Lingtian glared at the two little pythons. Hiss hiss, unexpectedly, the two little fellows got restless again and directly struggled out of Duan Lingtian's hand and then returned to the side of the cliff. They nodded to Duan Lingtian, then slapped their tails on the cliff a few times as if they were trying to express something to Duan Lingtian. What do you two want to tell me? Duan Lingtian frowned. He looked at the two little pythons, then slightly stuck his head out to look at the cliff, but in the end he didn't notice anything. The other side of the cliff was incomparably precipitous. He could imagine that if he were to fall down from here, he would surely be shattered into pieces, and even a god that came down to the mortal world wouldn't be able to save him. Hiss hiss, in next to no time, a scene Duan Lingtian never expected appeared. The two little python actually slid down along the side of the cliff and disappeared before his eyes. Little Black, Little White. Duan Lingtian's face went ghastly pale, and he held on to the side of the cliff and stuck half of his body out. What entered his eyes were boundless clouds and mist, and the two little pythons had completely vanished. Little Black, Little White. Duan Lingtian's expression was extremely unsightly, as over these few years, he'd long since taken these two little pythons as family and didn't take them purely as fierce beasts. Now they'd fallen down the cliff just like this. A trace of melancholy appeared within Duan Lingtian's eyes, and extreme regret arose within his heart. He shouldn't have come to the peak of Megre's Peak. Now these two little fellows were gone just like that. Hiss hiss, hiss hiss, comma. Suddenly, Duan Lingtian's pupils constricted, as he vaguely seemed to have heard something, like the sound of the two little pythons flicking their tongues. However, when he lowered his head to look, he instead noticed that his vision was filled with clouds and mist, and there was no sign of the two little pythons. Could it be that I'm hallucinating? A trace of doubt arose within Duan Lingtian's heart, and the more he thought about it, the more sure of it he was. Hiss hiss, but these hallucinations are really too strange, right? It still hasn't stopped. Whoosh, whoosh. Right at this moment, Duan Lingtian noticed that the cloud and mist in his vision dispersed, and the figures of the two little pythons appeared before his eyes. It was precisely Little Black who'd swung its tail to clear away the clouds and mist. Only now did Duan Lingtian notice that on the other side of the precipitous cliff was actually a tilted tree that grew straight out of the cliff. What was strange was that this tilted tree grew out of this desolate cliff, but it was actually lush and dark green, and it appeared to be full of vigor and vitality. Its thick trunk stuck into the side of the cliff and was firm like Mount Tai. Before long, the clouds and mist floated over it again and once again obstructed Duan Lingtian's line of sight. Whoosh, 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 This time, the two little pythons went berserk together and swung their tails to completely disperse the clouds and mist that were obstructing Duan Lingtian's line of sight. The tilted tree once again appeared before Duan Lingtian's eyes. Not only that, Duan Lingtian also noticed that the two little pythons were signaling him to come down as well. You two little fellows, I'll trust you two once, don't make me die. Duan Lingtian took a deep breath as he stared fixedly at the tilted tree, then he stomped his feet and flew downwards to firmly stand on the trunk of the tilted tree. Needless to say, this tilted tree was extremely firm. Duan Lingtian's body that was 1.8 meters tall and 150 plus pounds descending onto it actually didn't cause the trunk to show signs of swaying in the slightest. Little Black, Little White, have you two noticed something? Duan Lingtian looked at the two little pythons with a wondering expressions. Now he'd realized that these two little pythons weren't rash or out of their minds but had instead noticed something. Hiss hiss, Little Black nodded to Duan Lingtian, and its golden eyes stared at the cliff before it. Little White's silver eyes now stared fixedly at the cliff before it as well. Is there something here? Duan Lingtian stepped on the trunk of the tilted tree and walked forward slowly, then he touched the cliff with a bewildered expression. Whoosh! A black bolt of lightning flashed by. It was Little Black who'd ran into the cliff. Little Black! Duan Lingtian's face went grim. Even if Little Black was able to knock out a hole in the cliff, running into the cliff at such a speed would surely cause it to be knocked down the bottomless chasm by the force of rebound, and it would surely die. However, in the next moment, the fear on Duan Lingtian's face disappeared and was replaced by astonishment. Because Little Black's body had actually drilled through to the back of the cliff and vanished before his eyes. There was another small hole on the cliff. Whoosh! Meanwhile, Little While moved as well and similarly went through the small hole in the cliff to enter it. Hiss hiss, right when Duan Lingtian was still stunned, the sound of the two little pythons flicking their tongues sounded out through the small holes that they had drilled out. Could it be that there's a hidden cave within? Duan Lingtian's eyes squinted as he seriously sized up the cliff before him. Before long, he noticed an inkling. 262 Chapter 263, 10,000 Year Stalactite Milk. Duan Lingtian noticed that around the part of the cliff that the tilted tree was stuck into, traces of moisture was emitted in the area around 2 to 3 meters around it. This was completely different from the other parts of the cliff. Moreover, this part of the cliff had a slightly darker color than the other parts of the cliff. If one didn't carefully observe it, one wouldn't notice it. Hiss hiss, the sound of the two little pythons sounded out from behind the cliff and passed through the two small holes to echo out, seeming to be urging Duan Lingtian to quickly come in. You two little pythons wouldn't be wanting me to learn from you two and force my way in, right? The corners of Duan Lingtian's mouth curled into a bitter smile. He looked down to glance at the bottomless chasm beneath the tilted tree and a trace of coldness arose within his heart. Bang! Right at this moment, a loud noise echoed out. It was the sound of knocking from the inner side of the cliff, and the sound of knocking was deep and powerful. Duan Lingtian knew that this activity was surely caused by those two little fellows. Just when he was curious about what the two little fellows wanted to do, he instead noticed that the cliff before him had actually cracked open, and crack after crack spread out. These cracks became like a spider web in the blink of an eye, enveloping half of the cliff. Could it be? Duan Lingtian's gaze couldn't help but light up when he saw this scene, and at the same time he shouted in a low voice. Little Black, Little White, move away. Hiss hiss, the sounds of the two little fellows flicking their tongues grew further and further away. Duan Lingtian took a deep breath and clenched his right hand into a fist, then origin energy suffused onto his fist. Above him, 71 ancient mammoth silhouettes condensed into form as if they were hunting on the sky, ready to dash out at any time. Suddenly, Duan Lingtian moved. He pulled back his right arm abruptly as if pulling back the string of a bow, then in the next moment, his fist shot straight out as if transformed into a cannonball, fiercely smashing onto the cliff before him. Bang! An ear-piercing explosive sound echoed out. The cliff that already had countless cracks on it was shattered by Duan Lingtian's fist strike. Stone pieces and stone chips flew out to fall down into the bottomless chasm. The sound of them hitting the ground couldn't be heard. Duan Lingtian's gaze abruptly lit up when he saw the scene behind the cliff. However, the swaying that came from beneath his feet caused Duan Lingtian's face to go grim, and his heartbeat raced. At this moment, he was truly worried that he would fall down into the bottomless chasm along with the tilted tree. Luckily, at the critical moment, the swaying tilted tree returned to peace and held on. It's truly terrifying. My heart nearly jumped out. The corners of Duan Lingtian's mouth curled into a bitter smile and had a slight lingering fear. But when his gaze once again returned to the space behind the shattered cliff, he instead seemed to have forgotten his great trepidation from earlier and had a face full of excitement. Whoosh! Duan Lingtian exerted force with his feet and seemed to transform into a spirit serpent as he flashed into the space behind the cliff. There was really a hidden cave behind the cliff after all, and it was a naturally formed cave passage. If it wasn't for the two little pythons discovering this cave, not to mention him, even if Rebirth Martial Emperor arrived here personally during his peak, he would still be unable to discover this place. In certain aspects, the ability of a fierce beast was far beyond the reach of humans. Whoosh, whoosh, the two little pythons transformed into bolts of lightning and returned onto Duan Lingtian's hand, then they nodded to Duan Lingtian before swinging out their tails to point to the cave. You two want me to go in and take a look? Duan Lingtian looked at the two little fellows and lightly smiled. The two little fellows hurriedly nodded like humans. Duan Lingtian let out a deep breath and slightly loosened up his stiff nerves from before, then he walked towards the inner part of the cave in large strides. Even if the two little pythons hadn't reminded him, he would have still gone in. This place was extremely strange, and it revealed mysteriousness from every corner, causing Duan Lingtian to have a desire to explore it until the end arise within his heart. This passage within the cave was full of twists and turns. Not long after Duan Lingtian walked in, he noticed total darkness before him. However, this wasn't a problem. With a strand of pill fire burning in Duan Lingtian's hand, the entire cave was instantly bright as day, allowing him to continue walking forward slowly. Hiss hiss, suddenly, the two little pythons that were coiled on Duan Lingtian's hand seemed to have sensed something and were extremely excited. Duan Lingtian took a few more large strides forward. Whoosh, whoosh, instantly, the two little pythons transformed into black and white bolts of lightning and flashed forward. Duan Lingtian didn't hesitate when he saw this and his body moved to follow the two little fellows. Spirit Serpent Movement Technique. At the corner in the front, Duan Lingtian noticed that the two little pythons had stopped, and their gold and silver eyes were looking into the distance in stupefaction. Duan Lingtian looked over curiously as well. That is, Duan Lingtian saw that at the end of the cave passage before him, a trace of a gentle, white light actually flickered there. Now only that, as he stood here, Duan Lingtian could still clearly feel the origin energy within his body pulsing. And the origin energy within his dantian seemed to start boiling as well. What's that place? Duan Lingtian had a face full of astonishment, then he put out the pill fire in his hand, as this place didn't need the light of a flame to illuminate it. Duan Lingtian brought along the two little pythons to walk towards the end of the cave passage step by step. This was the center of the Megrez Peak. Before long, Duan Lingtian left the cave passage and stepped into a space that was bright as day. The air here was slightly cold, and Duan Lingtian couldn't stop himself from shivering when he'd just arrived here. But when he carefully sized up this place, he was completely dumbstruck. This space that was bright as day was around the size of an ordinary room, and in the front was a natural pond. Within the pond was a puddle of milky white liquid. Drip. A clear sound echoed out by his ears, and Duan Lingtian clearly saw a drop of milky white liquid dropping into the pond, causing circles of ripples that spread out. Duan Lingtian abruptly raised his head to look above him. A large stretch of stalactites appeared before his eyes. This type of stalactite, Duan Lingtian searched through the memories of Rebirth Martial Emperor. After a short moment he came to sudden enlightenment, and his pupils couldn't help but constrict. This is 10,000-year stalactite milk. 10,000-year stalactite milk. According to the memories of rebirth Martial Emperor, stalactite milk formed from 100-year-old stalactites could be used as medicine, but its effects were minimal. Stalactite milk formed from 1,000-year-old stalactites had extremely high effects, was able to nourish origin energy, and to a certain extent was able to slightly increase one's natural talent in the martial Tao. However, stalactite milk formed from 10,000-year-old stalactites were of the highest grade. Once 10,000-year stalactite milk was formed, the medicinal effect of it was even better than 1,000-year stalactite milk. Even rebirth Martial Emperor who'd experienced 2 lifetimes only encountered 10,000-year stalactite milk once during his second lifetime. And it was precisely that fortuitous encounter that allowed the natural talent in the martial Tao of rebirth Martial Emperor's second lifetime to increase to a monstrous state, and the time he used to cultivate to the Martial Emperor stage was only 50% of the time he spent doing so during his first lifetime. What sort of notion was this? The 10,000-year stalactite milk was able to increase a person's natural talent in the martial Tao to a monstrous state. I've struck it big. I've struck it big. Duan Lingtian's face flushed red and he was extremely excited. He'd never imagined that his luck was so good. He'd only just entered the 7-star sword sect and only just entered Megrez Peak, but he'd encountered the 10,000-year stalactite milk that one could find by luck but not by searching for it. Moreover, that pond of 10,000-year stalactite milk, it was at least. Duan Lingtian was thinking in his heart, and subconsciously looked towards the puddle of milk in the pond. This glance instead made his eyes nearly split. Little black, little white. Duan Lingtian's pupils constricted, and his voice was filled with an ear-piercing howl that was slightly exasperated. Heavens! What had he seen? The 2 little pythons were currently greedily sucking the 10,000-year stalactite milk, and in a short moment, half of the puddle of milk was eaten by them, an entire half. At the instant that Duan Lingtian looked over, the 2 little pythons had already lied down in satisfaction and fallen asleep with their bloated stomachs. On their bodies, the gold and silver markings flickered with a light luster. The corners of Duan Lingtian's mouth twitched, and he wished for nothing more than to expel the 10,000-year stalactite milk from the stomachs of the 2 little fellows. So much 10,000-year stalactite milk, and half of it was swallowed by them in the blink of an eye. Duan Lingtian walked over and took out a few unused pill bottles, then he filled the bottles with the remaining 10,000-year stalactite milk. After cleaning out the puddle, Duan Lingtian raised his head to look at the 10,000-year stalactites above him. He noticed that another drop of 10,000-year stalactite milk hadn't dropped down after a long time. According to this speed, this 10,000-year stalactite milk will probably need a few months before being able to drip down another drop of milk. Duan Lingtian guessed. Duan Lingtian's gaze descended onto the 2 little pythons who had fallen asleep with bloated stomachs, and he thought in his heart while filled with curiosity, these 2 little fellows swallowed so much 10,000-year stalactite milk, it can be considered to be a great fortune. I wonder how they will change in the fortune. The 2 little pythons were both very and fierce beasts and already had extraordinary talent that was not inferior to the little gold mouse who was a jade-eyed heavenly mouse. Now, after swallowing so much 10,000-year stalactite milk that was able to increase natural talent, they would surely be even more heaven-defying in the future. Even though it's cold here, it is full of spirit energy. It's a good place to cultivate in. Duan Lingtian found a stone platform at a side of the cave and sat down. His eyes narrowed and he circulated the 9 Dragons War Sovereign Techniques Worm Python Form Mental Cultivation Method. Duan Lingtian could clearly feel that at this place, the origin energy within his dantian boiled, and when he cultivated, his advancement was incomparably swift. Even the place with the most abundant spirit energy in the 7-star sword sect's main peak, the Dubi Peak, might not be able to compare to this place, Duan Lingtian secretly thought in his heart. I never imagined that there actually existed such a place in the 7-star sword sect's Megrez Peak. These stalactites have already formed for 10,000 years and are even older than the history of the 7-star sword sect. The members of the 7-star sword sect have obviously not discovered this place, otherwise, the 10,000-year stalactite milk would have long since been cleaned out. After an unknown amount of time, Duan Lingtian slowly opened his eyes. He noticed that his cultivation at the 4th level of the origin core stage had completely stabilized. I originally thought it would at least take 3 to 5 days for my cultivation to stabilize, but I never imagined that within this 10,000-year stalactite cave, it would be done within 1 cultivation session. Duan Lingtian's face revealed a sense of pleasant surprise. 263 Chapter 264, Reborn. The cultivation environment of the stalactite cave caused Duan Lingtian to be extremely surprised. If this place was discovered by members of the Seven-Star Sword sect, it would very likely be directly called a sacred place. Duan Lingtian couldn't help but snicker when he thought of this. The Seven-Star Sword sect had been established for a few thousand years, but they didn't notice the abnormality of the Megrez peak, and it had now benefited him. Before long, Duan Lingtian withdrew a pill bottle that was filled with 10,000-year stalactite milk, then he opened the bottle and directly drank it all. Instantly, Duan Lingtian felt a warm current fuse into his body, fuse into his flesh, lifeblood, and bones, practically covering every corner of his entire body. For a time, Duan Lingtian felt his entire body being warm and comfortable, and the coldness of the stalactite milk didn't make him feel uncomfortable again. Continue. Duan Lingtian withdrew another pill bottle and swallowed the 10,000-year stalactite milk within it. This time, the warm current from the 10,000-year stalactite milk once again covered Duan Lingtian's entire body, and at the same time, the warmth on his body grew. Duan Lingtian felt the pores on his entire body seem to open up because of it, and it was unspeakably satisfying. Satisfying. Duan Lingtian couldn't help but spit out a mouthful of foul air. Meanwhile, he felt sticky on his body, and when he lowered his head to look, he noticed that a large amount of impurities had been expelled from his body, washing the meridians and cleansing the marrow. Duan Lingtian's gaze abruptly shone, as he knew that his body had already been completely changed by the 10,000-year stalactite milk, and his current body could be considered to be the most perfect body for cultivation. My current body has already reached the utmost limit of peak natural talent. The origin energy on Duan Lingtian's body flickered to remove the impurities on his body, then he stretched his body and felt refreshed. One only needed to consume a certain amount of 10,000-year stalactite milk to be able to completely change their constitution and be completely reborn. 2 bottles of 10,000-year stalactite milk allowed Duan Lingtian to complete a perfect change of his constitution. Even throughout the entire Cloud continent, there wasn't anyone who could surpass his current natural talent in the martial Tao. Of course, the size of the Cloud continent was something that was difficult for an ordinary person to imagine, or perhaps at a corner of the Cloud continent, there was someone with a similar fortuitous encounter like Duan Lingtian and had encountered the 10,000-year stalactite milk. But even then, it would be impossible for the natural talent of that person to surpass Duan Lingtian's, and at most it would be equal to Duan Lingtian's. In next to no time, Duan Lingtian was stupefied, because he noticed that his hands had lost their former bronze color and had become rosy. Duan Lingtian felt like weeping but had no tears. The delicateness of his current skin even slightly surpassed K'er's and Li Fei's. My face. Suddenly, seeming to have thought of something, Duan Lingtian's face went pale, and he hurriedly stretched out his hand to touch his own cheeks. In next to no time, his face completely fell. He noticed that his face was now as smooth as jade and was delicate to the point that it seemed that his face would be easily damaged with the flick of a finger. The thing he didn't want to happen the most had happened. Now he could be considered as a genuine pretty boy. I nearly forget that after consuming the 10,000-year stalactite milk, at the same time that my meridians are washed, my marrow are cleansed, and my constitution are completely changed, the entire skin on my body returns to the delicateness of when I was a baby. Duan Lingtian had a bitter smile on his face. How would he show his face in public in the future? Although he was vexed, Duan Lingtian knew that milk was already spilt, so he didn't continue to think about it. He moved his attention back to the 10,000-year stalactite milk that he'd collected. The 2 little fellows ate half the 10,000-year stalactite milk. I collected 18 pill bottles from the remaining half. I consumed 2 bottles, and another 16 bottles remain. 16 bottles, 4 bottles for K'er and Li Fei, and another 2 for my mother. As for Little Gold, it would probably need 8 or 9 bottles. In this way, it's more or less finished. Duan Lingtian sighed. There was too little to go around. Duan Lingtian let out a breath, then he closed his eyes to continue cultivating. 9 Dragons War Sovereign Technique, Worm Python Form. His cultivation now advanced at an entire 2 times his speed from before, and the effect of the 10,000-year stalactite milk was completely revealed. After a long time, Duan Lingtian opened his eyes when he felt hungry. He retrieved a suckling pig from within his spatial ring, and after he roasted and ate it, Duan Lingtian burped. Duan Lingtian glanced at the 2 little pythons, and as he knew that they wouldn't awaken for quite some time, he didn't disturb them. After changing into the attire of a 7-star sword sect outer court disciple, Duan Lingtian walked out of the stalactite cave and once again arrived at the exit at the cliff. At this time, Duan Lingtian carefully sized up the cliff's exit. He noticed that the tilted tree at the cliff exit was able to live precisely because of the existence of the 10,000-year stalactite milk, as it absorbed the nourishment that came from the 10,000-year stalactite milk. Moreover, it was far more tenacious than an ordinary tree. After Duan Lingtian carefully inspected the roots of the tilted tree and confirmed that it wouldn't easily fall off the cliff, Duan Lingtian walked out of the cave and once again stepped onto the tilted tree. As Duan Lingtian stood on the tilted tree, he could only see cloud and mist in his vision. Although there was a hole on the cliff, it could be imagined that unless a void stage expert intentionally approached this place, it was utterly impossible to notice the existence of the cave. So Duan Lingtian wasn't worried that someone would find this place. However, Duan Lingtian still stayed on the tilted tree for a moment, and only after his sharp spiritual force confirmed that there was no one above did he leap up to return to the peak of the mountain. I ought to have cultivated for an entire day and night. And today is already the second day. Duan Lingtian raised his head to look into the sky and noticed that the blazing sun that hung in the sky. It was precisely noon. He still remembered that when he arrived at the peak of Megre's Peak yesterday, it was already past noon. I'll go look for Kair and little Fei. The corners of Duan Lingtian's mouth curled into a gentle smile. Even though he hadn't seen the two little girls for only a day, he still missed them in his heart. Duan Lingtian left the peak of Megre's Peak. He walked all the way down to arrive near the chain bridge, and only then did Duan Lingtian see other Megre's Peak disciples. Under gazes of astonishment, Duan Lingtian walked onto the chain bridge. Behind him, sounds of sighs echoed out as expected. The skin of that kid is simply whiter and more delicate than a woman's. Where did this pretty boy come from? A pretty boy like this was able to pass our 7-star sword sect's outer court disciple test to become an outer court disciple of our Megre's Peak. Could it be that the requirements of the outer court disciple test of our 7-star sword sect has been relaxed? Duan Lingtian's body slightly stiffened as he heard the burst of discussion that echoed out from behind him. Sure enough, it was exactly as he'd thought. His skin after he'd been reborn was sufficient to attract strange gazes from others. All the way, similar gazes and discussions caused Duan Lingtian to be nearly numbed. Finally, Duan Lingtian passed through the chain bridge and arrived at the stone platform on Dubi Peak. The stone platform that led to the other 6 peaks from Dubi Peak were all at the similar heights, and before long, Duan Lingtian had arrived at another stone platform. However, he quickly felt depressed. He seemed to not know which stone platform led to the Alcade Peak. Finally, Duan Lingtian locked on an outer court disciple that passed by. Duan Lingtian stopped an outer court disciple and asked, with a light smile, "Senior brother, do you know which stone platform leads to the chain bridge that leads to Alcade Peak?" This outer court disciple was a young man at an age around 23 or 24, and he looked at Duan Lingtian with a face full of astonishment. Obviously, he'd never seen a man with such good skin in his life. "Senior brother, do you know?" Duan Lingtian frowned. Did he have to have such an exaggerated reaction? Finally, the outer court disciple recovered from his shock and pointed towards behind him. "Walk forward, the second stone platform is the Alcade Peaks." Right when Duan Lingtian was about to express his thanks, the outer court disciple continued. "However, junior brother, the Alcade Peak only accepts female disciples. Even though your skin is extremely, really not bad, you're a man after all, and the Alcade Peak won't accept you." The corners of Duan Lingtian's mouth twitched when he heard this, and his face went black. "Thank you for the reminder, senior brother, but I've never thought of becoming a disciple of the Alcade Peak. I'm only going there to look for someone." "Ah," the outer court disciple laughed embarrassedly when he heard this. "Sorry, junior brother, I've misunderstood you, I thought." But this outer court disciple hadn't finished speaking when he noticed that Duan Lingtian had already walked far away with large strides. He couldn't help but shake his head and sigh, then mutter. "The skin of this junior brother is rosy, and it is more delicate than the skin of a woman. If I can have a touch, it might be even more comfortable than a woman's." Duan Lingtian hadn't gone far, and his body froze when the muttering of the outer court disciple entered his ears. He felt a burst of disgust, and the corners of his mouth twitched even more frequently. Duan Lingtian forcefully endured the desire to turn around and rush over to bash this outer court disciple. He walked towards the stone platform that led to Alcade Peak. At practically the same time that Duan Lingtian stepped onto the chain bridge that led to Alcade Peak, two figures walked shoulder to shoulder on the chain bridge that led to Megrez Peak. These were two outer court disciples, and one of the young men said to the person beside him, "Huo Xin, you should have directly taught him a lesson yesterday." If Duan Lingtian was here, he would surely be able to recognize the person that spoke. It was precisely one of the 3 7-star sword sect disciples that he had gotten into conflict with at the restaurant in Black Bamboo City a few days ago. The other 7-star sword sect outer court disciple that was with Huo Xin. "I wanted to go look for you and Senior Brother Fan yesterday and tell you too of this matter. After all, Senior Brother Fan wishes for nothing more than to be able to skin that kid alive." Who would have expected that Senior Brother Fan would go on a long journey at the last minute? Huo Xin shook his head and slowly said, "If I knew earlier that Senior Brother Fan had left, I would have made that kid lose a layer of skin yesterday." As he finished speaking, Huo Xin's eyes flickered with a dense, fierce light. "Alright, our top priority right now is to find that kid. Megrez Peak is neither big nor small, and if he wants to hide, we'll utterly be unable to find him." The other outer court disciples' eyes flashed with a strand of fierce light, and within the fierce light, dense gloominess and hatred jumped about. 264 Chapter 265, Exploding Rage. Many female disciples walked towards Duan Lingtian as he walked on the chain bridge towards Alcade Peak, and their gazes all descended onto him. Moreover, he noticed that most of these gazes were gazes of envy. Duan Lingtian was slightly speechless. He wanted to directly say to these female disciples, "I'm a man, what's there for all of you to be envious about?" Finally, Duan Lingtian endured great pressure to arrive at the Alcade Peak's stone platform. Behind Alcade Peak's stone platform was a vast building as well. This was something exactly the same as Megrez Peak. I assume the other 4 peaks ought to be more or less the same. Duan Lingtian thought secretly in his heart. This is a male disciple, right? The heavens are blind, allowing a man to possess such good skin. How good would it be if his skin grew on me? Smooth as jade and extremely delicate. The skin that we women dream of. The burst of discussion that entered his ears caused Duan Lingtian to be unable to stop himself from fleeing and directly entering Alcade Peak. As the saying goes, women are like tigers, and he could be considered to have completely experienced it today. However, after he entered Alcade Peak, Duan Lingtian was dumbfounded. Only now did he recall that Alcade Peak was so big, and him looking for Kair and Little Fei was virtually like looking for a needle at the bottom of the ocean. Enduring the gazes full of jealousy and envy of the Alcade Peak's female disciples, Duan Lingtian could only ask all the way, "Senior sister, do you know where the female outer court disciples that just arrived at Alcade Peak yesterday stay at? Senior sister, have you seen 2 female disciples that travel together? They're new disciples that have only just entered 7-star sword sect yesterday and were brought to Alcade Peak by Elder Bai." "Senior sister, you, Duan Lingtian asked all the way, but didn't obtain the slightest clue, and a bitter smile appeared on his face. "Those 2 junior sisters are really beautiful. There's no one within our Alcade Peak that's able to compare to them. It's not only our Alcade Peak, I'm afraid even in the entire 7-star sword sect, you'd be unable to find a third person that could compare to their appearance." However, Xian seems to not like them, and she even asked them to move out. Those 2 junior sister didn't even stay within her gorge. They stayed in the neighboring gorge, but she actually wants to drive them away. It isn't as if you do not know that Xian is famous for being jealous and always says that the female disciples that are more beautiful than her are seductresses. I think that it's she who's ugly, has a warped mentality, and is unable to see another be better off than herself. If it wasn't for her having an older brother who's the number 1 in our 7-star sword sect's outer court, she would have been taught a lesson God knows how many times by now. 2 women with beautiful appearances were discussing as they walked towards Duan Lingtian. Duan Lingtian's gaze shone when he heard the discussion of the 2 women. "I've got a clue, senior sisters." Duan Lingtian walked over and lightly smiled in greeting to the 2 women. The 2 women were startled when they saw Duan Lingtian, and their eyes were filled with envy when they saw Duan Lingtian's face that was extremely delicate and smooth as jade. "Junior brother, how do you normally take care of your skin? Can you teach your senior sister?" "Yes, junior brother, you've really taken too much care of your skin." The 2 women were attracted by Duan Lingtian's delicate and rosy skin, and asked familiarly. They'd completely forgotten that this was the first time they'd met Duan Lingtian. Duan Lingtian's expression slightly stiffened, and he said in embarrassment, "Senior sisters, I was born this way, actually I don't want it." The two women rolled their eyes at Duan Lingtian. "Junior brother, you have such good skin. We can't get it no matter how envious we are. Why do you seem to have a face full of unwillingness?" "Exactly, junior brother, you really irritate us." What the two women said caused Duan Lingtian to be speechless. He's a man. Why would a man need extremely delicate skin that was smooth as jade? Senior sisters. Duan Lingtian didn't allow the two women to have a chance to continue speaking, and he hurriedly asked, "Those two new female disciples the both of you were talking about, do you know where they stay?" One of the women sized up Duan Lingtian. "Junior brother, although you're quite handsome, those two junior sisters are drop-dead gorgeous beauties, they might not like you." "Exactly, junior brother, beauties like that have great ambition, and they might not pay any attention to you," the other woman said as well. "Senior sisters, I know them." Duan Lingtian laughed bitterly. If it wasn't for finding the two little girls, he wouldn't bother wasting time with these two female disciples. "Why didn't you say so before?" One of the female disciples shook her head, then she turned around to face behind her. "Walk all the way along this path, then turn right twice and you'll be able to see an azure stone tablet erected outside a gorge. At the side of that gorge is a small gorge. The two junior sisters you're looking for stay there." "Didn't say so before." The corners of Duan Lingtian's mouth twitched when he heard what the two women said. "Did you two give me the chance?" But even though Duan Lingtian thought like this in his heart, he still expressed his gratitude and went over according to what the female disciple said. Eventually, Duan Lingtian saw the azure stone tablet the female disciple spoke of. This azure stone stable was precisely erected outside a gorge, and 4 words were carved on it. Duan Lingtian looked carefully, and what was carved on it was, "Belongs to Shi Yan." Shi Yan. Duan Lingtian slightly frowned. Only now did he recall that this Shi Yan was precisely the Alcade Peak's female disciple that the two women mentioned during their discussion. Moreover, this Shi Yan seemed to have bullied his two little girls. HMPH. Duan Lingtian swept the gorge that Shi Yan stayed in with a cold and indifferent gaze, then he walked forward another 2 steps before noticing a small gorge that was overgrown with weeds. He knew that this ought to be the place the two little girls were staying at. Compared to Shi Yan's gorge, this place simply seemed like it wasn't a place for a person to stay at. Duan Lingtian's face revealed a slight smile when he thought of how he would be able to see the two little girls soon, and he walked out in large strides to enter the gorge. However, he'd only just entered the gorge when he heard a burst of shrill voices that sounded like the cry of a crow. "You two seductresses, didn't I tell you two yesterday that I want you two to FK off out of this gorge?" The shrill voice was filled with an arrogant tone. Duan Lingtian frowned. Now he felt like he had walked into the wrong place. Right at this moment, Duan Lingtian heard a familiar voice. However, at this moment, the smile on his face completely froze. "Senior sister Shi Yan, our gorge and your gorge are separated from each other and don't disturb each other. We've only just arrived and found this residence with great difficulty. Can you not make it difficult for us?" K.'s clear and melodious voice sounded out. Duan Lingtian was able to discern that there seemed to be a sense of grievance mixed within K.'s voice, and it caused his heart to ache. Normally, he loved and doted upon K.' and treasured her. Now, someone actually dared to make K.' suffer a grievance. Duan Lingtian's face was covered in a layer of ice, and his eyes flickered with a fierce light. As he stood there, his entire body seemed to have transformed into a bloodthirsty asura that would swallow its target up. "Don't disturb each other." The shrill, crow-like voice sounded out once more, and a sneer was mixed within. "Seductress, let me tell you, even if you two staying here won't disturb me, so long as I don't want you two to stay here, then you two can't stay here." The owner of the shrill voice spoke in an overbearing tone. "Why?" Another voice that was pleasant to the ear like an oriole sounded out, and a trace of rage was mixed within it. Duan Lingtian was able to discern that this was Li Fei's voice. Li Fei was obviously enraged. "Why?" The crow-like shrill voice sounded out once more, and a trace of disdain was mixed within. "Since you two ask this, then I'll tell you two why. Just because I'm Shi Yan. You're so overbearing." K.'s voice was slightly exasperated, but she didn't know how to retort. "Exactly, Shi Yan, am overbearing, so what about it? Who asked you two seductresses to have such repugnant appearances, and with a glance I know you're seductresses that seduce men. What I, Xian, hate the most is people like you two. The crow-like, shrill voice had traces of envy mixed within as it sounded out once more. You want to force us out just because of this? The rage that was mixed in Li Fei's voice was slightly difficult to restrain. Exactly, just because of this you two are an eyesore to me, so I want to make you two leave. Let me tell you too, even if you two leave this place and change to another place, when I'm in a bad mood, I might force you two out of that place. I feel disgusted in my heart when I see seductresses like you two. Xian's crow-like, shrill voice was filled with utmost envy, and when it entered Duan Lingtian's ears, it caused Duan Lingtian to be unable to endure any longer. He exploded in rage. It seems to me that you're the most disgusting. Duan Lingtian's figure moved and he executed the spirit serpent movement technique. He seemed to transform into a spirit serpent that flashed into the gorge in the blink of an eye. Presently within the gorge, a woman that had crooked features and had an appearance that was a disservice to the viewer was holding her head high as she stared at two women who had appearances that were beautiful like flowers. Amongst the two women that had appearances that were beautiful as flowers, the woman who had a devilish figure and an angelic face had a flushed face, and her beautiful eyes contained rage that was difficult to restrain. The other woman seemed delicate and touching, and traces of rage appeared on her face. Duan Lingtian's suddenly appearance also made him the center of attention for a moment. Who are you? Xian turned around to look at Duan Lingtian, and her triangular eyes stared at Duan Lingtian as she asked in her shrill voice. However, Duan Lingtian paid no attention to Xian, and he completely took her as air as he walked over in large strides towards the other two women. Scoundrel, young master, as Li Fei and Kaur looked at the current Duan Lingtian. They couldn't help but be stupefied, and traces of shock appeared on their beautiful faces. Even though Duan Lingtian was still Duan Lingtian and his appearance hadn't changed in the slightest, the skin on Duan Lingtian's face, and the skin on his two hands that were revealed, were all smooth as jade and rosy, not the slightest bit different from the skin of a baby. This caused Li Fei and Kaur to be slightly dumbstruck. Their man, how did he become like this? Needless to say, at this moment, even they couldn't help but have a trace of envy arise within their hearts. Envy towards Duan Lingtian's skin that was extremely delicate and smooth as jade. 265 Chapter 266, Raging for his women. The corners of Duan Lingtian's mouth curled into a bitter smile, as he naturally noticed the weird gazes of the two little girls. What, don't recognize me anymore? Duan Lingtian shook his head and laughed, and a trace of helplessness was mixed within his tone. He didn't wish for this either. Only now did Li Fei and Kaur recover from their shock and walked over swiftly to Duan Lingtian. Li Fei blinked her beautiful eyes and had a face full of curiosity as she asked, Scoundrel, how did you become like this? Yeah, young master, your current skin is even whiter than mine and big sister Fei's, Kaur said, in all seriousness. Actually, among the women that Duan Lingtian had seen, only Princess Bai Yao and Xiao Lan could compare to the skin of Kaur and Li Fei. But compared to his skin now after he was reborn, their skin was quite inferior. After all, his skin now was comparable to that of a baby's. Xian, who stood at the side, had a face full of disbelief when Duan Lingtian ignored her. When had someone dared to ignore her like this? Now Xian's expression was practically warped as she looked at Duan Lingtian, Kaur, and Li Fei chatting happily together, and her crow-like, shrill voice had a frightening coldness mixed within. Pretty boy, I'm talking to you. You, who the heck are you? Xian's voice forcefully interrupted the conversation between Duan Lingtian and the two girls, causing Duan Lingtian to be unable to stop his expression from going gloomy. However, when his gaze touched Kaur and Li Fei, it instead transformed into a gaze of infinite gentleness. I forgot that there was still a crow disturbing us at the side. Duan Lingtian lightly smiled to Kaur and Li Fei, then he turned around to look at Xian, and the gloominess on his face reappeared once again and his eyes flickered with a frightening luster. Crow, Kaur and Li Fei were both stupefied when they heard how Duan Lingtian described Xian, then they came to an understanding of what he meant and burst out into a laugh that was charming and moving, a laugh that could charm all living beings. You dare call me a crow? Xian was stupefied, then she looked at Duan Lingtian with a face full of disbelief. You called me a crow earlier. Duan Lingtian frowned, as he recalled the threats Xian made to his women earlier, and he'd never thought of giving any face to this Xian. Is there something wrong with your ears? But not only if your voice like a crow's, your appearance can't even compare to a crow. Appearance can't even compare to a crow. Shi Yan was completely dumbstruck and was out of sorts for a moment. Her triangular eyes flickered with a frightening luster. "Kid, do you know who I am?" She'd been in the Seven-Star Sword sect for 2 years, and this was the first time that someone dared to speak of her like this. Moreover, it was spoken in her face. "Aren't you Shi Yan?" Duan Lingtian said indifferently, with an incomparably calm gaze. "You know me, and you still dare to humiliate me?" Shi Yan looked at Duan Lingtian with a stupefied expression. "Humiliate you?" Duan Lingtian couldn't refrain from laughing when he heard this, and after he finished laughing, his face sank and he said, in a cold voice, "I only said you're a crow, and it's humiliating you. You can't take it, then why don't you think about how my women felt when you humiliated them?" "Your women?" Shi Yan's gaze descended onto the 2 girls by Duan Lingtian's side. "They are your women?" HMPH. Duan Lingtian's gaze was icy cold as he stared at Shi Yan with a cold and indifferent expression, but he didn't intend on answering her. Shi Yan looked at Duan Lingtian, and her eyes contained a piercing coldness as she said, in a low voice, "In other words, you're an outer court disciple that just entered the Seven-Star Sword sect with them yesterday." "So what?" Duan Lingtian's voice was terrifyingly calm, and only someone who was familiar with him would know that it was the calm before he went berserk. "Ha ha ha ha." Shi Yan started laughing loudly, and her face with warped features seemed to be gloomy and terrifying. Her triangular eyes even seemed as if they were telling the tale of her warped heart. "Young master." K'er cowardly came slightly closer to Duan Lingtian, then she extended her hand to grab a hold of Duan Lingtian's arm. Duan Lingtian patted the back of K'er's hand, then he lightly smiled to her and gave her a reassuring gaze. A trace of a light smile appeared on K'er's nervous face when she saw this. Li Fei frowned and shuddered in her heart as she looked at Shi Yan, who was laughing loudly. Eventually, Shi Yan stopped laughing, and her pair of triangular eyes stared fixedly at Duan Lingtian. "Kid, an outer court disciple that has just entered the Seven-Star Sword sect like you actually dares to be arrogant before me, Shi Yan. I know you want to show off in front of these 2 seductresses. But unfortunately, you've chosen the wrong target. Today, I, Shi Yan, will let you know who you can't afford to offend, and once you offend such a person, then you have to pay the price of lifelong suffering." Shi Yan took a step forward. Traces of coldness were emitted from her body, and her cold, triangular eyes descended onto Duan Lingtian. "I'm really curious, when your cultivation, pretty boy, is crippled, will these 2 seductresses still be willing to accompany you?" "Ha ha ha ha." As Shi Yan spoke, she started laughing out loudly as if she had already seen the scene of Duan Lingtian's cultivation being crippled by her, then becoming overwhelmed with grief and deserted by his loved ones. Duan Lingtian lightly frowned. Now he could finally understand what the 2 Alcade Peak female disciples from earlier had said. This Shi Yan was indeed envious and had a warped mentality, unable to see another person be better off than her. Even in his 2 lifetimes, it was still the first time he'd seen such a bizarre woman. And it caused him to feel loathing from the bottom of his heart. Duan Lingtian's face sank when he heard Shi Yan's threats. "You want to cripple my cultivation? I'm extremely curious, on what basis do you think you can do this?" "On what basis?" Shi Yan sneered, and her eyes stared at Duan Lingtian. "On the basis that I, Shi Yan, have a big brother that's the number 1 in the Seven-Star Sword sect's outer court. Right, I forgot to tell you. Once my big brother is back from his trip to gain experience and train, he'll be able to become an inner court disciple. I, Shi Yan, have a big brother that's a quasi-inner court disciple. Even if I cripple your cultivation, so long as I don't kill you, the sect will exempt me from punishment out of regard for my big brother. You are only an outer court disciple that has just entered the sect, and before me, your life is lowly like grass." A narrow sword appeared out of thin air within Shi Yan's hand, and her origin energy flowed out, flickering with an icy cold sheen. Above her, 75 ancient mammoth silhouettes condensed into form. 4th level of the origin core stage. Grade 7 spirit weapon. Duan Lingtian's brows knitted, and with a glance he'd identified Shi Yan's cultivation and the grade of the spirit weapon in her hand. "So my life is lowly like grass, huh?" Duan Lingtian looked at Shi Yan and his face slightly sank, and his eyes flickered with a frightening cold light. "Do you really think your life is so valuable? It's definitely more valuable than yours." Shi Yan's voice was cold and indifferent, and her triangular eyes were suffused with an icy cold sheen as her body inclined forward and instantly moved. Instantly, Shi Yan seemed to have transformed into a gust of wind that flashed straight towards Duan Lingtian. Whoosh! The narrow sword in her hand whistled out, blooming out with tens of sword images, causing it to be difficult for one to discern between the true sword and the fake images. The sword images that filled the sky whistled down, enveloping down upon Duan Lingtian. Instantly, the grass around the area of where she and Duan Lingtian were was blown by a burst of strong wind and danced in the wind. The strong wind spread out, blowing at Duan Lingtian's 7-star sword sect outer court disciple's attire, causing it to whistle in the wind. HMPH. Duan Lingtian's face sank when faced with the sword images that filled the sky that Shi Yan executed, and a cold light flashed within his eyes as a 3-foot-long blade appeared in his hand. This sword was precisely the possession of the specter guard Shui Yun from that day. Shui Yun, the father of the former commander of the Crimson Sky Kingdom's city guard army, Shui Lu. He'd arrived at the residence of the embroidered uniform guard that day to take revenge for his son and grandson and desired to kill Duan Lingtian. But unfortunately, in the end, he was killed by the 2 half-step void stage old men by Duan Lingtian's side. And his grade 7 spirit sword fell into Duan Lingtian's hand. Die! Shi Yan's voice tore through the sky, and the sword images that filled the sky aimed right at Duan Lingtian's dantian as they whistled out, wanting to destroy Duan Lingtian's dantian in one go. The corners of Duan Lingtian's mouth curled into a cold smile. This Shi Yan was actually so atrocious. Duan Lingtian made his move. His figure didn't move, but his hand that held his sword flashed. Dazzling origin energy instantly exploded forth on his grade 7 spirit sword and raged out. At the same time, nearly 90 ancient mammoth silhouettes condensed into form above Duan Lingtian. 5th level of the origin core stage. Grade 7 spirit weapon. Shi Yan's sharp voice sounded out once again, and terror that came from the depths of her heart was mixed within her voice. Never had she imagined that an outer court disciple that looked to be around 20 and maybe not even 20 actually had such a terrifying cultivation. She wanted to withdraw her attack and dodge, but it was already too late. A trace of regret arose within her heart. Digging your own grave, Duan Lingtian sneered, and the 3-foot-long blade that whistled out in his hand brought about a burst of ear-piercing whistling sounds and a piercingly cold strong wind. Sword drawing arts. With just a single sword strike, Duan Lingtian found the location of her true sword strike from the sword images that filled the sky and moved to intercept it. Clang! The sound of collision sounded. Duan Lingtian's strength of nearly 90 ancient mammoths completely suppressed Shi Yan's strength of 75 ancient mammoths. Shi Yan's hand trembled, her palm split open, and fresh blood dripped out from it, and the narrow sword in her hand flew out. No! Shi Yan's pupils constricted when she saw Duan Lingtian's sword whistling at her, and she fiercely shouted with a voice that had terror mixed within. Whoosh! Duan Lingtian's hand shook, and the 3-foot-long blade moved away from Shi Yan's body in the end, flashing towards the side. Shi Yan heaved a sigh of relief and gave Duan Lingtian a gaze that said, "You're sensible." But in the next moment, her face went pale. Because she noticed that although this outer court disciple had swung away the sword strike that was piercing towards her, he swept his leg out that brought along a terrifying strength with it, flashing straight towards her dantian. At the same time that Duan Lingtian attacked with his leg, his gaze went icy cold. Didn't this Shi Yan want to cripple his cultivation? Now he'd let her get a taste of having her cultivation crippled. No, no, Shi Yan's triangular eyes constricted. She was extremely frightened in her heart when she saw Duan Lingtian's kick flashing over, and she didn't even have the time to cry out when she'd already been kicked flying by Duan Lingtian. 266 Chapter 267, Seizing the Cultivation Location. Bang! Shi Yan's body flew out like an arrow leaving the bowstring and fiercely fell onto the ground, then she spat out a mouthful of blood. Ah! Shi Yan's crow-like, sharp voice emitted an ear-piercing shrill cry that was unpleasant to hear. Subsequently, she struggled to stand up, and her pair of triangular eyes stared at Duan Lingtian. Her eyes revealed a dense hatred and melancholy. You crippled my dantian. You actually crippled my dantian. I won't let you off. I won't let you off. After leaving a few harsh words, Shi Yan held onto her dantian and picked up her grade 7 spirit sword, then she walked swiftly out of the gorge. Her features that were already warped were now completely twisted together. Duan Lingtian's face sank when he heard Shi Yan's threats, and killing intent arose in his heart. As far as he was concerned, if he killed Shi Yan now, so long as he destroyed the corpse to obliterate all traces, absolutely no one would suspect him and the 2 little girls. This Shi Yan was a 4th-level origin core stage outer court disciple, whereas the 3 of them were outer court disciples that had only just entered the 7-star sword sect yesterday. In the eyes of another, it was impossible for the three of them to kill Shi Yan. But just when Duan Lingtian took a stride forward and wanted to kill Shi Yan, K.'s hand that held onto his hand tightened slightly. Her beautiful watery eyes looked at Duan Lingtian and she lightly shook her head. Duan Lingtian sighed in his heart and didn't make a move against Shi Yan in the end. K.'r was really too kind. Shi Yan, I'll be taking your cultivation location. Duan Lingtian looked at Shi Yan's back, and his cold and indifferent voice sounded out in an incomparably domineering manner. Shi Yan's figure stopped when she heard Duan Lingtian, then she turned around to look at him. Her triangular eyes emitted bloodthirsty hatred, a hatred that was irreconcilable until the death of one party. You'll regret it. Shi Yan's voice seemed as if it came from an icy cold thaw hole and was filled with utmost icy coldness. Duan Lingtian smiled indifferently, as he'd heard too many similar harsh words from others and had long since been numb to it. Come, let's go to your new home. Duan Lingtian extended his hand and grabbed hold of the hands of the two little girls, then he walked out of the gorge in large strides. Squeak squeak, a burst of abrupt sounds echoed out, and a fluffy little head stuck out from under K.'s sleeve. It was precisely the little gold mouse. The little gold mouse looked at K.'r with a pair of jade green eyes that flickered with a trace of dissatisfaction. K.'r, you've offended little gold. Duan Lingtian chuckled when he saw this scene. In his impression, K.'r had always doted upon the little gold mouse, and logically speaking, it would be impossible for her to piss the little gold mouse off. Scoundrel, little sister K.'r didn't piss off little gold. It's just that little gold detested that Shi Yan and wanted to avenge little sister K.'r. But little sister K.'r didn't allow little gold to make a move, so it's unhappy. Li Fei lightly smiled as she explained to Duan Lingtian. Duan Lingtian came to a sudden understanding, then he glanced at the little gold mouse and a trace of a smile appeared on the corners of his mouth. K.'r stroked the little gold mouse's fluffy body as she said, in a light voice, little gold wanted to attack carelessly. If little gold were to kill that Shi Yan, then it would be a great disaster. K.'r, you're too kind. Duan Lingtian shook his head but didn't continue to talk about it, as he knew that K.'r's nature was like this, and unless someone had killing intent towards her or the people by her side, she wouldn't harden her heart to kill someone. Otherwise, just like earlier, she wouldn't easily choose to kill another. K.'r's scale within her heart was different than Duan Lingtian's. To Duan Lingtian, killing every threat in its cradle was the correct way. But since K.'r stopped him earlier, he went with the flow and let that Shi Yan off. After all, as far as he was concerned, even if that Shi Yan didn't die, she couldn't pose a threat to him. Duan Lingtian once again saw that azure-colored stone tablet after he walked out of the gorge. HMPH. Duan Lingtian's gaze flickered, then kicked out with origin energy that exploded out. Bang! The stone tablet instantly shattered and transformed into a pile of stone chips. Duan Lingtian and the two little girls walked into the gorge that originally belonged to Shi Yan. Within the gorge was an idyllic scene, and there was also another spacious wooden house. The environment here isn't bad. Duan Lingtian's face emitted a trace of a smile. That Shi Yan had a so-so appearance, but she knew how to live her life rather well. Li Fei's and K.'r's beautiful eyes lit up with a sheen of slight excitement when they saw the environment within the gorge. Scoundrel, you still haven't told us how you became like this. Li Fei looked at Duan Lingtian with a face full of wonder. Duan Lingtian noticed that K.'r looked at him as well, and her beautiful eyes were bright as now. Obviously, the two little girls were extremely interested in the change in him. Do you two want to become like this? Duan Lingtian blinked his eyes and asked the two little girls. Yes, Li Fei and K.'r said, at almost the exact same time, and their eyes flickered with a flowing light of anticipation as they stared at Duan Lingtian with burning gazes. Squeak squeak, the little gold mouse lay on K.'r's shoulder and looked at Duan Lingtian enthusiastically. Little gold, what are you joining in for? Duan Lingtian extended his hand and caught the little gold mouse in his hand, then he casually tossed it to the side. Squeak squeak, the little gold mouse lay on the floor and cried at Duan Lingtian twice with dissatisfaction, then it leapt up into K.'r's sleeve and stuck out its cute little head to glare at Duan Lingtian. Duan Lingtian shook his head and didn't continue to play with little gold. With a raise of his hand, 4 pill bottles appeared out of thin air, and he passed them to the two little girls. K.'r, little Fei, each of you get 2 bottles. Drink all the liquid within the bottles. After you drink it, you too will become like I am now. The liquid within the 4 pill bottles was precisely the 10,000-year stalactite milk. Li Fei and Ke trusted Duan Lingtian unconditionally, so after they received the pill bottles, they directly opened them up and swallowed the milk. Squeak squeak, when the 2 girls opened the pill bottle, the little gold mouse's jade green eyes abruptly lit up and flickered with a dazzling brilliance. When it saw the 2 girls drink up all of the milk, it swayed its head, and its eyes seemed to reveal a sense of loss. Before long, Li Fei's and Ke's beautiful eyes couldn't help but squint. I feel my body burning up. Li Fei's eyes lit up, and she was slightly surprised. Me too, Ke nodded as well. In next to no time, the 2 girls noticed their pores open up, and plenty of impurities that emitted a burst of a rotten stench were expelled from their pores. This caused them to be stunned, and when they recovered from their shock, they hurriedly circulated their origin energy to clear away all these impurities. Young master, what did you give us to drink? Ke looked at Duan Lingtian with a face full of curiosity. She was able to feel that her body was much lighter than before, and her entire body was refreshed, unspeakably comfortable. This, Li Fei was startled as she looked at her fine and slim hands that were smooth as jade and were incomparably fair. Little sister Ke, I'm not dreaming, right? Ke withdrew her gaze from Duan Lingtian and moved it onto Li Fei's body, and her eyes sprang wide open when she saw Li Fei's face. Big sister Fei, you're so beautiful. Li Fei's beautiful face was already beautiful like an angel, but now, after consuming the 10,000-year stalactite milk, her good looks had increased a little more, causing one to be unable to help oneself from being infatuated in her beauty from just a glance. Little sister Ke, you're even more beautiful now. Li Fei's gaze was attracted by Ke's beautiful face. As Ke was similar to her, it seemed as if she had completely become another person. In next to no time, the 2 girls withdrew a mirror from their spatial rings. Happiness appeared on their faces when they saw their current appearances. Everyone loves beauty after all. Not to mention 2 girls that were already drop-dead gorgeous, now that they'd consumed the 10,000-year stalactite milk, they were even more enchanting. A satisfied smile appeared on Duan Lingtian's face. These were his women. Squeak squeak, the little gold mouse beneath Ke's sleeve stuck out its head to stare at Duan Lingtian, and its jade green eyes were filled with anticipation and yearning. Duan Lingtian looked at the little gold mouse and the corners of his mouth held a smile as he asked, "What? You want some too?" The little gold mouse nodded like a human, and a trace of a flowing light flashed within its jade green eyes. Duan Lingtian stopped teasing the little gold mouse when he saw it like this. He then withdrew a bottle of 10,000-year stalactite milk and gave it to the little gold mouse to drink. Unexpectedly, after drinking it, the little gold mouse looked at Duan Lingtian, yearning for more. "So long as you're obedient, I'll give you a bottle every few weeks," Duan Lingtian said to the little gold mouse. Squeak squeak, the little gold mouse understood what Duan Lingtian said, and although it was slightly disappointed, it still cried out as it nodded. It was as if it was guaranteeing to Duan Lingtian that it would be obedient. It wasn't that Duan Lingtian was stingy, but he really didn't dare let the little gold mouse drink too much now. Otherwise, once the little gold mouse were to fall asleep like Little Black and Little White, he wouldn't have any means of continuing to protect the 2 little girls. Duan Lingtian wouldn't let such a thing happen. In his heart, the safety of the 2 little girls towered over everything else. Even though the 2 girls had quite a few offensive inscriptions that he'd inscribed, those inscriptions must be used at the right time to be effective, and if they were used slightly late, it would be everlasting doom for them. This was something that made him not be so at ease. As far as he was concerned, making the little gold mouse protect the 2 girls was much safer. Before long, Ke and Li Fei eventually recovered from their shock, and their gazes descended onto Duan Lingtian at the same time. "Scoundrel, what did you give us to drink?" Li Fei couldn't refrain from asking. As far as she was concerned, what had happened today was too miraculous, she felt like she was having a dream. Ke looked at Duan Lingtian with a face full of curiosity as well. Duan Lingtian lightly smiled as he said, "What you 2 drank is a great thing. 10,000-year stalactite milk." But unfortunately, the 2 girls had never heard of 10,000-year stalactite milk, so their faces were calm as before and didn't have any changes. Squeak squeak, the jade green eyes of the little gold mouse shone when it heard what Duan Lingtian said, and it looked at Duan Lingtian with an even more burning gaze. "Little gold, could it be that you know what the 10,000-year stalactite milk is?" When Ke noticed the little gold mouse's reaction, she asked curiously. "Someone's coming." Before the little gold mouse could reply, Duan Lingtian frowned and cried out vigilantly, and the little gold mouse scurried back into Kair's sleeve. Duan Lingtian stood beside the two girls and gazed at the outside of the gorge. A few figures walked in with large strides. Elder Bai, it's them. They joined hands to sneak attack me and crippled my Dantian. The ear-piercing, crow-like voice entered Duan Lingtian's and the two girls' ears. 267 Chapter 268, Elder Bai. Hearing the signature voice, Duan Lingtian didn't have to look before he knew who it was. Even though he'd long since guessed that Xian wouldn't let it go, he never expected that Xian would return so quickly. Duan Lingtian's brows knitted when he saw the beautiful woman in the lead of the three people that walked in with large strides, and he recognized her with a glance. It was precisely Elder Bai, who'd received and led the group of new female disciples to Alcade Peak yesterday. Behind Elder Bai, Xian had a face full of exasperation, and her hateful gaze gathered onto Duan Lingtian's figure as if wanting to swallow him. Duan Lingtian didn't bother to pay attention to Xian, and his gaze descended onto Elder Bai and the other person that followed behind her. This was a female disciple with a delicate and pretty appearance. She was about 23 or 24 years old, and the gaze that she occasionally shot at Xian seemed to contain a sense of disgust mixed within. Obviously, Xian's popularity among people in the Alcade Peak wasn't great. Elder Bai and the female disciple had shines of astonishment flash within their eyes when they saw Duan Lingtian for the first time. The corners of Duan Lingtian's mouth curled into a bitter smile. Looks like from today onwards, he would have to bask in the sunlight more often. He must tan his skin. As for the changes on Li Fei's and Kair's bodies, they weren't so obvious, and unless it was someone who was familiar with them, it would be extremely difficult to notice their slight changes. Elder Bai, Duan Lingtian looked at the beautiful woman and lightly nodded. Kair and Li Fei greeted her after him. I remember the two of you two are the new disciples that followed me back to Alcade Peak yesterday. Elder Bai's gaze descended onto Kair and Li Fei, then she looked at Duan Lingtian and asked, looking at your age, you ought to not be 20 yet, right? I'll be 20 after a period of time. Duan Lingtian nodded. He was slightly curious in his heart. Why is this Elder Bai asking this? You're a new disciple that just entered the sect yesterday? Elder Bai asked. Yes. Duan Lingtian nodded. Elder Bai frowned, then she turned around to look at Xian, who was behind her, and asked indifferently, Xian, what actually happened? You said these three new disciples joined hands to sneak attack you and cripple your Dantian. As far as she was concerned, this was simply an inconceivable matter. Besides one woman being around 21 or 22 years old, the other male and female disciple seemed to not even be 20. The three of them had the ability to sneak attack Xian, who was at the 4th level of the Origin Core stage. And moreover, cripple Xian's Dantian. She had a feeling that the matter was absolutely not as simple as Xian said. Yes, Elder Bai, Xian hurriedly nodded, and her atrocious gaze stared fixedly at Duan Lingtian's group of three. They took advantage of when I was cultivating to sneak into my cultivation location, then they heavily injured me before crippling my Dantian, after which they seized my cultivation location. Really? Elder Bai's gaze descended onto Duan Lingtian's group of three. You're lying. Kaor looked at Xian. Her beautiful face flushed red from anger, and her delicate figure started trembling lightly. Li Fei's gaze on Xian contained icy coldness within it, as he never expected that the Xian would actually be so shameless and talk irresponsibly like this. Only Duan Lingtian had a calm expression, as if all this was unrelated to him. Elder Bai noticed Duan Lingtian's composed expression and was slightly surprised in her heart. She asked, what do you have to say about this incident? Duan Lingtian lightly smiled. Elder Bai, what this Xian said is only a one-sided statement, and she has no conclusive proof. Elder Bai hadn't even opened her mouth before Xian shouted out fiercely. My Dantian that was crippled by all of you is the best proof. Your Dantian was crippled by us. Duan Lingtian started laughing. Who knows, maybe you fell down while walking and broke your own Dantian from the fall. What, seeing we've occupied your cultivation location, so you want to frame us? Elder Bai and the female disciple behind her had beautiful eyes that held smiles when they heard what Duan Lingtian said, as they were amused by what he said. Elder Bai glanced deeply at Duan Lingtian, then she opened her mouth once again with a tone that had a sense of seriousness mixed within. Xian, think properly before you speak. If I find out you're deceiving me, I'll expel you from Alcade Peak right away. Xian's face went pale when she heard this. In the end, she gritted her teeth and eventually narrated the truth of the matter to Elder Bai. After hearing what Shi Yan said, Elder Bai and the female disciple behind her were stupefied. Their gazes descended onto Duan Lingtian at the same time, and their eyes emitted a sense of astonishment. They'd never imagined that the strength of this new disciple would firmly suppress Shi Yan's. In other words, he was at least a martial artist at the 4th level of the Origin Core stage. Nearly 20, 4th level of the Origin Core stage. Even in the entire 7-star sword sect, such natural talent was extremely hard to come by. HMPH. In next to no time, Elder Bai's gaze descended onto Shi Yan, and a strand of coldness flashed within her eyes. Shi Yan, you actually dared lie before me, desiring to frame another. What should be your punishment? Shi Yan's face was ghastly pale, and she gritted her teeth. Elder Bai, Shi Yan acknowledges her sins. But he crippled my Dantian. Isn't his offense much larger? I hope Elder Bai can give Shi Yan justice and cripple his Dantian as well. Elder Bai's face sank. Shi Yan, in the past, I heard the disciples of the peak say that you're atrocious, but today, I can be considered to have completely experienced it. I want to ask you, does the two of them staying in the unoccupied little gorge have any effect on you? Shi Yan shook her head. Since it doesn't have any effect on you, why did you want to force them to leave? Could it be that it's like the disciples of the peak say? So long as a female disciple is more beautiful than you, you're envious and hate them from the bottom of your heart. As Elder Bai finished speaking, a cold light flashed within her beautiful eyes. Shi Yan's figure lightly trembled, and her eyes emitted an atrocious sheen before they descended onto Duan Lingtian and the two girls by his side. Why are they beautiful like flowers since birth? Whereas I was born with such an appearance. Why? Elder Bai's face was livid when she saw Shi Yan, who seemed to have gone insane, and she ordered with a shout, Zuo Qing, I don't want to see her on Alcade Peak anymore. Elder Bai's order was obviously to expel Shi Yan from the 7-star sword sect. No, Elder Bai, no, Shi Yan's face went ghastly pale. Yes, master. The female disciple behind Elder Bai nodded, and a trace of taking pleasure in Shi Yan's misfortune flashed within her eyes as she directly walked towards Shi Yan. Bai H. Don't come over. Shi Yan's face went grim and she stared angrily at Zuo Qing. Zuo Qing's face sank. She then raised her hand that was suffused with origin energy to slap downwards, directly knocking Shi Yan out. Keep this matter quiet, Elder Bai instructed. Yes, Zuo Qing replied, then she took the knocked out Shi Yan and left. Thank you, Elder Bai, for giving justice to us. Li Fei beamed at Elder Bai and expressed her thanks. Thank you, Elder Bai. Kei hurriedly thanked as well. Elder Bai looked at these two drop-dead gorgeous girls and lightly smiled. What level of cultivation are you two at? When Kei and Li Fei heard this, they both glanced at the nearby Duan Lingtian. Seeing Duan Lingtian lightly smile as he nodded, only then did they once again look at Elder Bai and say at the same time. Elder Bai, we're both at the 3rd level of the Origin Core stage. 3rd level of the Origin Core stage? Elder Bai was stunned when she heard this. Really? When she saw the 40 ancient mammoth silhouettes that condensed into form above each of the two girls, she finally completely confirmed it, and a trace of shock appeared on her face. Are you willing to become my disciple? Elder Bai's gaze descended onto Li Fei, and her eyes had a sense of anticipation mixed within. Li Fei once again looked at Duan Lingtian when she heard this. This caused Elder Bai to be stunned. Who actually is this young man to them? Elder Bai wanting to take you as her disciple is your good fortune. Duan Lingtian nodded to Li Fei. As far as he was concerned, once Li Fei became the disciple of Elder Bai, it couldn't be said that she would be completely unhindered within Alcade Peak, but at least there would be no female disciple that would dare bully her. Master, Li Fei hurriedly said to Elder Bai respectfully. Good. Elder Bai's face was filled with smiles, and with a raise of her hand, a 3-foot-long blade appeared in her hand. Duan Lingtian was able to discern with a glance that this was a grade 7 spirit sword. The sword was like autumn water, with a piercingly cold glitter. This grade 7 spirit sword is master's gift to you. Elder Bai passed the grade 7 spirit sword in her hand to Li Fei. Li Fei stretched her hand out to receive it. Thank you, master. Subsequently, when Li Fei noticed that Elder Bai looked at Kei but never spoke for a long time, she hurriedly said, Master, little sister Kei's natural talent far surpasses mine, and it probably won't be long before she's able to step into the 4th level of the Origin Core stage. Li Fei did her best to promote Kei. Big Sister Fei, I'm extremely happy that you're able to become Elder Bai's disciple. Kei lightly smiled to Li Fei and shook her head. In a month's time, Kei will surely break through to the 4th level of the Origin Core stage. Duan Lingtian looked at Elder Bai. He felt it to be slightly strange as well. Since this Elder Bai had taken little Fei as her disciple, why didn't she take Kei as her disciple even after so much time had passed? Kei's natural talent wasn't the slightest bit inferior to Li Fei's. Moreover, because of Kei having followed him from much earlier, her cultivation firmly surpassed Li Fei's. Surely able to break through to the 4th level of the Origin Core stage within a month. Elder Bai was stupefied when she heard what Duan Lingtian said, and she looked at Duan Lingtian with eyes that had a sense of bewilderment mixed within. Yes, Duan Lingtian nodded. This was something that he was incomparably sure of. The current Kei wasn't the Kei of the past. After the rebirth from the 10,000-year stalactite milk, Kei's natural talent was exactly like his. With Kei's current cultivation level, breaking through to the 4th level of the Origin Core stage within a month wasn't difficult. What Duan Lingtian said caused Kei to be unable to help herself from being slightly surprised. Even she herself wasn't confident in being able to break through to the 4th level of the Origin Core stage within a month. Why was the young master so confident towards her? Even though she was bewildered, she still didn't refute him. She already had a plan in her heart. She would cultivate even more painstakingly in the next month. Our Alcade Peak has never had such an outstanding female disciple like you before. Elder Bai's gaze descended onto Kei's figure, then she shook her head. But I won't take you as my disciple. 268 Chapter 269, Alcade Peak's Peak Master. What Elder Bai said caused Duan Lingtian's brows to slightly frown. There isn't something wrong with this Elder Bai, right? Could it be that Kei's natural talent doesn't have the qualifications to become her disciple? Elder Bai, if you're unwilling to take little sister Kei as your disciple, then I won't take you as my master. I'm sorry. Li Fei extended her hand out to grab hold of Kei's hand, and she looked at Elder Bai with a firm expression. In these years, she and Kei had long since become like sisters, so it was difficult to separate them. Now, Elder Bai treating Kei like this caused dissatisfaction to arise within her heart. You won't take little sister Kei as your disciple, right? Then I won't take you as my master. Big Sister Fei, I know you're good to me, but you can't do this. Only Kei had a composed expression and wasn't unhappy in the slightest, and when she heard what Li Fei said, she hurriedly persuaded. Elder Bai will be unhappy if you're like this. Truly a sensible girl. Elder Bai didn't get angry and glanced at Kei in praise, then she looked at Li Fei. You, girl, think that I'm unwilling to take your little sister as a disciple, right? Could it be that it isn't so? Now, when facing Elder Bai, Li Fei wasn't as polite as before. You girl, feeling the resentment in Li Fei's tone, Elder Bai shook her head. I said I wouldn't take her as my disciple, it's not that I don't like her, but I want her to have a better option. A better option? Duan Lingtian's brows knit as he thought inwardly. He was unable to understand what Elder Bai meant. It wasn't just he who didn't understand, even Li Fei didn't understand. Elder Bai, what do you mean by this? Elder Bai lightly smiled as she said, silly girl, you still don't understand what I mean. I've already thought it through. I'll go back and recommend this girl to the Peak Master, as the Peak Master happens to have been looking for an outstanding closed-door disciple for these past few years. The Peak Master would definitely like the natural endowments of this girl. Peak Master. Duan Lingtian's gaze abruptly shone when he heard what Elder Bai said. There was a sect leader and 6 vice-sect leaders within the 7-star sword sect. The sect leader primarily controlled the main peak of the 7-star sword sect, the Dubi Peak, whereas the other 6 vice-sect leaders each controlled their respective peak. These 6 vice-sect leaders were ordinarily addressed as Peak Master. Li Fei came to realize the truth now. What Duan Lingtian knew was what he'd heard of from Shang Quan. And at that day, Li Fei was present, so she knew as well. When she heard what Elder Bai said, at the same time that she was happy for Kei, she was slightly embarrassed as she looked at Elder Bai. Master, I'm sorry, I'll forget it this time, but if you misunderstand Master again next time, then Master won't forgive you. Elder Bai glanced at Li Fei, and her gaze had a trace of tender love mixed within. This new disciple that she'd taken, no matter how she looked at Li Fei was pleasing to her eyes, and she felt a bust of fondness in her heart. Thank you, Elder Bai. Under Duan Lingtian's signal, Kei hurriedly thanked Elder Bai. Her beautiful face blushed red, and she looked extremely cute. Girl, the peak master of our Alcade Peak is currently the female member of our 7-star sword sect with the most strength. You'll be able to learn many good things while following her to cultivate, and you'll surely have better prospects in the future. Elder Bai lightly smiled. She said this to Kair as if she was an amiable senior. Actually, she was extremely fond of this beautiful and cute girl. But she felt that she didn't have the qualifications to become a good master to her, so she recommended Kair to the peak master of Alcade Peak, who was also the most mysterious and almost elusive vice-sect leader of the 7-star sword sect. Little sister Kair, congratulations. Li Fei hurriedly congratulated Kair, and a heartfelt smile bloomed on her face, as she was happy for Kair. Duan Lingtian's face revealed a light smile as well. Even though Kair has a top sword cultivation method, the Frost God's sword technique, to cultivate, and there were various formidable sword skills within the Frost God's sword technique, most of these were only theoretical things. If Kair is able to obtain the guidance of the peak master of Alcade Peak, then she'd surely be able to advance at a tremendous pace. The 7-star sword sect was a sword cultivation sect, so practically all of the sect higher-ups used swords. One could imagine how the peak master of the Alcade Peak would surely have extremely deep and profound attainments in the sword. Alright, now it's time to deal with your matter. The smile on Elder Bai's face withdrew in the blink of an eye, and her fierce eyes stared at Duan Lingtian. Duan Lingtian's brows knitted. Kair and Li Fei were stupefied when they heard her. Even though that Shi Yan is at fault, at the same time that you defeated her, you ruthlessly crippled her Dantian. Isn't this slightly too much? Elder Bai looked at Duan Lingtian and spoke with a tone that had a sense of seriousness mixed within. Master, Elder Bai, Kair and Li Fei were both anxious. Elder Bai. Duan Lingtian looked at Elder Bai with a carefree expression as if he didn't take the current matter to heart. You've heard what Shi Yan said earlier, it was she who repeatedly threatened to cripple my Dantian first. If my strength was inferior to hers today, then the one whose Dantian was crippled would be me. I was only giving her a taste of her own medicine by doing that. Elder Bai, do you think it's wrong? Elder Bai looked at Duan Lingtian and said slowly, even though it's like that, she was a 7-star sword sect disciple, and a disciple of my Alcade Peak. You at least have to give me an explanation for this matter, right? Elder Bai, I don't think there's anything to explain. Duan Lingtian shrugged, as he didn't think he was in the wrong. If it wasn't for that Shi Yan being overbearing, he wouldn't have gone to the extent of crippling her Dantian. The rule that he used to handle matters has always been, if one doesn't offend me, then I won't offend another. But if someone offends me, then I'll surely return it to them like thunder. Elder Bai's beautiful brows frowned and she was rather unhappy. Master, scoundrel did this today for the sake of me and little sister Kair, don't blame him. Li Fei walked over, grabbed Elder Bai's arm, and shook it a few times as she said this with a voice that had a tone of a spoiled child. Scoundrel. Elder Bai was stupefied when she heard what Li Fei said. Girl, he is your. Elder Bai, I'm your disciple's man. The corners of Duan Lingtian's mouth held a smile as he focused his gaze at Elder Bai. As the saying goes, a master is like a parent. If one were to really consider it, then Li Fei could be considered to be half a daughter of Elder Bai, and he could be considered as half a son-in-law of Elder Bai. Elder Bai was stunned, and a bitter smile appeared on her face. She never imagined that the disciple she'd just taken would have such a relationship with this outer court disciple. Elder Bai looked at Duan Lingtian and sighed. Never mind, never mind. This incident is something that Shi Yan provoked after all. I'll consider myself as having verbally disciplined you. I just hope you don't put me in a difficult situation in the future. Thank you, Elder Bai. Duan Lingtian smiled, then he looked at Li Fei, who was beside Elder Bai, and the two of them casted winks and made faces at each other for a while. Also, that Shi Yan's natural talent was only average, so you can leave it at that. But her older brother, Shi Hao, isn't easy to deal with. He broke through to the 7th level of the Origin Core stage a while ago. Moreover, his combat experience is extremely abundant. It wouldn't be difficult for him to become an inner court disciple by relying on his 7th level Origin Core stage cultivation. Elder Bai warned Duan Lingtian. This Shi Hao loves his younger sister extremely dearly. You have to be careful of this person. Duan Lingtian nodded. Thank you for the warning, Elder Bai. Elder Bai nodded, then she looked at Li Fei and Kair. I'm going to look for the peak master and notify her now. I'll come look for you two girls tomorrow. Goodbye, master. Goodbye, Elder Bai, Duan Lingtian's group of 3 sent Elder Bai off with their gazes. I really never expected that Shi Yan to be so shameless and accuse her victims. Luckily, Master is wise and caused her scheme to be unable to hide itself. Li Fei's face still had some lingering rage when she mentioned Shi Yan. She could be considered to have reaped what she sowed. She was expelled from the 7-star sword sect. Duan Lingtian smiled lightly. We still have to properly congratulate little sister Kair. She's going to become the closed-door disciple of the Alcade Peak's Peak Master soon. Li Fei looked at Kair, and her beautiful eyes were dazzling like an array of stars. Big Sister Fei, you're making fun of me again. A trace of a rosy blush appeared on Kair's face when she heard Li Fei. Li Fei recalled the matter that was interrupted by Shi Yan, and she looked at Duan Lingtian as she asked, "Right, scoundrel, you said you gave us some 10,000-year stalactite milk earlier. What's that?" Kair looked at Duan Lingtian as well, and traces of curiosity flickered within her beautiful eyes. Duan Lingtian smiled as he said, "The 10,000-year stalactite milk is a precious treasure that is able to allow one to be reborn. It can thread together the flesh, meridians, and bones within the body. And it is able to increase a person's natural talent in the martial Tao to the utmost limit." Li Fei and Kair were both startled when they heard the effects of the 10,000-year stalactite milk. Only after a long time did they recover from their shock. "Scoundrel, what you mean is that the natural talent in the martial Tao of me and little sister Kair have already reached the utmost limit?" Li Fei exhaled a breath of cold air. "Exactly." Duan Lingtian nodded, then he looked at Kair. "Kair, this is also the reason why I told Elder Bai earlier that you'll be able to break through to the 4th level of the Origin Core stage in a month. Compared to the past, your current natural talent is like the difference between the heavens and the earth. And it can't be looked upon as it was in the past." Kair lightly nodded, and a smile of happiness appeared on her beautiful face. Her man had never disappointed her, and she had always believed in her man. Also, this 10,000-year stalactite milk. Duan Lingtian kept 2 bottles of 10,000-year stalactite milk and gave the remaining bottles to Kair. "Kair, give this milk to Little Gold to consume every few weeks. You must not let it finish drinking it all at once. Otherwise, I'm worried it will fall asleep like a dead pig just like Little Black and Little White." As he finished speaking, Duan Lingtian's tone had traces of helplessness mixed within. "Scoundrel, Little Black and Little White have fallen asleep again." Li Fei couldn't help but be stunned when she heard what Duan Lingtian said. Duan Lingtian nodded. "Yes, they fell asleep after drinking the 10,000-year stalactite milk, and I don't know when they'll be able to awaken." Li Fei and Kair were speechless when they heard this. And they sincerely admired the sleeping ability of the 2 little pythons. 269 Chapter 270, Quake Energy. Squeak squeak, Duan Lingtian had only just passed the 10,000-year stalactite milk into Kair's hands when the little gold mouse stuck out its cute little head from beneath Kair's sleeve and opened its mouth to cry out. Its pair of jade green eyes now stared fixedly at the pill bottles in Kair's hands that had 10,000-year stalactite milk within them, and its eyes were filled with yearning. Squeak squeak, the little gold mouse flatteringly nodded at Kair as if it was begging Kair to give it some 10,000-year stalactite milk. Kair put away the 10,000-year stalactite milk and stroked the little gold mouse's little head as she said, with a light smile, "Little Gold, young master has said that you can't drink too much at a time. I'll give you some to drink after some time." Squeak squeak, the little gold mouse's eyes emitted a trace of grievance. "Looks like Little Gold is fond of food like Little Black and Little White." Duan Lingtian shook his head and smiled. After accompanying the 2 little girls for a while, Duan Lingtian lightly smiled and said, "Kair, Little Fei, I should head back now." Under the reluctant gazes of the 2 little girls, Duan Lingtian walked swiftly out of the gorge. This was the Alcade Peak after all, the place the female outer court disciples of 7-star sword sect gathered, and thus it wasn't appropriate for him to stay here for too long. Duan Lingtian was practically fleeing as he endured the burning gazes of the Alcade Peak's female disciples all along the way as he fled back to Megrez Peak. Of course, on the stone platform of Megrez Peak, there was similarly a large amount of gazes looking at him. But the owners of these gazes were men after all, so Duan Lingtian directly disregarded them. "Duan Lingtian," an aged voice suddenly echoed out, causing Duan Lingtian to stop in his tracks and look towards the front. Nearby, an old man and a middle-aged man walked over shoulder to shoulder. The old man that greeted him now was precisely Megrez Peak's outer court elder, Lu Chu. "Elder Lu." Duan Lingtian lightly smiled as he greeted the old man, and he never expected he would encounter the old man when he'd just returned to Megrez Peak. Lu Chu slowly walked over and looked at Duan Lingtian's skin that seemed to have completed some sort of marvelous transformation. It's a long story. Duan Lingtian shook his head and smiled, but he didn't go into details. Lu Chu didn't continue asking when he perceived that Duan Lingtian was unwilling to talk about it, then he glanced at the middle-aged man by his side and introduced him with a slight smile. This is Elder Zhao Lin, and he's also an outer court elder of our Megrez Peak. Elder Zhao Lin. Duan Lingtian lightly smiled as he greeted the middle-aged man. But the middle-aged man only indifferently swept Duan Lingtian with his gaze. He then raised his head and a lofty arrogance was revealed on his face as he practically snorted out from his nose. Duan Lingtian frowned. Relying on his spiritual force and the experience of rebirth martial emperor, he could discern that this middle-aged man was at most in existence at the first level of the void-prying stage. A first-level void-prying martial artist, a strength that was far inferior to Lu Chu's, but his level of arrogance far surpassed Lu Chu's. A bad impression instantly arose within Duan Lingtian's heart. But he didn't care about it. As far as he was concerned, there wouldn't be any relations between him and Zhao Lin, so how Zhao Lin acted was Zhao Ling's business and was of no concern to him. Lu Chu was slightly embarrassed when he noticed Zhao Lin's attitude, then nodded to Duan Lingtian. Then we'll leave first. Goodbye, Elder Lu. Duan Lingtian lightly smiled as he nodded. Lu Chu was polite to him, so he naturally would be polite as well. As for that Zhao Lin, Duan Lingtian utterly didn't bother to pay attention to him. Duan Lingtian left Megrez Peak's stone platform after he saw Lu Chu and Zhao Lin leave, then he looked at the incomparably bustling building nearby. In there, many Megrez Peak disciples had gathered together. Perhaps buying medicinal pills and spirit weapons with money. Perhaps exchanging for medicinal pills and spirit weapons with materials. Before long, Duan Lingtian went around into the Megrez Peak's mountain path and sized up the surroundings for a moment. When he confirmed that no one noticed him, he followed along an inconspicuous small path to head towards the peak of Megrez Peak. The Megrez Peak was extremely large, the mountain paths were extremely windy, and there were not less than 10 paths that headed to the peak. Before long, Duan Lingtian arrived at the peak of the mountain. The peak of the mountain was devoid of people, and he quickly arrived at the location of the tilted tree, then leapt down. If someone were to be here and witness this scene, they would surely be extremely shocked, even to the extent they might think Duan Lingtian wanted to commit suicide. However, after Duan Lingtian passed through the clouds and mist, he firmly descended onto the tilted tree. Swoosh! The tilted tree trembled for a moment before stabilizing. Duan Lingtian's figure moved to directly flash into the cave passage that led to the stalactite cave. When he once again returned to the stalactite cave, Duan Lingtian noticed the two little fellows laying there. Even their positions hadn't changed as they deeply slept. They wouldn't really be reincarnations of pigs, right? Duan Lingtian couldn't help but suspect in his heart, as the sleeping ability of these two little pythons caused him to be completely helpless. After sizing up the two little fellows for a moment, Duan Lingtian slowly walked to arrive before the stone platform and sat on it, then he consumed an origin strengthening pill and started to cultivate 9 Dragons War Sovereign Technique, Worm Python Form. The origin energy in Duan Lingtian's body roiled. Coupled with the medicinal strength of the origin strengthening pill and the nearly perfect natural talent in the martial Dao that he currently possessed, his advancement was at a tremendous pace. At every moment, Duan Lingtian was able to feel the slight changes in the origin energy within his body. After an unknown amount of time, Duan Lingtian suddenly felt the origin energy within his body actually have a trace of a bizarre change. This change was extremely small and slight. But Duan Lingtian was still able to clearly feel it. Suddenly, Duan Lingtian opened his eyes, and a trace of a dazzling brilliance flashed within his eyes that were like an array of stars. I wonder if I can use this method outside my body. In the next moment, Duan Lingtian's gaze focused, and he swung his arm which was suffused with raging origin energy. Swoosh! Above Duan Lingtian, 71 ancient mammoth silhouettes condensed into form and waited for orders in the sky. They were prepared to dash out at any moment. Suddenly, Duan Lingtian moved. Whoosh! His arm swept out along with the strength of 71 ancient mammoths as it traversed the air. The air quaked because of this. If one were to look carefully, one would be able to notice that the origin energy that was twined around Duan Lingtian's arm was vibrating at a strange frequency. His origin energy was chaotic and seemed to have formed a type of quake energy. This is. Duan Lingtian's pupils constricted, and a portion of the memories of rebirth Martial Emperor flashed within his mind. This portion of memories was related to the cultivation method Duan Lingtian cultivated, the third form of the Nine Dragons War Sovereign technique, the worm python form. The worm python form was a mental cultivation method that the rebirth Martial Emperor developed from observing the habits of the demon beast worm python. The worm python was a type of demon beast between a python and a flood dragon, and it had an extremely formidable strength. Its most miraculous ability was the ability to emit a type of formidable quake energy from its body. Quake energy. Duan Lingtian retracted his arm and slowly struck out with a palm strike. Origin energy jumped and vibrated on his hand. The frequency grew faster and faster. In next to no time, Duan Lingtian's palm slowly pressed onto a protruding piece of rock within the stalactite cave. Instantly, as soon as the origin energy on Duan Lingtian's hand touched the rock transformed into stone powder then scattered onto the ground. Lightly exerting force, he pressed his hand forward. Instantly, the entire piece of rock transformed into fine powder. What a terrifying quake energy! Duan Lingtian's pupils constricted. He raised his hand and looked in disbelief at the origin energy that quaked on his palm. The frequency at which this origin energy quaked was simple heaven-defying. Duan Lingtian was confident that by relying on this quake energy to exert the strength of his entire body, even if he could only exert the strength of 71 ancient mammoths now, and even if he faced a 6th-level origin core martial artist that possessed the strength of 80 ancient mammoths, he still might not be disadvantaged. Even to the extent that he would very likely be able to directly defeat the 6th-level origin core martial artist by relying upon this quake energy. This type of quake energy, even though it didn't provide any increase to strength, its method of exerting force could be called heaven-defying. According to the memories of rebirth Martial Emperor, by relying on this type of quake energy, while facing most fierce beasts that were a level stronger than it, the demon beast worm python would still be able to easily kill its opponent. Duan Lingtian took a deep breath. It was difficult to suppress the excitement in his heart. So it turned out that this was the quintessence of the worm python form. He always thought that there was nothing special about the worm python form, but now he knew that he'd looked down on rebirth Martial Emperor. Duan Lingtian recalled his entire cultivation journey up to this point. The first form of the Nine Dragons War Sovereign technique, the spirit serpent form, it stressed about cultivating the fleshly body to be flexible like a spirit serpent. The second form of the Nine Dragons War Sovereign technique, the raging python form, it allowed Duan Lingtian to temper his fleshly body with origin energy, possessing a fierce strength of a raging python, and a casual swing of his arm was like a raging python swinging its tail. Now, this third form of the Nine Dragons War Sovereign technique, the worm python form, and its quintessence was the quake energy. Quake energy isn't a martial skill, it's more practical than a martial skill. Because it can be used with any martial skill, coupled with the strength of my cultivation, it can give rise to an extremely terrifying force. Duan Lingtian's eyes squinted, and his hand that was twined with origin energy pressed onto the cave wall. Now, he didn't use the quake energy. Even if his origin energy had stuck to the cave wall wouldn't be affected in the slightest. However, once he utilized the quake energy, Duan Lingtian's hand hadn't moved and was still stuck onto the cave wall. However, the origin energy on his hand instead started lightly vibrating, and the speed of the vibrations grew faster and faster, its frequency faster and faster. Instantly, his origin energy quaked, and the place where his hand touched the cave wall was completely destroyed by Duan Lingtian's quake energy and transformed into fine powder. He could imagine how if this palm of his were to be pressed onto a person, once it started quaking, that person's flesh, lifeblood, and even bones would be affected by the quake energy. That would surely be an extremely distressing scene. The corners of Duan Lingtian's mouth curled into a smile. Currently, he wished for nothing more than to find someone and use the quake energy to battle with that person. As expected of the cultivation method that rebirth Martial Emperor created after experiencing 2 lifetimes, this Nine Dragons War Sovereign technique. Every form of it has its own exclusive feature. The spirit serpent form had the flexibility of the fleshly body, the raging python form had the fierceness of the fleshly body, and the worm python form has the terrifying quake energy. The 6 more remaining forms will surely have their own exclusive features. Duan Lingtian's mood was incomparably agitated, and he was unable to calm down for a long time. 270 Chapter 271, The Excited Zhao Lin. Eventually, Duan Lingtian calmed his mood down. Time to go try out this quake energy. Duan Lingtian's gaze lit up as he stood up. His gaze then descended onto the two little pythons, and when he noticed they showed no signs of awakening, he shook his head then left the stalactite cave by himself. Relying on his sharp spiritual force, Duan Lingtian stood on the tilted tree on the side of the cliff and sensed the situation on the peak of the mountain. After he confirmed there were no people, Duan Lingtian used the tilted tree as a foothold and leapt up to the peak of Megrez Peak. Duan Lingtian walked into the most remote path on the peak, then he walked down the mountain. In next to no time, he'd passed the chain bridge and arrived at the main peak, Dubi Peak. Duan Lingtian went down from Dubi Peak, as his destination this time was the primeval forest behind the 7-star sword sect. After all, he couldn't casually pull a 7-star sword sect disciple over to test the quake energy, so he decided to go to the primeval forest and test the worm python form's quake energy on fierce beasts. Duan Lingtian flew down with a dash and quickly left the sect to head towards the primeval forest. And at the moment that Duan Lingtian left the sect, on the chain bridge from Megrez Peak to Dubi Peak, two 7-star sword sect outer court disciples walked shoulder to shoulder. One of the outer court disciples' faces sank, and he said to the other outer court disciple beside him, "Huo Xin, that kid seems to have vanished. Megrez Peak is huge, so it isn't an easy matter to find him. Moreover, I've practically asked all the 19 new disciples that came to Megrez Peak with us, but all those people don't know where he is." The latter was precisely Huo Xin, and he now had a gloomy expression as he spoke. "I don't believe that he can hide forever. The incident in Black Bamboo City's restaurant, I'll surely make him pay it back 100-fold. Actually daring to ask someone to throw us out." The former's gaze went slightly cold as a cold light shot out from his gaze. "Don't worry, Yuan Wu, we'll drag him out sooner or later," Huo Xin slowly said, and his eyes flickered with a cold light that was not one bit lesser. Before long, when they were just about to arrive at Dubi Peak, the two of them saw an old man and a middle-aged man walk over shoulder to shoulder. "Elder Lu, Elder Zhao." Huo Xin and Yuan Wu respectfully bowed to the old man and middle-aged man. The old man nodded to the two of them. As for the middle-aged man, from the beginning till the end, he didn't even look Huo Xin and Yuan Wu in the eye. Perhaps as far as he was concerned, Huo Xin and Yuan Wu still didn't have the qualifications for him to look them in the eyes. Huo Xin and Yuan Wu were slightly embarrassed as they swiftly left. They'd long since heard of Elder Zhao Lin's arrogance, so they didn't feel surprised. The old man was precisely Megrez Peak's outer court elder, Lu Chu. Now, Lu Chu and Zhao Lin walked shoulder to shoulder on the chain bridge as they walked towards the Megrez Peak in large strides. "Zhao Lin, when I saw that Huo Xin earlier, I couldn't help but recall that Duan Lingtian. That young man we met at Megrez Peak yesterday afternoon, do you still have an impression of him?" Lu Chu said to Zhao Lin. Zhao Lin nodded, and a trace of disdain appeared on the corners of his mouth. As far as he was concerned, that was a pretty boy. A pretty boy with skin that was simply whiter and more delicate than a woman's. It's exactly that Duan Lingtian. I wonder what happened, as his skin was still a normal and healthy bronze color a few days ago when he'd just arrived at our Megrez Peak. But in a day's time, a tremendous change occurred on his skin, even to the extent his skin can be compared to a baby's and is rosy. Truly unbelievable. As he finished speaking, Lu Chu sighed with emotion and had a face full of shock. On hearing what Lu Chu said, the eyes of Zhao Lin, who originally had a calm expression, abruptly lit up, and his breathing suddenly became hurried. "Elder Lu, are you sure his skin wasn't like that previously?" Zhao Lin looked at Lu Chu and was slightly discomposed. Although Lu Chu didn't know why Zhao Lin would suddenly be interested in Duan Lingtian, he still nodded. "I'm sure. 2 days ago, when I brought Huo Xin and another 2 outer court disciples to go receive the 20 new disciples that had passed the outer court test. That Duan Lingtian was one of them, and he was also the person Huo Xin personally chose. I remember it clearly, at that time his skin was bronze." "What, is there something not right?" Lu Chu asked Zhao Lin, as he had the feeling that Zhao Lin's suddenly reaction might be because Zhao Lin had noticed something. According to his knowledge, it was ordinarily impossible for Zhao Lin to be interested in such matters. But today, his behavior departed from his normal behavior. "It's nothing. Zhao Lin shook his head, but deep within his gaze, a hard-to-notice glowing light that was burning flashed by. I'm just curious, how could someone suddenly experience such a tremendous change? Lu Chu nodded. He thought like this as well and continued to walk shoulder to shoulder with Zhao Lin. Zhao Lin walked by Lu Chu's side, but his mood was incomparably agitated. Rebirth. He could be sure that Duan Lingtian had absolutely gone through the rebirth of legends. As luck would have it, he'd just so happened to have seen the records relating to rebirth within an ancient record. Allegedly, there was a miraculous liquid in Cloud Continent that once consumed could allow someone to be completely reborn. And the natural talent in the martial Tao of that person would undergo a tremendous change. To attain the utmost limit, Zhao Lin's heart was trembling. He remembered clearly that the miraculous liquid was the 10,000-year stalactite milk. Once one consumed the 10,000-year stalactite milk and was reborn, one's skin would transform to become delicate like a baby's. He clearly remembered the writing on that ancient record. The 10,000-year stalactite milk. That pretty boy has consumed the 10,000-year stalactite milk. Zhao Lin's mood surged and couldn't calm down for a long time. But he didn't dare shout it out, because after all, Lu Chu was beside him now. I must get the 10,000-year stalactite milk from that pretty boy, I must. Zhao Lin resolved in his heart. I hope that pretty boy can be sensible. Even if I have to stop at nothing, I must still get the 10,000-year stalactite milk from him. Traces of cold lights flashed deep within Zhao Lin's eyes. 10,000-year stalactite milk was sufficient to change his entire life. No matter what, he must obtain it. Duan Lingtian naturally didn't know that the matter of him consuming 10,000-year stalactite milk had already been found out by someone. Currently, he'd left the 7-star sword sect and entered the vast primeval forest. Whoosh! Duan Lingtian's figure flashed, and the scenery of the primeval forest flashed swiftly by his side. The spirit serpent movement technique was exerted by Duan Lingtian to the limit. Roar! A loud roar sounded out from ahead, causing Duan Lingtian to unconsciously stop his steps. In next to no time, Duan Lingtian noticed that it was a spiked tiger with a strength comparable to a 9th-level core formation martial artist, and its pair of fangs that were like spikes were its strongest martial skill. Whoosh! The spiked tiger had noticed him as well and dashed quickly at him before pouncing towards him. Bring it on! Duan Lingtian's gaze shone, and he directly moved to intercept it. At the same time that the spiked tiger pounced over, 12 ancient mammoth silhouettes appeared above it out of thin air. Now when Duan Lingtian attacked, only 12 ancient mammoth silhouettes appeared above him as well. He didn't plan to use his entire strength when faced with a 9th-level core formation stage spiked tiger, otherwise, his plan to test the quake energy would come to nothing, and his trip here would be meaningless. He entered the primeval forest this time precisely to test the might of the quake energy. Roar! The spiked tiger swiftly pounced at Duan Lingtian. It opened up its bloody mouth and a bloody stench suffused the air, causing Duan Lingtian to feel a wave of disgust. Seeing the spiked tiger right before his eyes, Duan Lingtian made his move. Spirit serpent movement technique. Instantly, Duan Lingtian seemed to have transformed into an incomparably agile spirit serpent that flashed behind the spiked tiger in the blink of an eye. When the spiked tiger hadn't reacted to Duan Lingtian's sudden movement, Duan Lingtian attacked. Dragon's finishing touch. Duan Lingtian pointed out with his finger, and an ear-deafening, piercing howl sounded out. He directly left out the step of drawing the dragon and directly did the finishing touch. Pooh! Duan Lingtian's finger that was suffused with origin energy descended down and directly pieced through the thick skin and flesh of the spiked tiger into its bones. Roar! The spiked tiger roared out in grief, its sound filled with rage and despair. Quake energy. The origin energy on the tip of Duan Lingtian's finger abruptly started vibrating, and vibrating with a terrifying frequency. Crackle crackle. Instantly, the body of the spiked tiger started trembling, and its grievous roar stopped. Then its enormous body crashed onto the floor and sent waves of sounds of bones shattering echoing out in the air. What a terrifying quake energy. I looked down upon it earlier. Duan Lingtian withdrew his origin energy and stood there, and as he gazed at the spiked tiger's body that was limp on the ground, a trace of coldness arose in his heart. He'd clearly felt it earlier. When he pointed at the spiked tiger's bones and executed the quake energy, the bones of the spiked tiger vibrated along with the quake energy, then shattered in the end. And the shattered bone bits pierced into every part of the spiked tiger's body, including its internal organs, causing the spiked tiger to directly die. Duan Lingtian let out a breath of cold air, and a trace of enthusiastic excitement appeared on his face. Whoosh! Duan Lingtian, who was aroused, didn't stop at this, and continued to head into the primeval forest. This time, he planned to exert a cultivation that was one level lower than the fierce beast and see if he's able to successfully kill the fierce beast. Once he succeeded, then the quake energy would really be too terrifying. Before long, Duan Lingtian encountered the next fierce beast. This fierce beast was a second-level origin core stage fierce beast. A wind leopard. This wind leopard was adept at speed, and in terms of speed, it was absolutely outstanding amongst second-level origin core stage fierce beasts. The wind leopard charged at Duan Lingtian with a swift dash, and it opened up its blood mouth with fangs that flickered with the sheen of saliva, desiring to swallow Duan Lingtian with one gulp. Above the wind leopard, 30 ancient mammoth silhouettes appeared. The 7-star sword sect outer court disciple attire on Duan Lingtian's figure fluttered, and above him, 20 ancient mammoth silhouettes had appeared. He wanted to try to see if he could kill this wind leopard with the strength of the first level of the origin core stage. 271 Chapter 272, Small Team. Duan Lingtian's gaze went cold when he saw the wind leopard pouncing over, and he was already prepared to move to intercept it and compare his strength against it. Right at this moment, Duan Lingtian's spiritual force slightly jerked, and he could sense people approaching, a total of 3 people. Duan Lingtian's figure flashed, temporarily dodged the wind leopard, and looked towards the distance. These 3 people were 2 men and a woman. Meanwhile, the wind leopard pounced at him once again, bearing down menacingly upon him. Be careful! Right when he was about to make a move and kill the wind leopard, a delicate shout sounded out. Duan Lingtian felt a fragrant wind assail his nostrils, and he could see that the gentle and graceful figure of the woman amongst the 3 people had flashed out and arrived before him in the blink of an eye. Whoosh! This was a gentle and graceful woman. The 3-foot-long blade in her hand flashed out, and above her, 46 ancient mammoth silhouettes condensed into form. 3rd level of the origin core stage. Grade 8 spirit weapon. Duan Lingtian saw through this woman with a single glance. Although the wind leopard's speed was swift, it was only in comparison to second-level origin core martial artists and fierce beasts, and before this third-level origin core stage woman, it was completely unable to strike back. In the blink of an eye, it was killed with a sword strike from the woman. Are you all right? After the woman killed the wind leopard, she looked at Duan Lingtian with slight concern, and when she saw Duan Lingtian's skin that was like the skin of a baby, a trace of surprise was revealed on her face. I'm fine. Duan Lingtian lightly smiled and shook his head, then he sized up the young woman before him. The woman was around 23 or 24 years old, and although she wasn't as beautiful as Kei or Li Fei, her delicate and elegant features and smooth and exquisite skin emitted traces of elegance, giving one a comfortable feeling. The young woman's gaze descended onto Duan Lingtian's outer court disciple attire and lightly smiled as she said, "You're an outer court disciple of our 7-star sword sect, right?" Yes. Duan Lingtian nodded. He'd noticed earlier that it wasn't just this woman who was a 7-star sword sect outer court disciple, and the other 2 men that followed her over were also 7-star sword sect outer court disciples. Nice to meet you. I'm Shi Lan, a disciple of Alcade Peak. The young woman lightly smiled as she introduced herself to Duan Lingtian. She had a kind expression, and her elegant eyes seemed as if they could speak. Duan Lingtian, Megre's Peak disciple. Duan Lingtian nodded to Shi Lan. He had a good impression of this warm-hearted woman. Duan Lingtian, you came to the primeval forest by yourself. Shi Lan looked at the surroundings, and when she didn't notice anyone else, she couldn't refrain from asking curiously. Yes. Duan Lingtian nodded. Shi Lan looked at Duan Lingtian and said, with a serious expression, "You're too rash. You ought to be an outer court disciple that has only entered our 7-star sword sect 2 days ago, right? You're only at the first level of the origin core stage, so even if you want to come to this primeval forest, you ought to have found a team. Otherwise, you will likely lose your life, just like earlier." As far as she was concerned, if it wasn't for her being in time to help him, Duan Lingtian would have already died under the claws of that wind leopard and would surely have no chance of surviving. Duan Lingtian was able to discern that Shi Lan was truly concerned about him, and he couldn't help but smile. Thank you for the reminder. He knew that because he had only exerted the strength of 20 ancient mammoths when facing the wind leopard earlier, Shi Lan mistook him to be a first-level origin core martial artist. Toward this, he didn't make any further explanations, as he wasn't someone that liked to show off. Shi Lan looked at Duan Lingtian and invited him. Why don't you join us? You'll be safer when following us. At that time, we'll share equally all the gains. How about it? My two companions are both extremely formidable. Duan Lingtian originally wanted to refuse her, but when he saw Shilan's sincere gaze of anticipation, he didn't refuse her in the end and nodded. Okay, then I'll be troubling you. As far as he was concerned, he had nothing to do in any case, so going along with the three people wasn't a problem. Come, I'll introduce them to you. Shilan lightly smiled to Duan Lingtian, then she brought Duan Lingtian along to walk over to the two 7-star sword sect outer court disciples that were nearby. Hu Li, Xiao Fei. This is Duan Lingtian, a Megrez Peak disciple, and he will be joining our team from now on to enter the primeval forest to train and gain experience. I've already promised him that all gains will be shared equally amongst the four of us, Shilan said to the two male outer court disciples. Nice to meet you, I'm Hu Li, a Fecta Peak disciple. The outer court disciple with a tall and robust figure and an age similar to Shilan lightly smiled as he greeted Duan Lingtian. Duan Lingtian. Duan Lingtian smiled to the robust young man, as he'd always respected those who respected him. HMPH. Right at this moment, the thin young man that stood at the side had a sneer on the corners of his mouth, and his cold and indifferent gaze sized up Duan Lingtian, then he frowned. Shilan, he's only a first-level origin core stage pretty boy. We're only adding on a burden by bringing him along. Duan Lingtian's face sank. Shilan and Hu Li were both slightly embarrassed, and Hu Li said to Duan Lingtian, he's Xiao Fei, a Fecta Peak disciple as well. Even though Xiao Fei's age is similar to mine and Shilan's, he's already a 4th-level origin core martial artist. His natural talent in the martial Dao is great, so it's hard to avoid being arrogant. Don't lower yourself to the same level as him and just take it as you never heard what he said earlier. We being able to meet here and are all 7-star sword sect disciples can be considered to be fate. So join us. Yeah, Duan Lingtian, don't take what Xiao Fei said to heart. Shilan smiled apologetically to Duan Lingtian. Xiao Fei frowned, and he was just about to speak when he noticed Hu Li and Shilan both look at him and shake their heads. In the end, he didn't speak out and only snorted in a low voice. Duan Lingtian was able to feel Shilan and Hu Li's sincerity. He had a favorable impression of the two, so he didn't refuse and nodded in agreement. Alright, let's go wander through this primeval forest together, continue forward. Hu Li laughed heartily with a heroic spirit that pierced into the sky. A true man, Duan Lingtian couldn't help but praise in his heart as he looked at Hu Li. Their group of four walked towards the inner parts of the forest, and on the way, Shilan had a serious expression as she said to Duan Lingtian, the primeval forest is vast and boundless. We're only at the outer area of the forest, and we'll be close to the inner area after walking forward further. The fierce beasts there are much stronger than the fierce beasts here. Your strength is weaker, so follow us closely. Don't split up from us. Okay, Duan Lingtian smiled to Shilan, and a trace of warmth arose within his heart. Even though he wasn't afraid of the fierce beasts within, Shilan didn't know of his true strength and only thought that he was a first-level origin core martial artist. You don't have the strength, but you're still daring to venture into the primeval forest. Courting death, Xiao Fei followed at the back, and he grunted in a low voice with a tone that didn't lack ridicule. Duan Lingtian frowned, then noticed Hu Li and Shilan smiling apologetically, and his brows eased up. He didn't argue about it with Xiao Fei and took it as if he didn't hear it. He didn't want to make it difficult on Hu Li and Shilan. This Xiao Fei was their companion after all. As they went deeper into the primeval forest, the terrain became even more complicated. There was a dense growth of trees, and the ground was covered in grass and brambles. The environment here was extremely suitable for concealment and was simply a heaven for fierce beasts. Suddenly, Duan Lingtian's spiritual force became vigilant, and he looked towards the nearby bush which was also beside Hu Li, then he shouted in a low voice, "Be careful." Hu Li instantly became vigilant when he heard Duan Lingtian's voice. And right at that moment, a completely jade-green, enormous wolf with glossy fur pounced out from within the bush, then it opened its bloody mouth to bite towards Hu Li. In the sky, 40 ancient mammoth silhouettes condensed into form. 3rd-level origin core stage fierce beast. Azure wolf, Shilan exclaimed in surprise. And right at this moment, Hu Li's body slightly inclined forward, and with a raise of his hand, the 3-foot-long blade on his back was instantly unsheathed. Whoosh, 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 a sky blue-colored sword light flashed out. Sword images suffused out to transform into a sword net that enveloped down towards the azure wolf, and it flickered with dazzling sword lights that caused one to be dazzled. Above Hu Li, 46 ancient mammoth silhouettes condensed into form. Obviously, Hu Li was similar to Shilan and possessed a cultivation at the third level of the origin core stage, and his spirit weapon was a grade 7 spirit weapon as well. Ow! The azure wolf let out a shrill cry and was torn into pieces by Hu Li's sword images. Its blood scattered onto the ground as its body crashed down. Hu Li had a slight lingering fear as he heaved a sigh of relief, then he looked at Duan Lingtian with gratitude. Duan Lingtian, thank you. If it wasn't for you, I might have been injured by it. Yeah, Duan Lingtian. The azure wolf is extremely skilled in concealment. Within this bush, we're utterly unable to notice it. How did you notice it? Shilan looked at Duan Lingtian with a face full of surprise, as she originally thought that Duan Lingtian's strength was weak and that he would need them to take care of him, but she'd never expected that Duan Lingtian still had such ability. Earlier, if it wasn't for Duan Lingtian noticing the azure wolf in time, Hu Li would surely be injured. My angle of vision from here just happened to be able to see its green eyes. Duan Lingtian lightly smiled and found an excuse. He couldn't say that his spiritual force was more sharp, right? Dog shit luck. Xiao Fei's frowned brows eased up, then he glanced at Duan Lingtian with a cold and indifferent gaze and snorted in disdain. Hu Li and Shilan frowned and were both dissatisfied at Xiao Fei. The beast core of a third-level origin core stage fierce beast is really small. Meanwhile, Hu Li dug out a beast core that flickered with a light sheen from within the azure wolf's corpse. Origin core stage fierce beasts had already condensed beast cores within their bodies. A beast core was also a type of medicinal material. Hu Li, your Skynet sword technique was something you started cultivating when you arrived at 7-star sword sect a year ago. I never imagined it had already stepped into the perfection stage. Shilan glanced at Hu Li in admiration. You killed that azure wolf with a single sword strike. Many 7-star sword sect disciples didn't cultivate sword skills before entering the 7-star sword sect, and only after they arrived at the 7-star sword sect did they start cultivating sword skills. This was something that Duan Lingtian knew of. Hu Li laughed. The martial skill I originally cultivated had some similarities with the Skynet sword technique. So I cultivated this Skynet sword technique with high proficiency. Hasn't your Soaring Wind sword stepped into the mastery stage as well? It's only the mastery stage. It will at least take me a year to break through to the perfection stage. Shilan sighed. 272 Chapter 273, The Atrocious Xiao Fei. When changing to cultivate sword skills from other types of martial skills, disciples that entered the 7-star sword sect would ordinarily choose sword skills that were similar to the martial skills they'd previously cultivated. Unless their comprehension ability was inferior to the point one would find it difficult to look seriously at them, practically all martial artists that were able to attain a cultivation at the origin core stage had already cultivated a high-grade profound rank martial skill to the perfection stage and had an extremely deep comprehension towards certain martial skills. As a top sect within the Azure Forest Imperial Kingdom, the sword skills of the 7-star sword sect were practically all high-grade profound rank sword skills, and unless one who entered the sect was originally cultivating sword skills, one would surely change to cultivate sword skills. Sword skills rely on spirit swords to be executed, and to a certain extent they possess an advantage to most martial skills. Let's go. Xiao Fei frowned when he saw Shilan and Hu Li starting to chat idly and continued to walk forward. Duan Lingtian, let's catch up to him. Shilan and Hu Li called Duan Lingtian, then the three of them caught up to Xiao Fei. In the following part of the journey, they would encounter fierce beasts from time to time. The strongest amongst these fierce beasts was at the third level of the origin core stage, and every time such a fierce beast appeared, it would be killed with the swing of a sword by Shilan and Hu Li. Our gains aren't bad. We already have 7 beast cores from 3rd level origin core stage fierce beasts and 15 beast cores from 2nd level origin core stage fierce beasts. Hu Li, who was in charge of collecting the spoils, grinned widely. Be careful, the fierce beasts further up are even stronger. Shilan looked ahead with a slightly fearful gaze, then she looked at Duan Lingtian, mainly wanting to warn Duan Lingtian. Duan Lingtian smiled to Shilan to express his understanding. Roar. Right at this moment, along with an oppressive loud roar, an extremely agile fierce beast with an enormous body dashed over and arrived before Duan Lingtian's group of 4 in the blink of an eye. While the fierce beast dashed out, Duan Lingtian could feel the vibration coming from the ground with every step it took. It was as if the earth quaked and the mountain swayed. When this enormous fierce beast dashed over, 60 ancient mammoth silhouettes condensed into form in the sky above it. Presently, the fierce beast was staring at Duan Lingtian's group of 4, seeming to be observing something. Hu Li fiercely gulped down a mouthful of saliva when he saw the fierce beast before him and exclaimed out in a low voice, 4th level origin core stage fierce beast, elephant rhino. The elephant rhino was a terrifying fierce beast that was adept in strength and speed. It was able to knock ordinary 4th level origin core stage fierce beasts flying with a single charge and was extremely tyrannical. Xiao Fei, it's up to you. When Xilan saw the elephant rhino appear, her beautiful eyes slightly squinted and descended onto Xiao Fei. The elephant rhino, a 4th level origin core stage fierce beast that possessed the strength of 60 ancient mammoths. In terms of speed, she and Hu Li were far from being able to compare with the elephant rhino. In terms of offense, even though she and Hu Li were 3rd level origin core martial artists that possessed grade 8 spirit weapons, the strength that they were able to exert when relying upon the spirit weapons was only comparable to the strength of 46 ancient mammoths. It was too much of a difference compared to the elephant rhino. Even if she and Hu Li joined forces, it would still be impossible for them to be a match for the elephant rhino. As for Duan Lingtian, as far as she was concerned, he was only a 1st level origin core stage outer court disciple that had just entered the 7-star sword sect and would unable to help. So, in her opinion, only Xiao Fei was able to deal with this elephant rhino in their group of 4. Xiao Fei's brows knitted when he heard Xilan, and a trace of complacency appeared on the corners of his mouth. Subsequently, his gaze descended onto Duan Lingtian and he said, with a mocking tone, if memory serves, there seems to be one person amongst us that hasn't fought a battle yet, right? Since you've joined our team, and since you want an equal share of the gains. You can't just sit around and enjoy the fruits of others' labor, right? Xiao Fei's voice was extremely irritating to the ear. The corners of Duan Lingtian's mouth curled into a sneer when he heard Xiao Fei. This Xiao Fei said that he was sitting around and enjoying the fruits of others' labor. All through their way here, the only reason he didn't fight a battle yet was because Xilan and Hu Li would rush over before him and didn't give him the opportunity to make a move. If they really encountered danger, he naturally wouldn't look on and do nothing. However, in the eyes of Xiao Fei, his cultivation was only at the 1st level of the origin core stage. Under these circumstances, Xiao Fei was pushing him out when faced with a 4th level origin core stage elephant rhino. The atrocious heart of Xiao Fei was apparent. Xiao Fei wanted him to go die. What? Don't dare. Seeing Duan Lingtian not moving, Xiao Fei started laughing. A pretty boy is a pretty boy in the end. Besides wooing women, what other ability do you have? As he spoke up to this point, Xiao Fei intentionally glanced at Xilan. Xilan's expression was extremely unsightly. Xiao Fei, how can you be like this? Duan Lingtian is only a 1st level origin core martial artist, whereas the elephant rhino is a 4th level origin core stage fierce beast, and only you amongst us are able to deal with it. You asking Duan Lingtian to deal with it, isn't it asking him to go die? HMPH. Xiao Fei glanced at Duan Lingtian with a cold and indifferent gaze as he ridiculed. A pretty boy that sits around and enjoys the fruits of others' labor wants to have an equal share of the gains with us without fighting a battle. Is that possible? If he's dead, then we 3 will share the gains. Isn't that even better? You. Xilan was angered by Xiao Fei to the point that her face went ghastly white and her delicate figure started trembled and was unable to speak. Xiao Fei, you're going too far. Hu Li wasn't able to stand by and watch any longer, and he frowned as he said, since Duan Lingtian has joined us now, he's our companion. How can you be like this? Hu Li, Xiao Fei sneered. If you and Xilan want to protect him, then fight it yourselves. I'm not willing to equally share my gains with a fellow that sits around and enjoys the fruits of others' labor. As Xiao Fei spoke, he retreated a few steps. Subsequently, while Xilan and Hu Li had livid expressions, he added, right, if you 2 expel him from our small team, or perhaps he himself is sensible and leaves. Then I'll act and help you too. Xiao Fei's tone was filled with complacency as if he was certain that if he didn't act, Duan Lingtian and the others wouldn't be able to deal with the elephant rhino. Xiao Fei, you. Hu Li and Xilan were both angered by Xiao Fei to the point that their faces went livid and their eyes were crimson red. They'd also noticed now that the elephant rhino was already accumulating strength and was likely to attack them at any moment. If Xiao Fei didn't help, then only the path of death was left for the 3 of them. However, asking them to expel Duan Lingtian from their small team and yield to Xiao Fei's abuse of power was something that they weren't willing to do from the bottom of their hearts. Duan Lingtian, you stand behind. I and Hu Li will deal with this elephant rhino. If the situation goes awry, you flee right away. Shi Lan looked at Duan Lingtian and had a serious expression. Yeah, Duan Lingtian, you're only at the first level of the origin core stage, and you're far from being a match for this fourth level origin core stage elephant rhino. Just stay behind us and watch us deal with it. If the situation gets dangerous, listen to Shi Lan and flee right away. Hu Li said to Duan Lingtian as well. The face of this robust young man was filled with seriousness. Duan Lingtian's gaze was complicated when he heard what Hu Li and Shi Lan said, and traces of warmth arose in his heart. HMPH. Xiao Fei, who stood at the back, saw this scene and sneered. Such a touching scene. Shi Lan, Hu Li, let me say it first. If this Duan Lingtian flees by himself and isn't expelled from our small team by the two of you, then even if you two are about to be killed by the elephant rhino, I still won't make a move to save the two of you. What Xiao Fei said caused Duan Lingtian's face to sink. This Xiao Fei was really at odds with him. Moreover, he even looked at Shi Lan's and Hu Li's lives as a trifling matter. Flames of rage arose within Duan Lingtian's heart. Xiao Fei. Hu Li looked at Xiao Fei. Coldness and indifference appeared on the corners of his mouth, and his gaze became entirely unfamiliar. I won't expel Duan Lingtian even if I die. He is my companion. Me too. Shi Lan's elegant face tightened, and her tone was incomparably firm. Good, good, then I want to see how all of you deal with the elephant rhino. Xiao Fei knew that his plan to force Duan Lingtian to leave had failed when Hu Li and Shi Lan declared their stances. He was slightly angry from embarrassment and started laughing from extreme anger. Subsequently, he looked at Duan Lingtian and a trace of a cold light flashed within his eyes. Duan Lingtian felt the hostility Xiao Fei had towards him. He understood that this Xiao Fei was a petty person who had always felt it difficult to feel at ease when a first-level origin core stage like him joined their small team. Perhaps in Xiao Fei's eyes, Duan Lingtian was only a burden. But Duan Lingtian had never imagined that just because of this Xiao Fei would actually lose all balance of judgment and make Shi Lan and Hu Li die for this. The atrocious actions of this Xiao Fei caused Duan Lingtian to feel disgust from the bottom of his heart. Shi Lan, Hu Li, thank you for your good intentions. Duan Lingtian looked at Shi Lan and Hu Li, then he lightly smiled. Duan Lingtian, what do you mean by this? You're our companion. No matter what, we won't let you leave our small team. Yeah, Duan Lingtian, we're companions, and we go through thick and thin together. Hu Li and Shi Lan thought that Duan Lingtian intended to leave by himself, and their faces instantly went pale as they hurriedly spoke out. HMPH. I'll consider you sensible. Xiao Fei naturally thought Duan Lingtian intended to leave himself as well, and instantly, a trace of a victorious smile appeared on the corners of his mouth. Unexpectedly, Duan Lingtian's actions in the next moment caused the smile on the corners of his mouth to freeze. Shi Lan, Hu Li, what are you two talking about? I'm not leaving, I just want to tell the two of you to leave this elephant rhino to me. Duan Lingtian knew that Shi Lan and Hu Li had misunderstood, so he hurriedly explained with a light smile. As he spoke, he took a stride forward and walked towards the fourth-level origin core stage elephant rhino. As it happens, he could use this elephant rhino to properly test the worm python form's quake energy. I'll suppress my strength to the third level of the origin core stage and exert the strength of 40 ancient mammoths, then I'll use a grade 7 spirit sword. Forget it, I'll use a grade 8 spirit sword. In this way, my offensive strength will be comparable to the strength of 48 ancient mammoths. At the same time that he walked out, he thought in his heart, this elephant rhino is a fierce beast at the fourth level of the origin core stage and possesses the strength of 60 ancient mammoths. I'll test if I'm able to use the strength of 48 ancient mammoths and rely on the quake energy to kill it. As he thought up to this point, Duan Lingtian was slightly excited in his heart. Unexpectedly, no, a fourth level origin core stage fierce beast isn't something you can deal with. Duan Lingtian, quickly come back. Shi Lan noticed Duan Lingtian's actions, and her beautiful face went pale. 273 Chapter 274, Xiao Fei's Obstruction. Courting death. A trace of a sneer and disdain appeared on the corners of Xiao Fei's mouth when he heard what Duan Lingtian said and saw Duan Lingtian's actions, and he had a face full of taking pleasure on Duan Lingtian's misfortune. A mere first-level origin core martial artist wanted to deal with a fourth-level origin core stage elephant rhino. As far as he was concerned, this pretty boy was simply overestimating himself. And he was virtually courting death. Xiao Fei, it's already come to this and you're still taking pleasure on his misfortune. Hu Li glanced at Xiao Fei in dissatisfaction, then he looked at Duan Lingtian. Duan Lingtian, quickly come back. That elephant rhino isn't something you can deal with. Don't worry. Duan Lingtian heard Xilan and Hu Li's concern and turned around to lightly smile to them. Hu Li, he's rushing to get himself killed. There's no need for you to stop him, Xiao Fei said indifferently, as if he eagerly looked forward to Duan Lingtian dying under the tusks of the elephant rhino. Xiao Fei, you're going too far. Xilan shouted out angrily, and her beautiful face flushed red as she said to Hu Li. Hu Li, I'm going to help Duan Lingtian. Hu Li replied and wanted to go together with Xilan to help Duan Lingtian. Duan Lingtian instead shook his head. You two just watch, I alone am sufficient to deal with this elephant rhino. Hu Li and Xilan couldn't help but be stunned when they heard this. He alone is sufficient. Duan Lingtian, now isn't the time to try and be brave. Xilan and Hu Li practically said at the same time. Haha, looks like you are rather confident, pretty boy. Let me see how you deal with this elephant rhino by yourself. Xiao Fei laughed in ridicule as he looked at Duan Lingtian, then he looked at Hu Li and Xilan. Xilan, Hu Li, you two have good intentions. But unfortunately, it was refused by him. Since he wants to court death, then you two should help him fulfill his wish. Duan Lingtian directly ignored what Xiao Fei said, then he nodded to Xilan and Hu Li before turning around and dashing towards the elephant rhino. Xilan, let's go. We'll go help him, Hu Li called Xilan even though Duan Lingtian said that he didn't need their help, but how could they look on and do nothing? As far as they were concerned, Duan Lingtian was their companion, and they would absolutely not cast Duan Lingtian aside. However, right when they were about to move out, when their gazes touched upon Duan Lingtian's location far off into the distance, they completely froze. Heavens! What had they seen? As Duan Lingtian dashed on the way towards the elephant rhino, the energy of heaven and earth roiled above him and actually condensed into 40 ancient mammoth silhouettes. The strength of 40 ancient mammoths. This was the sign of the third level of the origin core stage. In other words, Duan Lingtian was actually a third-level origin core martial artist. This pleasant surprise that suddenly appeared caused Xilan and Hu Li's hearts to tremble, and disbelief appeared on their faces. They both glanced at each other and were able to see the shock in each other's eyes. They didn't overlook the most important point. Duan Lingtian's age was at most around 20, and he even might not be 20 yet. A third-level origin core martial artist that was around 20. What notion was this? Even in the entire 7-star sword sect, such natural talent could be considered to be a first-rate genius disciple. Their heartbeats abruptly quickened, and they were happy and alarmed. They were happy that Duan Lingtian actually wasn't a first-level origin core martial artist, he was a third-level origin core martial artist. They were alarmed because even though Duan Lingtian was a third-level origin core martial artist, he still wasn't a match for the fourth-level origin core stage elephant rhino. How could this be possible? Xiao Fei stared blankly at the 40 ancient mammoth silhouettes above Duan Lingtian and had a face full of disbelief. This pretty boy, how could he possibly have such a formidable strength? His face went gloomy. As far as he was concerned, Duan Lingtian's natural talent had far surpassed his. When he was at this age, his cultivation was far from this level. Instantly, his chest was filled with envy. His face was gloomy as he gazed at Duan Lingtian's figure that flashed towards the elephant rhino, and his eyes flickered with a cold light and the corners of his mouth curled into a sneer. So what if you're at the third level of the origin core stage? Aren't you still going to die beneath the tusks of the elephant rhino? As far as he was concerned, it was impossible for a third-level origin core martial artist to survive under the tusks of the elephant rhino. Hu Li, Duan Lingtian is at the third level of the origin core stage like us. Even if the three of us aren't able to kill the elephant rhino when we join forces, we ought to be able to force it to retreat. After finding out about Duan Lingtian's true cultivation level, Xilan's eyes shone as she looked at Hu Li, and a trace of joy appeared on her elegant face. Okay. Hu Li nodded and dashed out with Xilan. If 3 third-level origin core martial artists were to join forces, they indeed were likely to force the elephant rhino to retreat. However, Xilan's and Hu Li's figures that flashed out stopped in next to no time because there was a figure that flashed towards them and obstructed them, not allowing them to help Duan Lingtian. Xiao Fei, what is the meaning of this? Hu Li's face went gloomy. Now he'd seen that Duan Lingtian had started to fight the elephant rhino and was using a profound movement technique to tangle with the elephant rhino. As far as he was concerned, if he were to be a little later, it would be very likely that Duan Lingtian would lose his life. Xiao Fei, what's this going to help Duan Lingtian got to do with you? Don't go too far. Shi Lan never thought Xiao Fei would obstruct them as well, and her beautiful face went grim. Her pair of beautiful eyes flickered with a luster of rage as he stared fixedly at Xiao Fei. Shi Lan, Hu Li, it isn't that I'm intentionally obstructing the two of you. I'm only helping that pretty boy. Didn't he say that he didn't need your help? Since it's like that, as a member of this small team, I naturally have to help him obstruct the two of you so that you two don't steal away his limelight. Xiao Fei grinned widely, grinning brilliantly with a face full of righteous indignation. As if he really was kind-heartedly helping Duan Lingtian. But Xiao Fei's smile in the eyes of Hu Li and Shi Lan was so hypocritical. Xiao Fei, it's fine if you don't want to help Duan Lingtian, but you still stop us from helping him. Is it because you have to see him dead before you can be happy? Hu Li's eyes were crimson red, and he raised his hand to grasp a hold of his sheathed sword on his back, ready to draw his sword at any moment. Xiao Fei, get out of the way. Shi Lan's voice had a trace of icy cold rage mixed within, and in her hand, a 3-foot-long blade appeared out of thin air. What, you two want to attack me? Do the two of you think you are a match for me? The corners of Xiao Fei's mouth curled into a sneer, and in his hand, a dark green spirit sword appeared out of thin air. Don't you two forget, not only does my cultivation far surpass the two of you, even the spirit sword in my hand is a grade 7 spirit sword. Xiao Fei's face had a sense of disdain mixed within it as he looked at Hu Li and Shi Lan. As far as he was concerned, not to mention Hu Li and Shi Lan, even if Hu Li, Shi Lan, and the pretty boy joined forces, it still would be impossible for them to be a match for him. If you still don't get out of the way, then we won't pull our punches. Shi Lan's beautiful face had traces of rage on it, and she loathed Xiao Fei's current actions from the bottom of her heart. How could she have not noticed in the past that this Xiao Fei was such an atrocious person? Today, she could be considered to have witnessed Xiao Fei's true face. Xiao Fei, get out of the way. Hu Li had an agitated expression, and his 3-foot-long blade left its sheath to enter his hands. What, you two really want to make a move against me? Then let me see if you two have improved lately. Xiao Fei started laughing, and his smile contained traces of disdain. Whoosh, whoosh, Shi Lan and Hu Li couldn't hold back any longer and directly swung their swords to flash towards Xiao Fei. Xiao Fei seemed as if he was playing with the two of them, and their swords were easily parried by Xiao Fei's sword. Moreover, not to mention the fact that the grade 7 spirit sword in his hand far surpassed the grade 8 spirit swords in the hands of Shi Lan and Hu Li. In terms of strength, he was a 4th-level origin core martial artist, and compared to the two of them, who were 3rd-level origin core martial artists, he had an entire strength of 20 ancient mammoths more than them. Under his sword, Shi Lan and Hu Li were no different than children. Whoosh. Presently, Duan Lingtian was using a cultivation at the 3rd level of the origin core stage to execute the spirit serpent movement technique and flash around the elephant rhino. Every time, he would safely dodge past the elephant rhino's ram. The sharp tusks of the elephant rhino had shaved past Duan Lingtian's outer court disciple's attire many times as it flashed past, but it wasn't even able to touch the corners of Duan Lingtian's clothes. Roar! The elephant rhino finally was enraged and went berserk. At this time, Duan Lingtian didn't dare continue playing with the elephant rhino by executing the spirit serpent movement technique with a strength at the 3rd level of the origin core stage, as the current elephant rhino had already completely revealed the speed it should have as a 4th level origin core stage fierce beast. The speed that it revealed with the strength of 60 ancient mammoths was far from something he could match with the speed he revealed when using the strength of 40 ancient mammoths. Instantly, 60 ancient mammoth silhouettes appeared above Duan Lingtian. Now, dodging the attacks of the elephant rhino was accomplished by him with ease. Suddenly, the sounds of weapons clashing entered his ears, and Duan Lingtian frowned. Could it be that Shi Lan and the others have encountered danger? When he flipped his body to leap onto the elephant rhino's back, he glanced over and saw a scene that made him incomparably enraged. Xiao Fei. Duan Lingtian's face sank. He was able to perceive that Xiao Fei was playing tricks on Shi Lan and Hu Li. Moreover, Xiao Fei's aim was apparent. It was to stop Shi Lan and Hu Li from helping him. Although he didn't require the help of Shi Lan and Hu Li, Xiao Fei's current actions still completely enraged him. I originally wanted to play with you for a while, but now I don't have the time to play with you anymore. Duan Lingtian looked at the elephant rhino beneath his feet and his eyes went cold. Instantly, 20 of the 60 ancient mammoth silhouettes above him vanished into thin air and once again declined sharply to 40. Duan Lingtian once again controlled his strength at the strength of 40 ancient mammoths. Comparable to an ordinary third-level origin core martial artist. Whoosh! A 3-foot-long blade appeared out of thin air in Duan Lingtian's hand. This 3-foot-long blade was precisely the sword that he refined in the Swallow Mountain County's county city when he had a life wager by weapons refinement with the Zhou clan's second elder. And it was able to amplify his strength by 20%. Whoosh! Duan Lingtian attacked out with his sword. The strength of a grade 8 spirit sword bloomed out, and the 40 ancient mammoth silhouettes above him instantly became 48. His sword flashed out as if transforming into a bolt of lightning that descended onto the head of the elephant rhino. The sword encountered an extremely strong resistance at the spot where it descended. The skin of this elephant rhino is really thick. Duan Lingtian frowned. 274 Chapter 275, Savage Leopard. Roar! Although the 3-foot-long blade only plunged slightly into the head of the elephant rhino, it still felt pain. It roared in grief and its enormous body started violently swaying, wanting to shake Duan Lingtian off. Duan Lingtian was stable like Mount Tai and remained unmoved, and a smile appeared on the corners of his mouth. Suddenly, Duan Lingtian's gaze went cold. Quake energy. Origin energy twined on the 3-foot-long blade in his hand and started vibrating violently with a frequency that went faster and faster. Om, 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 comma. The terrifying quake energy vibrated in the origin energy on the 3-foot-long blade, and the strong skin and flesh of the elephant rhino was quickly sliced open. The sharp edge of the sword plunged straight into the skull of the elephant rhino. Fresh blood shot out like a storm, and the quake energy still continued. The vibrating origin energy on the 3-foot-long blade in Duan Lingtian's hand directly shattered the skull of the elephant rhino. Roar! The elephant rhino let out its final roar, then its enormous body crashed onto the ground, causing dust to suffuse the air. Dead. Bang! The ground quaked when the enormous body of the elephant rhino fell. It allowed the 3 people that were in combat in the distance to notice the events and stop their actions. Shilan and Hu Li stared blankly at the fallen elephant rhino. They had faces full of shock and disbelief. Never had they imagined that Duan Lingtian would actually kill the elephant rhino. Moreover, Duan Lingtian was without a scratch. No, impossible, impossible. Xiao Fei was completely dumbstruck when he saw the scene before him. That pretty boy actually killed the elephant rhino. How could this be possible? I'm surely dreaming, surely. However, when he pinched his thigh and felt the pain that came from it, he realized that this was no dream, but reality. Duan Lingtian took out the beast core of the elephant rhino, then returned to the side of Shilan and Hu Li before passing the best core to Hu Li. Hu Li, keep it first, and we'll share it equally later. Duan Lingtian, you're really something. Hu Li gave Duan Lingtian a big thumbs up, then he shook his head and sighed. Unfortunately, I didn't see how you did it earlier. You're actually able to kill a 4th-level Origin Core Stage elephant rhino with a cultivation at the 3rd level of the Origin Core Stage. It's simply unbelievable. As he spoke up to this point, Hu Li's eyes had resentment within them as he swept his gaze at the nearby Xiao Fei. Duan Lingtian, you're too formidable. Shilan looked at Duan Lingtian with a face full of adoration, as Duan Lingtian killing that elephant rhino brought too great of a shock to her. Before today, if someone told her that a 3rd-level Origin Core martial artist was able to kill a 4th-level Origin Core Stage fierce beast, she would absolutely not believe it. But now, she had no choice but to believe it. Because this had happened right before her very eyes. In next to no time, Shilan seemed to have recalled something, and she looked at Xiao Fei with a furious expression. Xiao Fei, let's go our separate ways. As she recalled what happened earlier, Shilan's heart was filled with rage. Luckily, Duan Lingtian was alright. Otherwise, she wouldn't be able to forgive herself for her entire life. After all, it was she who'd pulled Duan Lingtian into this small team. Xiao Fei, leave. In the future, I, Hu Li, will take it as I've never known you. Hu Li looked at Xiao Fei with a face full of dissatisfaction. Now when he looked at Xiao Fei, he couldn't help but recall what happened earlier and was extremely furious. What, now that you two have this pretty boy, you plan to kick away the ladder? Xiao Fei's face had gone gloomy when Shilan spoke, and when he heard what Hu Li said, his gaze went cold. Do you two think that I, Xiao Fei, am someone the two of you can have at your beck and call? He was already envious of Duan Lingtian, and now when he saw that Shi Lan and Hu Li actually wanted to drive him away for the sake of Duan Lingtian, evil flames of rage instantly arose within his heart. Actually, asking him to leave the small team was no big deal. But when he thought of how it was because of this pretty boy, his heart was filled with hatred and rage, and he was unwilling to let it go at that. Xiao Fei, what you did earlier really disappointed us. Hu Li looked at Xiao Fei and his face sank. I've said it before, I was only helping that pretty boy earlier. The facts prove that I was right to obstruct the two of you, as he could kill the elephant rhino by himself. Xiao Fei sneered as if he'd long since known that Duan Lingtian had the strength to kill the elephant rhino. Actually, how could Shi Lan and Hu Li not know of those thoughts of his? And for a moment, their faces were extremely unsightly. Shameless. Alright, you two don't have to cut your relationship because of me. Duan Lingtian shook his head and lightly smiled. Shi Lan and Hu Li were stunned for a moment when they heard Duan Lingtian. If any elder helped appeal for Xiao Fei, they wouldn't find it strange, but the person that appealed was instead Duan Lingtian. They both looked at Duan Lingtian at the same time with faces full of astonishment. HMPH. At least you're sensible, Xiao Fei laughed complacently when he heard Duan Lingtian. He thought that Duan Lingtian was afraid of him. As far as he was concerned, even if Duan Lingtian was able to kill the elephant rhino, it was only because Duan Lingtian's luck was good. Moreover, Duan Lingtian had spent an extremely long time to kill the elephant rhino. If he had attacked by relying upon his grade 7 spirit sword, he would only need a single move, an instant, and it would be sufficient to kill the elephant rhino. In his eyes, Duan Lingtian was nothing. Although Shi Lan and Hu Li didn't know why Duan Lingtian would appeal on Xiao Fei's behalf, since Duan Lingtian, the concerned party, didn't fuss over it, they didn't say anything further either. But they now completely took Xiao Fei to be a stranger. Xiao Fei didn't care about it either, as he only stayed behind for the sake of striving for respect and striving for face. Moreover, he would absolutely not allow that pretty boy to have an easy time. Duan Lingtian naturally noticed the icy cold gaze that Xiao Fei swept at him, but he didn't care. A sneer appeared on the corners of his mouth as if he already had control over the whole situation. Let's continue. Duan Lingtian called Shi Lan and Hu Li then continued walking forward. Xiao Fei naturally caught up when he saw Duan Lingtian's group of 3 walking forward, and his icy cold gaze never left Duan Lingtian's side. Now, he wished for nothing more than to kill Duan Lingtian. But he wanted to see Duan Lingtian being killed by a fierce beast. Only in this way would he be able to vent the hatred in his heart. Their group continued walking forward, and they hadn't walked for long when Duan Lingtian stopped moving. What's wrong? Shi Lan and Hu Li both had bewildered expressions. Why? Xiao Fei sneered and continued walking forward. Duan Lingtian's brows knitted as he slowly said, I'm afraid we've encountered trouble. In the beginning, Hu Li and Shi Lan were still slightly baffled, but in next to no time, their gazes descended into the distance and their pupils couldn't help but constrict. A leopard with a hideous and scrawny body walked over from afar. This leopard had a pair of dark green eyes, and every step it took seemed to transform into a heavy hammer that struck onto their chests, causing them to be slightly unable to catch their breaths. Savage leopard. Xiao Fei's alarmed cry sounded out at almost the exact same time, and traces of fear and dread were mixed within it. Savage leopard, a 6th level origin core stage fierce beast. If he were to go against the savage leopard, he wouldn't have the slightest confidence. Once a savage leopard launched an attack, it was able to exert the strength of 80 ancient mammoths. Whereas he, even when relying on his grade 7 spirit sword, was at most able to exert a strength of 76 ancient mammoths. The strength of 60 ancient mammoths was from his cultivation at the 4th level of the origin core stage, and the other strength of 16 ancient mammoths depended on the amplification provided by the grade 7 spirit sword. This was only offensive strength. In terms of offense, he had a grade 7 spirit sword, but that was still inferior to the savage leopard. In terms of speed, the grade 7 spirit sword was unable to amplify speed, so his speed could only rely on the strength of 60 ancient mammoths to speed him up, and it was far inferior to the speed of the savage leopard that had the strength of 80 ancient mammoths to speed it up. Xiao Fei started to retreat when he saw the dark green eyes of the savage leopard staring at him. He understood the habitual nature of the savage leopard in his heart. Once a savage leopard targeted someone, it would target that person till the end. Even if the person were to run, the savage leopard would still catch up to the person and tear the person into pieces. So it was practically impossible for him to flee. An insane thought arose within his heart. If someone were to attack the savage leopard would surely abandon its original target and move to target the person that attacked it. In next to no time, Xiao Fei retreated to Duan Lingtian's group of 3, then he shouted out explosively, Xilan, Hu Li, and that pretty boy. We'll join forces and kill this savage leopard. Duan Lingtian's group of 3 didn't move when they heard what Xiao Fei said, and they looked at Xiao Fei as if they were looking at an idiot. Xiao Fei, do you think we don't know the habitual nature of the savage leopard? You want us to attack the savage leopard and attract its attention. Then you can take this opportunity to flee, right? Xilan was terrified when facing the savage leopard, and her delicate figure was frightened to the point that it started trembling lightly, but when she heard what Xiao Fei said, she still couldn't refrain from ridiculing him. Xiao Fei, you're too atrocious. Hu Li's face was extremely unsightly as well. This Xiao Fei actually wanted to step over their corpses to flee. Did Xiao Fei really take him to be an idiot? The savage leopard was calm and didn't make a sound as it walked step by step towards Xiao Fei, as if there was only Xiao Fei in the world at this moment. Even when Xiao Fei had retreated behind Duan Lingtian's group of 3, the savage leopard still followed him step by step. When the savage leopard walked past Duan Lingtian's group of 3, Xilan's face was deathly pale, and the trembling of her delicate figure had never stopped. And Hu Li's face was extremely unsightly as well, his legs were like lead, not daring to move a bit. He knew that once the savage leopard pounced and killed Xiao Fei, it would turn its crosshair onto them. Xilan and Hu Li felt a burst of powerlessness in their hearts when faced with the savage leopard. Only Duan Lingtian had a calm expression as he glanced at Xiao Fei with a sneer on the corners of his mouth. Did this Xiao Fei really think he was so magnanimous to kind-heartedly let him stay? Actually, before Duan Lingtian killed the elephant rhino, he had already intended to deal with Xiao Fei, and only until after he killed the elephant rhino and his sharp spiritual force perceived the aura of the savage leopard did another plan arise within his heart. The present scene, and everything else, were all within his control. If all of you don't join forces with me, then all of us will die. Xiao Fei's expression was unsightly, and traces of dread was emitted from his eyes. He didn't forget to make a last effort with an intention to persuade Duan Lingtian's group of 3 to attack. Duan Lingtian's eyes narrowed, and he looked at Xiao Fei as he said indifferently, Xiao Fei, if I didn't remember wrongly, until now, it seems to be that only you within our small team hasn't fought a battle yet, right? 275 Chapter 276, Duan Lingtian's Strength. As a member of our small team, if you want to share the gains equally with us, you can't keep sitting around and waiting to enjoy the fruits of others' labor, right? Now, Duan Lingtian completely returned what Xiao Fei said to him earlier. Xiao Fei was angered to the point his face was livid, but he was utterly unable to retort. These words were all what he said to Duan Lingtian earlier. For a moment, he only felt that he'd hurt himself by his own doing. Meanwhile, he realized that there was a problem. If he were to attack the savage leopard first, Duan Lingtian's group of 3 would absolutely not make a move. He took a deep breath, then he forcefully suppressed the fear in his heart. I'll attack the savage leopard now. If all of you don't join forces with me, then once it kills me, the 3 of you can wait for death. Xiao Fei's eyes were crimson red as he stared at the savage leopard and origin energy flashed atop the grade 7 spirit sword in his hand. Instantly, Xiao Fei moved as if transforming into a gust of wind. He rushed towards the savage leopard aggressively, and above him, 60 ancient mammoth silhouettes condensed into form. He completely exerted the strength of a 4th-level origin core martial artist when facing the savage leopard and didn't dare hold back in the slightest. He understood in his heart that at this time, a shred of holding back would likely instantly cost him his life. At the same time, the grade 7 spirit sword in his hand flashed out as if transforming into a bolt of lightning that swiftly flew out to pierce towards an eye of the savage leopard. No matter what fierce beast it was, the eyes were always a weak point. Now, another 16 ancient mammoth silhouettes appeared beside the 60 ancient mammoth silhouettes that were above Xiao Fei. The might of a grade 7 spirit weapon. He'd exerted all his strength on this sword strike. This Xiao Fei is intelligent. The corners of Duan Lingtian's mouth curled into a sneer when he saw Xiao Fei attacking the eyes of the savage leopard. But he wasn't optimistic about Xiao Fei's attack, as the speed of the savage leopard was far from something Xiao Fei could compare to. Thus, it was impossible for Xiao Fei's sword strike to touch the savage leopard. The result was exactly as Duan Ling Tian thought. The 6th level origin core stage savage leopard's body flashed and then easily dodged Xiao Fei's sword strike. Roar! The savage leopard roared for the first time, and its roar was filled with rage. No! Xiao Fei's pupils constricted when he saw the savage leopard dodge his attack and pounce towards him, and he let out a sad and shrill cry. In the next moment, his body was knocked flying by the savage leopard. Subsequently, the savage leopard opened its bloody mouth and bit at one of Xiao Fei's legs, and with a squelch, it forcefully tore off one of Xiao Fei's legs and blood splattered all over the ground. Ah! Xiao Fei let out a shrill cry that was incomparably forlorn and bitter. It caused a chill to run down one's spine. Xiao Fei's face was ghastly pale, and he used his origin energy to stop his bleeding with great difficulty. Then he shouted out in grief towards Duan Ling Tian's group of 3, "You guys still aren't attacking." Xi Lan and Hu Li both had unsightly expressions. He wants them to attack. Isn't that the same as going to die? Thinking about how they would die anyway and looking at Xiao Fei's current miserable state, they glanced at the nearby Duan Ling Tian and then looked at each other before fiercely nodding as if they'd made some sort of decision. "Duan Ling Tian, we'll buy some time for you. Hurry up and flee," Hu Li abruptly shouted out explosively, and he seemed as if he was in a frenzy as the 3-foot-long blade in his hand flashed out. Skynet sword technique. The sword images that covered the sky descended down, enveloping the location the savage leopard was at. "Duan Ling Tian, quickly flee," Xi Lan shouted out with a tender voice, then she caught up to Hu Li and struck out with her sword at the savage leopard. At this moment, Xi Lan and Hu Li's gazes were firm like never before. As far as they were concerned, Duan Ling Tian's natural talent in the martial Dao was so high and his achievements in the future were limitless. If he were to die here like this, then it would truly be too unfortunate. Moreover, they really took Duan Ling Tian as their companion and as a friend. Duan Ling Tian's heart trembled, and a warm current arose within it. It had already been very long since he was moved like this. The last time was over 3 years ago, when the fatty Li Zan blocked Duan Ling Xing's palm strike for him. Only at that time was he moved like this. Seeing Xi Lan and Hu Li facing death willingly, Xiao Fei endured the pain, and his face was pale and unsightly as he shouted, "Two lunatics." He'd never expected that even at this time, Xi Lan and Hu Li would still be thinking of protecting Duan Ling Tian. This caused infinite envy and hatred to arise within his heart. Why can he make Xi Lan and Hu Li be like this but I can't? Xiao Fei looked at Duan Ling Tian with eyes filled with unwillingness, rage, and a trace of an icy cold killing intent that seemed ready to swallow Duan Ling Tian appeared. Roar! The savage leopard originally intended to kill Xiao Fei, but when it noticed Xi Lan and Hu Li flashing towards it, it instantly changed its target. Its pair of dark green eyes stared fixedly at Xi Lan and Hu Li, and its eyes contained a trace of icy coldness. A trace of despair flashed within the eyes of Xi Lan and Hu Li when they saw the savage leopard pouncing at them. But within this despair, there were traces of another feeling mixed within. There was firmness, and there was braveness to face death unflinchingly. Everything was just for the sake of helping Duan Ling Tian obtain a chance at survival. Be careful, Duan Ling Tian finally moved, as he knew that if he still didn't make a move, Xi Lan and Hu Li would surely die. And this wasn't something he wanted to see. Duan Ling Tian's figure seemed to transform into an arrow that left the bowstring. He was incomparably swift as he directly flashed towards the location of the savage leopard. At this moment, he didn't hold back any longer and used his entire strength to dash out. Xi Lan and Hu Li were in imminent danger, so he didn't dare be slow. No, impossible. Xiao Fei, who had one of his legs bitten off by the savage leopard and was collapsed on the floor, just happened to be facing Duan Ling Tian's location, and when he saw the 71 ancient mammoth silhouettes that appeared above Duan Ling Tian, he was completely dumbstruck. The strength of 71 ancient mammoths. According to his knowledge, even a 5th-level origin core martial artist only had the strength of 70 ancient mammoths. This Duan Ling Tian is a 5th-level origin core martial artist. How old is he? Instantly, traces of coldness arose within Xiao Fei's heart, as he never imagined that Duan Ling Tian's strength and natural talent were actually so terrifying. Terrifying to the point that it struck terror in his heart. Of course, after his feeling of fear came infinite hatred and envy. The heavens are unfair. Why can this pretty boy possess such great natural talent? Whoosh! At the same time that Duan Ling Tian dashed out, a sword appeared within his hand, a grade 7 spirit sword. He didn't dare be careless when facing the savage leopard. Shilan and Hu Li only heard an awe-inspiring sound of wind coming from behind them, then an incomparably swift figure descended before them. Duan Lingtian. Shilan and Hu Li's faces went ghastly pale. They currently didn't even have the time to think about why Duan Lingtian's speed would be so swift, and there was only one thought in their minds: Duan Lingtian actually didn't flee. Right when helplessness and bitterness arose within their hearts, and they thought that Duan Lingtian would die with them, they unintentionally noticed the ancient mammoth silhouettes above Duan Lingtian. And this glance nearly shocked them out of their wits. They clearly saw that along with the 3-foot-long blade in Duan Lingtian's hand flashing out, his origin energy burst forth, and there were now 90 ancient mammoths above Duan Lingtian. It was precisely on the foundation of his own strength of 71 ancient mammoths that Duan Lingtian utilized the amplification of his grade 7 spirit sword. Duan Lingtian's gaze went cold as he faced the savage leopard that pounced towards him. Sword drawing arts. A sharp sword strike was easily executed in the hands of Duan Lingtian. In the eyes of Shilan and Hu Li, the sword in Duan Lingtian's hand seemed to instantly vanish without a trace. Of course, they knew that it didn't really vanish. Instead, the speed of the sword had attained a certain level, causing their eyes to be unable to catch sight of it. Their hearts completely rose to their throats, and they looked on at the scene before them with a dumbstruck expression. Roar! At the same time that the savage leopard pounced over, it seemed to have noticed how terrifying Duan Lingtian's sword strike was, and its dark green eyes emitted a trace of terror. Then it let out a low roar before its body trembled, wanting to dodge. But even though the savage leopard's speed was swift, Duan Lingtian's sword was even swifter. The speed of the savage leopard was at most powered by the strength of 80 ancient mammoths. Whereas Duan Lingtian's sword strike contained the amplification of a grade 7 spirit sword. The speed of his sword was powered by the strength of an entire 90 ancient mammoths. Pooh! Blood splattered all over. The grade 7 spirit sword in Duan Lingtian's hand directly penetrated between the brows of the savage leopard. And this wasn't the end. Duan Lingtian's eyes went cold and the corners of his mouth curled into a cold smile. Quake energy. Instantly, origin energy raged on the grade 7 spirit sword in Duan Lingtian's hand, and it vibrated at an extremely high frequency, a frequency that grew higher and higher. Om, 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 comma. Under the fueling from the origin energy, the terrifying quake energy penetrated the skull of the savage leopard like penetrating dry leaves. Crack! An ear-piercing sound of bones shattering abruptly echoed out, causing a chill to run down one's spine. Roar! The savage leopard let out its final low roar, and its jade-green eyes that were incomparably dazzling a moment ago had now completely dimmed down. Its body that was all skin and bones crashed into the ground and was completely devoid of any signs of life. The 6th level origin core stage savage leopard, dead. Silence. The entire scene was deathly silent. Shilan and Hu Li looked at this scene in stupefaction. They couldn't recover from their shock even after a very long time. At this moment, Duan Lingtian's figure was that imposing in their eyes, imposing like a mountain that they could rely on. Hu Li fiercely gulped down a mouthful of saliva and was unable to calm down the shock in his heart even until now. At that moment earlier, he felt like his heart was practically on the verge of stopping from fear. Although Shilan's reaction wasn't as exaggerated as Hu Li's, her gaze toward Duan Lingtian was extremely complicated. She recalled the scene when she'd just encountered Duan Lingtian not long ago. At that time, she even saved Duan Lingtian. Now it would seem that Duan Lingtian was suppressing his strength at that time to play with that fierce beast, and her actions of saving Duan Lingtian was unnecessary. As she thought up to this point, she couldn't stop her face from flushing. Nevertheless, Duan Lingtian's strength still deeply shocked Shilan and Hu Li. As far as they knew, the strength Duan Lingtian revealed earlier was at least at the 5th level of the origin core stage. A 5th level origin core martial artist at around 20 years old. According to their knowledge, such a monster had never once appeared within the 7-star sword sect. You're a 5th level origin core martial artist. A slightly hoarse voice entered Duan Lingtian's ears, and it was filled with traces of icy cold hatred. Duan Lingtian glanced over. It was Xiao Fei who was half lying on the floor, and he gazed at Duan Lingtian with a face full of rage. Duan Lingtian, you clearly were confident in killing that savage leopard. Then why did you allow that savage leopard to injure me? You did it on purpose. You did it on purpose. 276 Chapter 277, Xiao Fei pleading for mercy. Xiao Fei's voice was slightly hysterical and was practically howling. His face was flushed red as if his neck was tightly being choked by someone, and his cold eyes stared fixedly at Duan Lingtian and flickered with an awe-inspiring killing intent. Duan Lingtian clearly had the strength to kill the savage leopard, but he didn't make a move and allowed the savage leopard to tear off one of Xiao Fei's legs. Xiao Fei was almost certain that this Duan Lingtian definitely did it on purpose. A leg being torn off by a savage leopard was completely different from a leg being severed by human weapons. In the case of the latter, there was still hope to reconnect the leg if it was treated in time, but it was impossible for it to be reconnected in the case of the former. I'm a cripple from now on. I'm a cripple from now on. And all of this is because of him. Because of him. Xiao Fei despaired in his heart, and his extremely icy cold gaze stared fixedly at Duan Lingtian. As far as he was concerned, if it wasn't for Duan Lingtian, he wouldn't be crippled now. Now, if it wasn't for him using all of his origin energy to stop the fresh blood that was gushing out from his severed leg, he'd surely make a move against Duan Lingtian to vent the hatred in his heart. Even though he wasn't a match for Duan Lingtian had destroyed him. He hated him. It could be imagined how it would be impossible for someone who'd lost a leg now to have a future. In his lifetime, he was bound to become a cripple and accomplish nothing. I did it on purpose. Duan Lingtian didn't deny it when he heard what Xiao Fei said, and he smiled in a cold and indifferent manner. Xiao Fei, so what if I did it intentionally? Why do you think I should have saved you? Xiao Fei's face sank. Yeah, why should this Duan Lingtian save me? Xiao Fei. Duan Lingtian stared coldly at Xiao Fei, and his face seemed as if it was covered in a layer of ice. You've been unhappy with me since the moment I joined this small team, and I didn't make a fuss about it when you spoke rudely. But later on, you actually wanted to make me throw my life away. You ridiculed me many times for the sake of making me fight, and it was nothing more than wanting to infuriate me and make me lose all reason. Is it so? Xiao Fei didn't deny it. His gaze became cold and fierce. But you didn't die in the end. Yeah, I didn't die. Because I'm not the first-level origin core martial artist that you thought I was. The corners of Duan Lingtian's mouth curled into a sneer. I can imagine how if I really was a first-level origin core martial artist today, I would definitely have died against that elephant rhino. I'm extremely curious, today was the first time we've met, how could you hate me so much to the extent of wanting me to die? I precisely want you to die. Xiao Fei's eyes contained piercing coldness. You, a first-level origin core stage trash, on what basis are you joining our small team and sharing our gains equally? Since Xilan and Hu Li wanted to let you stay, I wanted to see how they'd be able to protect you with their strength. As he spoke up to this point, the corners of Xiao Fei's mouth curled into a cold smile as he looked at Xilan and Hu Li. And you too, Xiao Fei, am a dignified fourth-level origin core martial artist, and it's your honor that I came with the both of you into the primeval forest. How could I endure it when the two of you actually repeatedly went against me for the sake of this pretty boy? I precisely wanted this pretty boy to die, only then would I be able to vent the hatred in my heart. Xiao Fei's face revealed a sense of madness. Xiao Fei, Xilan and Hu Li's faces sank, as they'd never imagined that Xiao Fei was actually such a petty person. He wanted Duan Lingtian to die just because of this. Traces of coldness couldn't help but arise within their hearts. It was lucky that they'd seen Xiao Fei's true colors today, otherwise, even if they were not eventually betrayed by Xiao Fei, they might have inadvertently helped him betray them. Duan Lingtian's gaze seemed to be enveloped with a layer of coldness as he stared at Xiao Fei. You plotted against me, wanting me to throw my life away. Let's leave it at that. But you, what did you do while I was fighting the elephant rhino? I didn't want your help. But why did you have to obstruct Xilan and Hu Li when they wanted to help me? You, on what basis did you obstruct them? Utmost rage was mixed within Duan Lingtian's voice. HMPH. Xiao Fei swept Duan Lingtian with a cold gaze and madness was revealed on his face. But unfortunately, the elephant rhino was actually unable to kill you, pretty boy. I never imagined that a pretty boy like you would have concealed his strength so deeply. As he finished speaking, Xiao Fei's tone had a trace of unwillingness mixed within. Duan Lingtian started laughing extremely brilliantly. So in other words, you wish for nothing more than for me to die. Xiao Fei sneered. Yes, I wish for nothing more than for you to die. It's good that you admit it. Since it's like this, what's you being targeted by the savage leopard got to do with me? Why should I have saved you? Let me ask you, if someone who wished for nothing more than to kill you was faced with a hopeless situation, would you save him? Duan Lingtiana smiled when he asked this question, but Xiao Fei's expressions was as unsightly could be. Looks like you already have the answer in your heart. Duan Lingtian nodded, the smile on his face slowly faded, and the grade 7 spirit sword in his hand trembled before descending before Xiao Fei. What do you want to do? Traces of coldness arose within Xiao Fei's heart when he saw Duan Lingtian's actions, and a sense of terror was on his face as he shouted in question. Duan Lingtian, Xilan and Hu Li were shocked by Duan Lingtian's actions as well. Even though they were extremely displeased with Xiao Fei, they never thought of killing Xiao Fei. What do I want to do? The corners of Duan Lingtian's mouth curled into an evil smile when he heard Xiao Fei's naive words. Xiao Fei, are you really so naive? You repeatedly tried to cause harm to me, and I repeatedly endured it. Now that I've reached the end of my endurance, could it be that I still can't make you taste your own medicine? You want to kill me? Xiao Fei was muddled, and in the next moment, his eyes squinted and a trace of icy coldness appeared within them. He shouted in a low voice, "You can't kill me. The 7-star sword sect has rules stating that even if there's great enmity between disciples, unless they enter the life and death arena, disciples may not kill one another." Sect rules. Life and death arena. Duan Lingtian shook his head and looked at Xiao Fei in ridicule. Xiao Fei, if I kill you within this primeval forest and then reduce your corpse to ashes to destroy all evidence. So long as Xilan and Hu Li don't make it known to anyone, would there be a fourth person who would know that it was I who killed you? Naive. Xiao Fei's expression went deathly pale. Exactly, if he were to die in the primeval forest, how would the 7-star sword sect know that he was killed by Duan Lingtian? Xilan, Hu Li. Xiao Fei looked at Xilan and Hu Li as if he was grabbing onto the last life-saving straw. You two can't let me die. Don't you two forget that my older brother knows that I've followed the two of you to the primeval forest. If he doesn't see me return, he'll surely suspect the two of you. At that time, none of you will be able to escape. Xilan and Hu Li's faces went slightly pale. Only now did they recall that Xiao Fei still had an older brother. Duan Lingtian looked at Xilan and Hu Li. A trace of fear appeared within Hu Li's eyes, and he slowly said, Duan Lingtian, Xiao Fei does indeed have an older brother, and he's also a Fecta Peak disciple. He's a 6th level origin core martial artist. As he finished speaking, Hu Li's tone was filled with fear. As far as he was concerned, even though Duan Lingtian was able to kill the savage leopard by relying on the grade 7 spirit sword in his hand and even revealed a formidable attack that was comparable to the strength of 90 ancient mammoths. Duan Lingtian's true cultivation was only at the 5th level of the origin core stage after all. Whereas that older brother of Xiao Fei's, although his strength was similar to the savage leopard, he was a human martial artist. In terms of speed, Xiao Fei's older brother wasn't inferior to the savage leopard. In terms of attack, Xiao Fei's older brother was a 6th level origin core martial artist. Even if he didn't use a spirit weapon, he would still be able to exert a strength of 80 ancient mammoths, comparable to the savage leopard. If he were to use a spirit weapon, he could gain an additional strength of 20 ancient mammoths. In other words, relying on a grade 7 spirit sword, the attack of Xiao Fei's older brother was comparable to the strength of a little over 100 ancient mammoths. And it was far from something Duan Lingtian could compare to. 6th level of the origin core stage. Duan Lingtian's brows knitted. Even if a 6th level origin core martial artist were to utilize a grade 7 spirit weapon to exert his full strength, it would only be comparable to the strength of a little over 100 ancient mammoths. Relying on a grade 7 spirit weapon, Duan Lingtian was able to exert a strength of 90 ancient mammoths, and once he used the worm python form's quake energy, he might not necessarily be unable to battle with Xiao Fei's older brother. Thus, Duan Lingtian wasn't afraid of Xiao Fei's older brother. Haha. Duan Lingtian looked at Xiao Fei, then he looked at Xilan and Hu Li. Do you two think that if I let him off today, based on his previous behavior, he won't ask his older brother to take revenge upon us? Duan Lingtian wasn't afraid of Xiao Fei's older brother, but it didn't mean that Xi Li and Hu Li weren't afraid. Now he only wanted to remove any cause for future trouble for Xilan and Hu Li. After all, he really took both Xilan and Hu Li to be his friends in his heart, and he hoped for them not to receive any harm due to today's incident. Duan Lingtian added when he noticed that Xilan and Hu Li were slightly hesitant, how about this, I'll kill Xiao Fei. After you two return, if his older brother looks for the two of you, tell him that the two of you got separated from Xiao Fei while within the primeval forest. Say that Xiao Fei ran off with me, and ask his older brother to come look for me at Megrez Peak. Duan Lingtian thought that the reason Xilan and Hu Li were hesitant was because they were worried that once Xiao Fei died, Xiao Fei's older brother would look for them. So he was helping them remove any possible trouble. Duan Lingtian, what are you talking about? We're a team, and we share all difficulties together. We would absolutely not sell you out. Instantly, Hu Li was slightly unhappy when he heard what Duan Lingtian said. Exactly, we'll absolutely not do that. Xilan spoke out as well, and her pretty face was slightly unhappy. Duan Lingtian's heart was warm when he saw the appearances of the two, and he smiled apologetically. I spoke wrongly. However, this Xiao Fei is atrocious. After he returns, we can't be sure that he won't look for trouble with us. In my opinion, we ought to slice his throat and remove any future troubles. I agree. Hu Li nodded, then he coldly swept Xiao Fei with his gaze and was without a shred of pity. No, I won't. Xiao Fei's face went deathly pale when he heard Duan Lingtian's group of three discussing whether or not to kill him. The arrogance, coldness, and indifference on his face completely vanished, and replacing it was terror. I swear. So long as you all don't kill me, I'll absolutely not seek revenge from all of you once I return. Absolutely not. Otherwise, I won't die a peaceful death. 277 Chapter 278, Returning to the Seven-Star Sword Sect. At this moment, Xiao Fei was completely afraid. Earlier, he dared go toe-to-toe with Duan Lingtian because he'd never thought that Duan Lingtian would have thoughts of killing him. Now, the approaching death caused him to feel fear that came from the bottom of his heart. He didn't want to die. Even though he was crippled, even though he would be unable to accomplish anything in the future, he still didn't want to die. Once he died, he would have nothing. I beg you, Duan Lingtian, I beg you. Don't kill me. Xiao Fei looked at Duan Lingtian and hysterically wailed as he ceaselessly pleaded for mercy. His face was incomparably ghastly pale, and he only hoped that Duan Lingtian would show mercy and let him off. The corners of Duan Lingtian's mouth curled into a cold smile. He never imagined that this Xiao Fei would be a contemptible wretch that only seemed strong on the outside. This caused Duan Lingtian to be contemptuous towards Xiao Fei from the bottom of his heart. If Xiao Fei had maintained his arrogant appearance from earlier, he might have still respected Xiao Fei slightly. Now, he even lacked the interest to kill Xiao Fei. Even though it was so, he knew that if not for himself, he would still kill Xiao Fei for the sake of Xilan and Hu Li. This Xiao Fei will eventually be a scourge so long as he lives. Xiao Fei moved his target onto Xilan and Hu Li when he noticed Duan Lingtian being completely indifferent, and he pleaded with a trembling voice, Xilan, Hu Li, the incident from before was completely my fault, it's all my fault. I beg the two of you. Ask Duan Lingtian to let me off, please. I don't want to die, I really don't want to die. I beg the two of you. Quote. HMPH. Hu Li coldly swept Xiao Fei with his gaze, then he paid no further attention to him. Xilan's gaze was complicated, and a trace of being unable to bear the sight of Xiao Fei being killed appeared on her face. Xiao Fei noticed Xilan's expression, and a trace of a light of hope arose deep within his eyes, then he struggled as he tumbled before Xilan, causing his entire face to be bloodied. Xiao Fei raised his head that was covered in blood and revealed traces of regret as he looked at Xilan. Xilan, I beg of you. Save me, I beg of you. I really don't want to die, I beg of you. As he pleaded for mercy, Xiao Fei fiercely knocked his forehead onto the floor and quickly poured out a pool of blood. Duan Lingtian frowned when he saw this scene. He was deeply afraid that Xilan would really be deceived by Xiao Fei. His face instantly sank as he said, in a low voice, Xiao Fei, do you think that self-torture is of any use? Xilan, I beg you. However, Xiao Fei seemed as if he had not heard what Duan Lingtian said, and he ceaselessly kowtowed to Xilan with a face that revealed traces of melancholy. Help me for the sake of all the times I've helped you and Hu Li in the past. I really don't want to die. Xiao Fei, you helped us. Which time did you not choose the things first when you entered the primeval forest with us, and which time did you not choose the most valuable materials first? Hu Li's face sank when he heard Xiao Fei. Why talk so much nonsense with him? Just slice his throat. Duan Lingtian's gaze was slightly cold as he took a large stride forward, and the 3-foot-long blade in his hand flickered with a cold luster. Xilan. Xiao Fei's face went deathly pale when he noticed Duan Lingtian walking over, and he looked at Shilan, making his last effort to plead with a face full of melancholy. I really don't want to die. Save me, save me. I swear, so long as you all don't kill me, I'll absolutely not look for trouble with all of you in the future, and I won't ask my older brother to look for trouble with all of you either. Swear, Duan Lingtian sneered. Could a swear that was made by such an atrocious person while facing the threat of death be trusted? At any case, he didn't believe it. Duan Lingtian. Suddenly, a voice sounded out. It was Shilan who spoke. Duan Lingtian frowned, then he looked at Shilan. Shilan, you don't really believe his nonsense, right? This person can't be spared, he'll only be a scourge if he's spared. Shilan took a deep breath, then she looked at Xiao Fei's face that was completely tainted with blood and sighed as she faintly said, Duan Lingtian, what Xiao Fei did today is indeed difficult to forgive. But the three of us are fine after all, whereas Xiao Fei had a leg severed. I believe he's already received his lesson. Let him off, okay. Xiao Fei's eyes lit up when he heard Shilan pleading on his behalf, and looked at Duan Lingtian, taking advantage of the opportunity. Duan Lingtian, I'll surely not look for trouble with all of you again, surely. Let him go. Duan Lingtian looked at Xiao Fei, then frowned. Shilan, it doesn't make a difference to me if we let him off. But he'll always be an unstable factor for the two of you. Your decision will very likely bring trouble for you and Hu Li. Duan Lingtian, I know you're concerned about me and Hu Li. But Xiao Fei has already sworn earlier, Shilan added. A bitter smile appeared on the corners of Duan Lingtian's mouth. Shilan actually believed Xiao Fei's swear. Duan Lingtian looked at Hu Li, and asked, Hu Li, what do you think? Hu Li went silent, as he was moved by Shilan's words as well. He then looked at Xiao Fei's leg that was torn off by the savage leopard and sighed before looking at Duan Lingtian and shaking his head. Instantly, Duan Lingtian understood what Hu Li meant. Never mind, since the two of you want to show compassion, then I won't play the part of a villain. Duan Lingtian sighed, then he put away the grade 7 spirit sword that was in his hand, and his gaze slowly descended onto Xiao Fei. Xiao Fei couldn't help but heave a sigh of relief when he heard what Duan Lingtian said. When he saw Duan Lingtian put away the 3-foot-long blade, he collapsed powerlessly on the ground with eyes that were suffused with joy from survival. Xiao Fei. Duan Lingtian's voice was cold and indifferent like ice, causing Xiao Fei to shudder. He looked at Duan Lingtian with lingering fear. He didn't dare spear harshly before Duan Lingtian. He already knew that although this Duan Lingtian was young, he was extremely decisive and vicious in conduct. Earlier, if it wasn't for Shilan and Hu Li both not wanting to kill him, it would be impossible for him to survive now. I'm warning you, after we return, don't get any ideas. Otherwise, I'll surely make you die a graveless death. As Duan Lingtian spoke, a terrifying, bloodthirsty killing intent arose from Duan Lingtian's body to envelop Xiao Fei, oppressing Xiao Fei to the point that his face went pale and his eyes emitted terror. No matter what, Xiao Fei was unable to imagine how this young man that looked around 20 would be able to possess such a terrifying killing intent. How many people has he actually killed? He didn't dare imagine it. Are the two of you continuing into the primeval forest, or returning? When Duan Lingtian looked at Shilan and Hu Li, the killing intent on his face vanished, replacing it was a warm smile. Let's return. Shilan slightly lacked the mood to continue, as today's incident caused her to feel exhausted. Hu Li nodded in agreement. Then let's return. Duan Lingtian nodded, then he walked shoulder to shoulder with Shilan and Hu Li as they turned around to walk towards the outside of the primeval forest. As for Xiao Fei, after the figures of Duan Lingtian's group of 3 disappeared before his eyes, he relied on the grade 7 spirit sword in his hand to support his body as he stood up. Then used the grade 7 spirit sword in place of his severed leg, to slowly walk out of the primeval forest. He understood in his heart that with his current condition, continuing to stay here was absolutely courting death. Duan Lingtian, Shilan, Hu Li, I, Xiao Fei, will absolutely not let all of you live comfortably. All of you, wait to receive the wrath of my older brother. Xiao Fei wiped off the blood stains on his face, and traces of killing intent and hatred flashed within his eyes. The current Xiao Fei was like a completely different person from the Xiao Fei who pleaded for mercy earlier. Outside the primeval forest, Duan Lingtian's group of 3 let out a breath of relief, as after leaving the primeval force, there was no need to continue being vigilant of fierce beasts. Their strained nerves had all relaxed. Duan Lingtian, you're too formidable. Your current age ought to be only around 20, right? Shi Lan looked at Duan Ling Tian with a face full of admiration and adoration. I'll be 20 in another month. Duan Ling Tian lightly smiled as he nodded. 20 in another month. What Duan Ling Tian said caused Shi Lan and Hu Li to be petrified instantly. Even though they'd once suspected that Duan Ling Tian might not be 20, when they really heard Duan Ling Tian admit it himself, their hearts couldn't help but tremble like raging waves arising on the surface of a calm sea. They were unable to calm down even after a long time. Not 20 yet, 5th level of the origin core stage. It seemed that even the word, monstrous, wasn't enough to describe such natural talent. Abnormal. Hu Li pondered for a long time and finally gave Duan Ling Tian this word. Duan Ling Tian touched his nose in embarrassment. Looks like no matter where he went, he was unable to avoid being implicated with the word abnormal. Duan Ling Tian, how the heck do you cultivate? Shi Lan was filled with shock towards Duan Ling Tian being able to attain such achievements at such an age, but she was even more curious about Duan Ling Tian's cultivation experience. I don't know either. I casually cultivated and I cultivated to this extent. Duan Ling Tian shrugged, then he shook his head and smiled. Shi Lan, within the Cloud Continent, the natural talent of martial artists are different. Duan Ling Tian's natural talent is absolutely the first-rate type. This is something we can't get no matter how much we admire it. Hu Li shook his head, as he knew his limitations. Even though it's like that, this difference is too big, right? Shi Lan blinked her beautiful eyes that were filled with elegance as she looked at Duan Ling Tian with a face full of jealousy and envy. Before long, their group of 3 returned to the foot of the 7-star sword sect's main peak, Dubi Peak. Shi Lan, Hu Li, you two shouldn't have let that Xiao Fei off today. I have the feeling that he won't let the matter go. Duan Ling Tian recalled the matter from earlier and was slightly regretful in his heart. He should have slit Xiao Fei's throat earlier, then he wouldn't have to have so many worries like he did now. Duan Ling Tian, that Xiao Fei indeed deserves death. But his appeared earlier was really too pitiable, and we didn't receive any harm. I think his offense doesn't warrant death. Shi Lan faintly sighed, and her eyes revealed a trace of an emotional luster. Duan Ling Tian smiled bitterly. Are all women so emotional? Duan Ling Tian, I know you're worried about us. But within the 7-star sword sect, it may be presumed that Xiao Fei and his older brother wouldn't dare act rashly. Hu Li lightly smiled to Duan Ling Tian. I hope so. Duan Ling Tian nodded. Milk was already spilled, and thus it was of no use for him to continue thinking about it. Moreover, even if he went back now, it would probably be difficult to find Xiao Fei again. 278 Chapter 279, Zhao Lin's Plot. After ascending Dubi Peak, Duan Ling Tian bid his farewells to Shi Lan and Hu Li before walking toward the stone platform where the chain bridge that led to Megrez Peak was situated. Even though it wasn't the first time Duan Ling Tian walked on this chain bridge, shock still couldn't help but arise within his heart. Standing on the chain bridge and gazing at the mountains near the 7-star sword sect, he felt as if all the mountains within his view were small. After walking past the chain bridge, Duan Ling Tian stepped onto Megrez Peak. Duan Ling Tian had only just stepped onto the Megrez Peak's stone platform when he noticed a fierce gaze flashing over from afar to descend onto him. Duan Ling Tian raised his head to look over. A figure walked slowly towards him. This was a middle-aged man who had arrogance mixed between his brows and a very lofty appearance. It's him. Duan Ling Tian frowned. He had an impression of this middle-aged man. Yesterday, he met this person briefly at this very place. At that time, this person was with the Megrez Peak's outer court elder, Zhao Lin. This middle-aged man seems to be a Megrez Peak outer court elder as well. Wasn't he called Zhao Lin? In next to no time, Duan Ling Tian noticed that this Zhao Lin had directly walked over to stand before him. He noticed that there were actually traces of a burning, flowing light vaguely mixed deep within Zhao Lin's gaze, and within these burning flowing lights, a trace of greed was revealed. Duan Ling Tian heart jerked. This Zhao Lin obviously was plotting something. Even though he didn't know now what objective this Zhao Lin had, he still became vigilant subconsciously. Duan Ling Tian. As Zhao Lin stood in front of Duan Ling Tian, his arrogant gaze descended onto him, and his voice had a sense of a condescending tone as if one of high position was talking to one of low position. Needless to say, Zhao Lin's tone was extremely displeasing to Duan Ling Tian. Duan Ling Tian calmly crossed eyes with Zhao Lin, then asked indifferently, Elder Zhao Lin, is there something you're looking for me for? Zhao Lin noticed Duan Ling Tian's current attitude and frowned. An outer court disciple had actually used such a casual tone to talk with him. But when he thought of his objective, Zhao Lin suppressed the displeasure in his heart and said to Duan Lingtian, "Follow me." After he finished speaking, Zhao Lin turned around to walk towards a remote area on Megrez Peak. Zhao Lin's words were more like ordering Duan Lingtian. Duan Lingtian calmly looked at Zhao Lin walking off, but he didn't follow, as doubt arose within his heart. This Zhao Lin, when I met him yesterday, he only glanced at me, then he regarded me as beneath his notice. Today, why'd he suddenly become so interested in me? He wouldn't be. Recalling how his skin was as smooth as jade and more delicate than a woman's, Duan Lingtian felt a burst of disgust in his heart. This Zhao Lin wouldn't have that sort of hobby, right? Thinking up to this point, Duan Lingtian naturally wouldn't follow him. In next to no time, Zhao Lin noticed that Duan Lingtian wasn't following him. When he turned around and saw Duan Lingtian still standing on the spot, his face became incomparably gloomy. This outer court disciple actually dared disobey his orders. A burst of rage arose within Zhao Lin's heart. Within Megrez Peak, there has never been an outer court disciple that dared disobey his orders. Zhao Lin took a deep breath and suppressed his rage, then he slowly walked over before looking at Duan Lingtian. "I asked you to follow me earlier. Did you not hear me?" Hard of hearing. Thinking of how Duan Lingtian might have the thing he wanted, or perhaps knew where the thing he wanted was, he gave Duan Lingtian sufficient patience. "Elder Zhao Ling, if you have anything to say, then say it here. I'll absolutely not follow you." Duan Lingtian frowned and didn't beat around the bush as he spoke out with a sense of justice to Zhao Lin. Zhao Lin's face went grim as he shouted in a low voice, "Presumptuous." Along with Zhao Lin's shout, many Megrez Peak outer court disciples gathered over, and their curious gazes descended onto Duan Lingtian. Who's this pretty boy, actually daring to infuriate Elder Zhao Lin? Elder Zhao Lin is famous for his bad temper within our Megrez Peak. This pretty boy is simply courting death by daring to offend him. Looks like there's a good show to see today. The crowd of Megrez Peak disciples that had gathered over craved nothing more than chaos. Zhao Lin's face sank when he saw many people gathered in the surroundings, and a trace of worry flashed within his eyes as he shouted in a low voice, "What are all of you gathering over here for? Go away." Duan Lingtian clearly saw the worry that flashed within Zhao Lin's eyes. Instantly, his heart jerked. Could it really have been guessed correctly by him? This Megrez Peak outer court elder, Zhao Lin, actually had that sort of hobby. For a moment, Duan Lingtian felt a chill up his spine, and he secretly cursed in his heart. Looks like I really have to bathe under the sun. My body that's been reborn after consuming the 10,000-year stalactite milk has actually attracted the greed of this Zhao Lin. This Zhao Lin looks normal, but I never imagined that he would have that sort of hobby. After confirming that Zhao Lin was plotting against him, Duan Lingtian naturally wouldn't allow the surrounding Megrez Peak disciples to leave. "Elder Zhao Lin, there's nothing that cannot be exposed between us. Why do you want them to leave?" What Duan Lingtian said caused that crowd of Megrez Peak disciples who planned to leave due to Zhao Lin's power and influence to stop moving. What does he mean by this? I don't know, The surrounding Megrez Peak disciples looked at Duan Lingtian and then at Zhao Lin with faces full of bewilderment. "What? I need you to teach me how to do things." Zhao Lin's face sank when he heard Duan Lingtian questioning his decision, and he flew into a rage. "Elder Zhao Lin, I naturally don't dare teach you how to do things. But right here today, I want to make something clear. Even though my skin is slightly whiter, absolutely don't have such hobbies. So, Elder Zhao Lin, you should give up on this, as I won't follow you." As Duan Lingtian spoke, he rubbed his hands together in absolute terror, then looked at Zhao Lin with a face full of disgust. As far as he was concerned, so long as he shed light towards Zhao Lin's true colors, Zhao Lin would give up on any intention of coveting him. Swoosh! Duan Lingtian's words were like a stone that gave rise to 1,000 ripples, causing the surrounding Megrez Peak disciples to be dumbstruck. The gazes with which the Megrez Peak disciples used to gaze at Zhao Lin became incomparably strange. So this Elder Zhao Lin has that sort of hobby. I really never noticed before this. Looks like the reason why he got infuriated with this pretty boy earlier was because this pretty boy refused him. This pretty boy is really misfortunate. His skin is whiter and more delicate, but his other aspects are filled with manliness. But just because of this, he actually encountered the coveting of Elder Zhao Lin. All of you, don't speak about it anymore, I feel disgusted just thinking about it. The crowd of Megre's Peak disciples could now be considered to have completely understood. Their gazes towards Duan Lingtian were filled with pity. It looked like having skin that was too white wasn't a good thing, as when you encounter people from a special group, like Elder Zhao Lin, there was still a certain level of danger. Brother, I feel sorry for you. A Megre's Peak disciple that stood near Duan Lingtian looked at Duan Lingtian as he shook his head and sighed. Brother, why don't you obey Elder Zhao Lin? Elder Zhao Lin is an elder of our Megre's Peak. If you follow him, won't you be able to be unhindered within Megre's Peak? Another Megre's Peak disciple winked at Duan Lingtian. I'll leave such an opportunity to you. Duan Lingtian rolled his eyes at that Megre's Peak disciple, as he didn't have such hobbies. What Duan Lingtian said, and the jokes of the surrounding Megre's Peak disciples, entered Zhao Lin's ears and eyes, and it also allowed him to understand what had happened. This Duan Lingtian actually thought he had such hobbies. Further looking at the weird gazes shot at him from the Megre's Peak disciples, for a moment, Zhao Lin was angered to the point that his face was livid. He'd been in the 7-star sword sect for so many years, but when had he ever greatly lost face like this? What nonsense are all of you talking? Zhao Lin's face sank, and his sonorous voice that contained an awe-inspiring coldness mixed within sounded out. Instantly, everyone present shut their mouths. But their gazes upon Zhao Lin were still so strange, so detested, and so disgusted. Now, they naturally thought that Zhao Lin had gotten angry from embarrassment. Elder Zhao Lin, Duan Lingtian looked at Zhao Lin and shook his head. Actually, I can understand you having such hobbies. Really, although I don't have such hobbies, in my hometown, there are many people similar to you. However, they wouldn't take it as a disgrace, and most of us don't look down upon them because of this. The hometown that Duan Lingtian spoke of now was naturally the Earth from his previous lifetime. On Earth, homosexuality wasn't a rare thing. Although Duan Lingtian didn't agree with it, he wouldn't look down upon them, as everyone had the right to choose how they lived, and others had no right to interfere. What, Elder Zhao Lin, you don't believe me? Duan Lingtian noticed that Zhao Lin still looked angrily at him. It looked like Zhao Lin wished for nothing more than to pull out his tendons and peel his skin, and he hurriedly added, Elder Zhao Lin, what I'm saying is the truth. Actually, you don't have to be embarrassed. I can understand, I really can understand. I believe that these senior brothers and junior brothers are able to understand as well, right? As Duan Lingtian spoke, he looked towards the crowd of Megre's Peak disciples. These Megre's Peak disciples were originally terrified in their hearts when they noticed Zhao Lin getting enraged, but now that they heard what Duan Lingtian said, they instantly took hold of the opportunity. Exactly, Elder Zhao Ling, you don't have to feel embarrassed, we can understand. We can understand it. Actually, it isn't a big deal, isn't it, only liking men and not liking women? Elder Zhao Lin, don't worry, we will surely support you. The crowd of Megre's Peak disciples all consoled Zhao Lin one by one. Elder Zhao Lin, Duan Lingtian withstood Zhao Lin's ghastly gaze as he braced himself and said, look, listen. So many brothers weren't really surprised when they found out you had such hobbies, as everyone understands you and support you. You all. Zhao Lin's face flushed red as if someone was choking him by the neck, and his eyes sprang wide open as he pointed at Duan Lingtian and the surrounding Megre's Peak disciples. 279 Chapter 280, Lingering Like a Ghost. In the end, Zhao Lin's lifeblood roiled and he was forcefully enraged by Duan Lingtian and the group of Megre's Peak disciples to the point that he spat out a mouthful of blood. Blood splattered all over the floor, dazzling and resplendent. All of the Megre's Peak disciples, including Duan Lingtian, were struck dumb when they saw this scene. Elder Zhao Lin, we didn't deceive you, we really. One Megre's Peak disciple foolishly looked at Zhao Lin, but he hadn't finished speaking when he noticed Zhao Lin's fierce gaze sweeping over, and he hurriedly shut his mouth obediently. Very good, I'll come look for you again. Zhao Lin took a deep breath and swept Duan Lingtian with a cold and indifferent gaze before leaving. The surrounding crowd of Megre's Peak disciples opened up a path. After Zhao Lin left, the crowd of Megre's Peak disciples looked at Duan Lingtian with eyes that had a sense of pity mixed within. Brother, looks like Elder Zhao Lin won't let you off so easily. Take care. Brother, you can only rely on yourself, we're sympathetic but unable to help. Brother, when you're reborn in your next life, don't be so white. Even women would probably be envious of your skin. Perhaps it's precisely because of this that you would be coveted by Elder Zhao Lin. One by one, all the Megrez Peak disciples spoke to Duan Lingtian. When they noticed Duan Lingtian standing on the spot, dumbstruck, without any reaction, they shook their heads before turning and leaving. Looks like he's already been scared stiff by Elder Zhao Lin. I really don't know if he's misfortunate or lucky. There's so many disciples on our Megrez Peak, but Elder Zhao Lin only took a fancy upon him. That's why men must be sure not to be too white, otherwise, they'll encounter the coveting of people like Elder Zhao Lin. As these Megrez Peak disciples left, they couldn't help but slightly sigh with emotion. Eventually, Duan Lingtian recovered from his thoughts. The gaze Zhao Lin used to look at him right before leaving caused Duan Lingtian to realize that this matter seemed not to be so simple. Could it be that he doesn't have that sort of hobby? I've misunderstood him. Duan Lingtian was able to discern that when Zhao Lin was angered to the point of spitting blood, the gloomy gaze that condensed within his eyes weren't the gaze of becoming angry from embarrassment. And Zhao Lin's expression later on didn't seem like a person with that sort of hobby either. But if he doesn't have that sort of hobby, why would there be that sort of greedy gaze when he looked at me? Duan Lingtian was filled with bewilderment. No matter how he thought about it, he couldn't wrap his head around it. However, this time, I can be considered to have completely offended that Zhao Lin. Duan Lingtian shook his head and the corners of his mouth curled into a bitter smile, but he didn't pay too much attention to it. That Zhao Lin was an outer court disciple of the Megrez Peak after all, and with the sect rules of the 7-star sword sect in place, he ought to not dare to lynch him in public. Duan Lingtian heaved a sigh of relief before walking off in large strides, preparing to return to the stalactite cave. Duan Lingtian had an uncomfortable feeling in his heart when he recalled Zhao Lin, and after he observed his surroundings for a moment, he gritted his teeth and then walked towards any place that had many people. After spending an entire half an hour, my spiritual force is too weak to sense void-prying martial artists, so if there was a void-prying martial artist following me, I wouldn't notice it in the slightest. But even if it's a void-prying martial artist, it isn't so easy to follow me. Duan Lingtian was confident that after this half an hour of winding around, even if that Zhao Lin was following him, Zhao Lin would have surely been shook off by him. As the king of weapons specialists on Earth in his previous life, Duan Lingtian had confidence. Before long, Duan Lingtian was at ease as he found a small road and directly headed towards the peak of Megrez Peak. If that Zhao Lin was really following him, Zhao Lin would probably never be able to imagine that his place of cultivation and residence was actually at the peak of Megrez Peak. At the same time that Duan Lingtian arrived at the peak, somewhere on the mountainside, Zhao Lin stood there with a gloomy and unsightly expression. That kid actually shook me off. Could it be that he noticed me? When he recalled everything that happened earlier, Duan Lingtian practically only chose places with many people to walk through, and he was slightly suspicious in his heart. Now, Duan Lingtian ran off in front of his eyes and shook him off, causing the suspicion in his heart to deepen. That kid is an origin core martial artist at most. How could he possibly be able to shake me off? It's surely his good luck. Zhao Lin took a deep breath and made a decision in his heart. No matter what, he didn't believe that a young man around the age of 20 was able to shake him off. He was a void-prying martial artist. At this moment, Duan Lingtian had returned to the stalactite cave within the cliff. He glanced at the two little pythons that were sound asleep and then shook his head with a bitter smile on his face. Subsequently, he sat on the stone platform and started cultivating 9 Dragons War Sovereign Technique, Worm Python Form. While cultivating, through the memories of Rebirth Martial Emperor, Duan Lingtian noticed something. So it turned out that the quake energy that the third form of the 9 Dragons War Sovereign Technique, the Worm Python Form, gave him was able to be advanced as well. When he was at the 4th level of the Origin Core stage, it only allowed the origin energy in his body to develop quake energy. And later on, as his cultivation advances, the quake energy will advance as well. Right now I'm only at the 4th level of the Origin Core stage, but the quake energy is already so formidable. If it continues to advance, won't the quake energy be even more heaven-defying? Duan Lingtian's eyes sprang open, his gaze abruptly shone, and his face was filled with joy and anticipation. Today, when he entered the primeval forest, he deeply experienced the might of the quake energy, and it was absolutely worthy of being called heaven-defying. Originally, with his cultivation at the 3rd level of the Origin Core stage and relying upon his Grade 8 Spirit Sword, he still wasn't able to penetrate the skin and flesh of that 4th level Origin Core stage elephant rhino. But when he utilized the quake energy, the Great Eight Spirit Sword easily penetrated the skull of the elephant rhino and even shattered the skull to kill it. Quake energy was an extremely overbearing method of strength utilization. A method that transcended martial skills. And that 6th level origin core stage savage leopard was the same, as it was directly killed by him as if he was slicing through tofu. Thinking up to this point, Duan Lingtian worked even harder as he cultivated. With my current natural talent that has reached the utmost limit, by relying upon the origin strengthening pills with a purity of 90% and above, I'll surely be able to smoothly break through to the 5th level of the origin core stage within 3 months. Duan Lingtian was filled with confidence towards his current self. Since he consumed the 10,000-year stalactite milk, his natural talent was already no longer what it was before. Cultivate. Duan Lingtian once again closed his eyes and started to cultivate painstakingly. He only woke up after cultivating until the next day, as he was awakened by hunger. After casually roasting and eating a suckling pig, Duan Lingtian burped from being full, then he left the stalactite cave, left the peak, and intended to head towards the Megrez Peaks Trade Hall, the vast building behind the chain bridge. When he exited the primeval forest yesterday, he, Shilan, and Huli had shared their gains within the primeval forest equally. Originally, Shilan and Huli intended to give the beast cores of both the savage leopard and elephant rhino to him, but they were refused by him, because that wouldn't be considered sharing equally. In the end, he only took the beast core of the savage leopard. Now he intended to head to the trade hall and use the savage leopard's beast core to exchange for some materials. The materials he needed were precisely the materials needed for the Blaze inscription. The Blaze inscription was an offensive inscription that was capable of annihilating half-step void stage martial artists. The main material of the Blaze inscription was the silver fire grass, and on the way to the 7-star sword sect, he's already obtained it in Blackwind City's Ma Clan auction house's auction. Even though he'd prepared some of the remaining materials, one of the materials was incomplete. If he wanted to inscribe the Blaze inscription, then that material must be sufficient. So he thought of Megrez Peaks Trade Hall. Within the trade hall, besides being able to use materials to exchange for medicinal pills and spirit weapons from alchemist elders and weapons craftsmen elders, Megrez Peak disciples would frequently conduct trades amongst themselves. The beast core of the savage leopard couldn't be considered as precious, but it was extremely rare. As for the material that Duan Lingtian required, although it was rare, it didn't have much use to alchemists and weapons craftsmen. So Duan Lingtian only spent half an hour before successfully obtaining it. Using a material that he had no use of to exchange for the savage leopard beast core in Duan Lingtian's possession caused that Megrez Peak disciple to have a smile bloom on his face. Duan Lingtian's face revealed a smile as well. He finally was able to inscribe the Blaze inscription. Right when Duan Lingtian was anxious to return and intended to return and inscribe the Blaze inscription, he once again saw Zhao Lin. He's really lingering like a ghost. Zhao Lin obstructed his path, and his gaze descended onto him. Duan Lingtian didn't avoid him and directly walked over before asking while frowning, "Elder Zhao Lin, do you need something?" Now he was practically able to confirm that Zhao Lin ought to not have that sort of special hobby. But why would this Zhao Lin have his sights on him? This was something Duan Lingtian found difficult to understand. So now he urgently wanted to know the reason. Duan Lingtian. Zhao Lin looked at Duan Lingtian with a gloomy expression, and when he recalled what happened yesterday, his eyes couldn't help but emit a strand of dense killing intent. The incident from yesterday had already spread throughout the entire Megrez Peak now. No matter which part of Megrez Peak he went to now, he could notice a multitude of strange gazes upon him. He was convinced that if things went on like this, it wouldn't take long before the entire 7-star sword sect would think he really had that sort of hobby. His reputation was practically ruined. Moreover, the cause of all this was the young man that was currently standing before him, an ordinary Megrez Peak disciple. He already had a decision in his heart. Once his objective was achieved and he obtained the thing he wanted, he would surely find a way to kill this Megrez Peak disciple to vent the hatred in his heart. Duan Lingtian had experienced 2 lifetimes and was even a weapon specialist who survived rains of bullets and seas of blood and corpses, so he naturally was able to sense the killing intent within Zhao Lin's eyes. Instantly, his face sank. "Elder Zhao Lin, speak frankly if you have something to say." Zhao Lin took a deep breath, and his fierce gaze descended onto Duan Lingtian's figure as he spoke in a low voice. "I can let go of the matter from yesterday. But you must pay the price for this. My demand isn't high, I only want you to hand over the 10,000-year stalactite milk."